For John! Gone, but not forgotten. Minecraft Zombies. Chapter 1. It was dark, moonless night when the stranger came into Plaintown. Bobby was done with her daily chores, and her baby brother was fast asleep. For the first time all day, the house was still and quiet, and Bobby found her gaze drifting out of her bedroom window. She saw movement beyond the torchlight. At first, she thought it was her eyes playing tricks on her. It was hard to see anything in the night like this one, and when the moon was blocked by dark clouds and torches set up around town, you only served the deep in the sad shadows. She grew closer to the window. She squinted in the darkness. There, she'd seen light. It wasn't a trick of the flickering torchlight, but it was Shepherd Ellis's sheep running loose again, and the person moving out of there. It was the movements of their strange. They shuffled slowly forward, reaching out with both arms as if for balance. Bobby thought it might be a zombie. She heard stories about the mindless, rotting creatures and the putrid green flesh that sunk in black eyes. They were dead things that stalked in the night and prey upon the living. It was revolted and curious. She leaned in closer for a look. As she watched the figure, it seemed to be totter and sway, like little baby Johnny had been taking his first steps, when it stumbled as if tripping over its own feet and dropped to the ground right beneath a lit torch. In the light, Bobby could see a figure clearly in the first time. It wasn't a zombie at all. It was a boy, and he didn't need help. Bobby's parents honked in protest as he ran past them and threw him open a door. She ignored them. She knew very well that if it wasn't rules for the villagers to leave the safety of their homes when the sun went down, but she also knew that she'd be forgiven the breaking rules if it helped someone in need. "Hello?" Bobby said to the approach of the fallen figure. "Can you hear me? I'm Barbara. Bobby." The figure raised his head. "Poison," he said weakly. The word chilled Bobby at her core. Poison. What if that someone had done this on purpose? "I need to get you to a cleric," he said. "Do you think you can make it? It isn't far." He took his arm and put it around her shoulder. Helping him back to his feet, he took shuffling, uncertain footsteps that was long and supported his weight. She knew he wouldn't fall again. She didn't let him fall. Plainstown's temple was only a few doors down her family's home. It didn't bother knocking. Cleric Avery, surprised by the intrusion, rushed to the stone stairs and questioned her. "He's been poisoned," Bobby explained. The cleric grumbled, gesturing toward the table. Bobby helped the stranger climb on top of it. His iron armor clanked against his wood surface, and the bright interior light of the temple could see how bad he looked. No wonder she thought he was a zombie. He looked half dead. Cleric Avery examined the boy, honking their conclusions at Bobby. "Wither," he said, doing his best to understand the cleric's gestures and utterances. "Is there a cure? Do you have a potion?" The cleric's answer surprised her, but she knew better than to ask if they were joking. In Bobby's experience, Cleric Avery didn't tell jokes. Bobby ran out into the night, heading to the northernmost edge of town. That's where the animals were kept. 2 sheep, twice as many chickens, and cows named Daisy. Bobby had never milked a cow at night before, but this is an emergency, and although Daisy gave her a funny look, the cow didn't complain. As soon as Bobby returned to the temple, Cleric forced the stranger to drink the milk straight from the bucket. "Did it work?" Bobby asked impatient. "Will you be all right?" The cleric grumbled in response. The worst of the danger was over. The milk had cured the wither poisoning, and the stranger was still weak. He needed rest. "In other words, it's time for me to leave," said Bobby. "I could take a hint, cleric." But she hesitated on her way out of the door, turning back to smile warmly at the villager. "Thank you for the help. I knew I could count on you." Cleric Avery grumbled again, uncomfortable with her until the cleric, like most of Plaintown's residents, did enjoy surprises, interruptions, and any other sort of deviation from their daily routines, and tonight's events were certainly unusual. Adventurers came through the village very often, so usually to trade for goods and use a crafting station. This was the first time an outsider had truly needed the villagers' help, though in Playtown it delivered. Bobby felt a rush of pride and satisfaction. She basked in the glow of the good deed she'd done well. He might feel differently, but she only known the trouble that a stranger would bring into her life. Chapter 2. Bobby was good at mending fences. She had a lot of practice. Plaintown was sleepy and simple and small, but it was located right in the heart of an open grassland where there's no trees or hills or mountains on the side of the view. Bobby had never seen a village in a great distance, but she could imagine it was visible for miles and miles, especially at night, when its torches would twinkle the stars against the landscape in dark as ink. Night was when the monsters roamed freely. She would hear them sometimes as she lay in bed trying to fall asleep. The click-clack clattering of the walking and stalking of skeletons, the hiss and scuttle of a spider that skittered across the roof. Once, she even seen an Enderman walking around the living room, and it made strange noises, proved some of her parents' furniture around, and then disappeared in the shower, a purple starburst. He didn't sleep a wink that night. Then there were the adventurers. Unlike villagers, adventurers had no permanent home and no real responsibilities. They wandered from place to place, and from what Bobby had seen, they had always prioritized manners along the way. They cut into holes into walls and fences to save walking just a few steps. They took whatever they liked from villagers' chests or garden and left their trash behind. They got into fights with monsters or with each other, oblivious to the damage they caused. Bobby wouldn't understand that. She would never go around breaking other people's things. But as long as things are broken in Plaintown, she'd be there to mend them. There you go, Shepherd Ellis, she said, and she set a final piece of the fence into place. She used oak so that a repair job would match the rest of the fence and everything else in the village. Aside from the bit of stone, the wall of Plaintown was made of oak. See? You can't even tell there's ever any damage. Shepherd Ellis hemmed and hawed the garbled language of the village. Bobby hadn't paid closer attention to get the gist of what the shepherd was saying. She nodded patiently, squinting into the sunlight. They can't have gone far, they never do, she said, but I'll find your sheep and bring them back, I promise. As Shepherd Ellis turned in to expect the repair job, Bobby strolled south, down to the dirt road and ran through the town. She waved at several neighbors as they milled around the town square, and there were large oak trees stood right in the center of the village. They called it the Heart Oak, and villagers often gathered beneath it to gossip about other before the day's work began. Good morning, folks, she said when he waved back. The village temple stood across from the tree. Bobby stepped inside it, calling out, Cleric Every, it's me, Bobby. The cleric looked up from her brewing stand, and there was some new potion bubbled and boiled. Where's our guest? Asked Bobby. Is he feeling better? The cleric honked and gestured around the agitation. He took off, Bobby said, and left his garbage behind. Bobby picked up a stack of discarded dirt blocks on the floor and sighed. So much for gratitude, she said. I guess we just have another adventure after all. Bobby slipped out of the door to continue her rounds. He visited Fletcher Lee, who was running low on feathers, and Mason Bradley, who proudly showed off the stone that he polished to shining. Cartographer Haven's house appeared empty. Hello? Bobby called. I'm just checking to make sure you're good on supplies. There was no answer. Bobby looked inside the cartographer's chest, and he found almost out of bread, and she'd have to bake some today. And then she lingered, looking around the bright room. There was a colorful space with paintings and potted flowers in a back bookshelf. She spun a needle in the desktop compass and examined the large map that had been affixed to the wall. Plaintown was only the smallest dot upon the map. It was almost impossible to fathom that everything Bobby knew would fit into such a tiny place. The world was so big. And the ocean. Nearly a third of the map was devoted to the swirling expanse of blue. And now that there was so much water in all the overworld, Bobby was so engrossed in her thoughts that she almost didn't hear it. A shuffling sound. The tiniest movement. Bobby wasn't alone. Hello? She said, turning around in a circle. She didn't see anyone. She stopped and listened. She could barely hear it, but it was there. The faintest sound was breathing. Hello? She said again, alerted at the sign of movement. Is someone there? With a gleeful gurgling noise, a small figure launched itself at Bobby. Leaping from the top of the nearby bookshelf, Bobby screeched in the surprise of the figure wrapped around his arms around her. Caught off balance, she stumbled, landing flat on her bottom. Her attacker laughed as they fell, squeezing her tighter. She'd been attacked, Bobby realized. It was being hugged. It was her baby brother who was involved, an easy mistake to make. Johnny, she cried. You almost gave me a heart attack. Her brother gurgled happily, as if he just won a game that Bobby hadn't realized they were playing. He hugged him back, and was an instant later she ducked out of her embrace and ran over to the desk, where he proceeded to climb into the discernible reason. What are you doing here? Bobby asked him. Do you want to make maps when you grow up? I bet you'd be a great cartographer. She watched to see if he would pick up a compass. At the moment, he seemed to be more interested in his own 2 feet. Bobby liked to imagine what her little brother might grow up to be. He saw potential clues in everything he did. Tap dancing on an anvil? Maybe he'd be a blacksmith. Cuddling up with a tuft of wool? Maybe he'd take over the Shepherd Ellis one day. As he watched Johnny jump around in the front of his leg of the map of the overworld, she felt relieved to know one thing is certain. Johnny might be adventurous, but he'd never grow up to be an adventurer. It simply doesn't happen. Villagers were villagers. Adventurers are adventurers, and one couldn't become the other. A good thing, too. Just as the thought of being partnered with brother made her heart hurt. The cartographer Haven appeared in the doorway, harrumping about the commotion and shooing of the siblings back inside. Sorry, Bobby said, laughing at the cartographer, shut the door in their faces. Bad baby, Bobby said and wagged her finger. She was smiling as she said it. Do your parents know where you are? Do they even know you left the house? Johnny giggled before turning and wandering off. To get out of the habit of wandering, Bobby tended to find him in the strangest places, climbing on roofs, balconies, chasing chickens, or jumping on beds. Bobby assumed it was a normal behavior for a baby, but it was exhausting to keep him up with him. She'd once spent an entire day trying to track him down, only to finally discover him napping inside the leatherworker Shane's cauldron. Shane still had to give him dirty looks, and Bobby couldn't really blame him. She watched him now and toddle up in the town golem. The goalie was Gentle Giant, the construct carved in iron who kept the watch over the town. Bobby slept in the sounder, knowing that goalie was there, always alert, always ready to protect the village and its inhabitants from any danger that found its way into Plaintown. Goalie stood at the head taller than any villager, and twice as tall as Johnny. It was broad shoulders and long, powerful limbs, but Johnny wasn't intimidated by the golem. As Bobby watched Goalie lead for the flower, a ripe red poppy, and Johnny, unafraid, walked up and plucked the flower from the Iron Giant's grasp. Remember your manners, Johnny. What do you say? Prodded Bobby. And when it was clear that Johnny had nothing to say, he turned to the Goalie. Thanks, Goalie. Without a mouth, Goalie didn't respond. In fact, it was usually impossible to know what the goal might be thinking. Bobby just thought of the golem's eyes glimmering whenever she spoke to it, though. Johnny ran off toward home, probably plotting all sorts of mischief on the way. But at least he was headed in the right direction. Bobby continued south, to the outskirts of town and beyond. The dirt road through the village ended up on the field grass of dandelions just past the library, away from the buildings. Bobby knew view stretched for miles across to the flat grassland, where there was literally no place for Ellis's sheep to hide. Bobby saw them grazing beside a small pond. Conveniently, there was fresh shoots of sugar cane growing along the pond's edge. Bobby could use them to make sugar or baking, or perhaps she could also make a gift for fresh paper for the cartographer to apologize for her brother's antics. She broke the sugar cane apart with her hands, stashing the material in her inventory before turning the attention to the sheep. "Come on, Bo, come on, Peep," and she said, "Vacation's over, time to go home." Bo gazed mutely at her, and Peep bowed definitely. Although she might have sounded backward, it was hard to tell the sheep apart. "Oh, fine, we can take a minute," said Bobby, and she settled down a bit beside the water. "You're just as stubborn as Johnny, and anyway, what's the point of trying to run off? What's out here that's so great?" She swept a hand over the plain, which went nearly as far as the eye could see for finally coming to an end in a distant mountain range. Bobby sighed. "I'll tell you what's out there. Chaos and danger. Greedy, reckless adventures, and things that want to eat you." She turned around toward the village. "Plaintown is home, and home is safe. You know what's expected of you? Today's tomorrow, and the day after that, because nothing ever changes." And Bobby stopped short. Even as she said the word, she saw that something had in fact changed. Something catastrophic had happened. "The tree," she said breathlessly. "The heart oak. It's on fire." Chapter 3. The heart of the Plaintown was burning. As Bobby ran to the village, she could scarcely believe her eyes, but there was no denying it. The heart oak had consumed a pillar of fire. Hungry tendrils of orange and yellow flicked upward into the sky. Although not all those tendrils reached the skyward, Bobby could see the flames spreading toward the tree and the grass that surrounded it. Fire fanned along the ground. All of Plaintown was made of oak. "Our homes will be flammable," Bobby cried. She turned to the shocked villagers who stood lining the road, watching the scene in mute horror. "We have to do something." The villagers bleated in panic. What could any of them do? Bobby racked her brain. She mentally kicked herself for not thinking to fill her bucket of water back in the pond, and then she kicked herself again for not thinking a single bucket of water could make a difference here. But what else did she have in her inventory? Some sticks, sugarcane, a few sheaves of wheat, and dirt. She had a whole stack of dirt. Bobby sprang into action. She ran in circles around the town, piling dirt around her as she went. Grass could catch fire, but dirt would not. It would be a form of barrier between a blaze and the village's many buildings. Bobby had never seen somebody grateful for dirt in all her life. When her barrier was complete, Bobby turned to the nearest villager. It was Clark Avery. "Have you seen Johnny?" he asked. "Is he safe?" Clark Avery honked in confirmation and tipped his bald head to one side of the road. Johnny, for once, was still. He sat atop Goalie's shoulder, watching the fire alongside the cluster of villagers. Bobby joined them, squeezing Johnny's foot and slid up beside Goalie. Together, Bobby and her neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, bearing silent witness as the fire slowly burned itself out. The danger of the least was over, but the heart oak, which had stood longer than anyone could remember, was gone, consumed. Bobby wondered if she would say something, cast about their words of solace for wisdom, but they wouldn't come. The silence stretched on, heavy with sadness and shock, and then to her surprise a stranger broke the silence. "Dude, that was epic," said a boy. "Way more dramatic than I expected." The stranger stepped through the throng and started the villagers right before Bobby's makeshift barrier of dirt, and toward the empty patch of charred ground where the tree had been. It wasn't just any stranger, Bobby realized. It was the stranger, the one she helped her the night before. She thought he'd left, but here he was, obviously fully recovered. He must be feeling better because he was grinning at the time like this. "Excuse me," Bobby said, stepping toward and raising her voice above the whispered fretting of her neighbors. "But what are you doing?" The boy appeared to be momentarily startled. "Whoa, you're real?" he said. "Not gonna lie, I thought I hallucinated you." Bobby frowned. "Of course I'm real, and I don't want to see room, but I asked you a question." The boy, clearly less concerned about being rude, gave her a long, curious look. "What are you, some kind of mutant nitwit?" "Excuse me," said the Bobby. "No offense," said the boy, but Bobby was offended all of the same. "It's just, you don't look like any kind of villager I've met. You sure don't sound like one, but you act like you live here or something." "I do live here," she said. "This is my home. The tree had stood here for generations. You didn't have something to do with that fire, did you?" "Well, sure," said the boy. "I started it." Bobby gasped with shock at the attitude of the information. "How could you?" "It wasn't hard," he smirked. "See? You just need flint and steel, and then you—" "No," Bobby said. "No, I mean, why would you?" "Well, funny story," said the boy. "Did you know that you can get charcoal from burning wood in a furnace?" "What?" said Bobby. "Charcoal," said the boy. "It's useful for all sorts of things. You can create it if you burn wood in a furnace. But that's time-consuming." He turned away from her to look around the ground. "I thought maybe I'd get a lot of charcoal really fast if I skipped the furnace and just set a big tree on fire. But nope, no such luck," he shrugged. Oops. Bobby echoed. She could scarcely believe it. There's coal right under our feet. If you dig any direction, you'll find more than you could ever use. And you destroyed an ancient tree we're all cherished so you can make a charcoal? And it didn't even work. Well, that's a melodramatic way to put it, the boy said glibly, but yeah, I guess. Bobby felt a wave of outrage develop in her chest, and she wasn't alone. At her back, the agitated voices of her neighbors rose in a cacophony of aggrieved tongues. Whoa, said the boy, chuckling. That doesn't sound good. What's got them all worked up? I think you better leave, said Bobby. I'm sorry, but you're not welcome here. This only made the boy laugh harder. As he had a wicked laugh, Bobby thought this sounded cruel. I'm not ready to leave, he said. Not yet. I still got a lot of chests to loot. Some sheep this year, and I think I saw a gold around here. These things drop iron ingots, you know. Don't you dare hurt Goalie, Bobby said, and her voice was hard and cold as she could ever make it. The boy tittered. You named the golem? Wow, you're such a freak. And you've overstayed your welcome, said Bobby. Leave. I won't tell you again. Well, tell you what, the boy said. Why don't you make me? And that he drew a sword. It was the most intimidating weapon Bobby had ever seen, shaped out of diamond. With an edge so thin it looked like it would slice the very air. A subtle purple aura come across the glittering sky-length blue of the blade. Bobby took an involuntary step back, unsure what to do. In her momentary hesitation, a streak of movement and color flashed before her eyes. At first, she thought it was a sword, but it was Goalie. The golem had leaped forward, stepping between him and the massive fist into the boy, who stumbled back and fell to the ground. Bobby grasped. Goalie, no, don't hurt him. The boy looked furious. He glared up from the ground, gazing hatefully from Goalie to Bobby and back again. Fine, he said. I know when I'm not wanted. He stood, putting his sword away and dusting himself off, and Bobby could see where his armor was now dented. This stupid little village anyway. As the boy walked off, the gathered villagers parted to let him pass. He reached out of spite and knocked the hat right off the librarian Clark's head. Goalie tensed and he took up a step forward, but Bobby put a steadying hand on Golem's elbow. They didn't need any more trouble. You'll be sorry, said the boy as he stepped off the road and into the plains. Sorry you treated me like this. Sorry you ever met me. Bobby didn't say out loud, but as he turned to look at an empty space where the hard oak used to be, she thought, sorry to meet you. I already am. Chapter 4. Not far away from the deep underground, an aspiring hero named Ben realized that he'd been robbed. Slept poorly, dreaming that he might be caught in a massive web. His sticky threads hummed and jostled, and Ben knew what he meant. Some monster spider was skittering somewhere nearby, but just out of sight, making it across the web, his mandible was dripping in venomous saliva and approached him, hungry for flesh. He awoke, thrashing in his bed, tearing at his tangled sheets. It took him a long moment to realize that it had only been a dream, but he was safe. A moment after that, he realized he was alone. He rose, puzzled over the absence of a friend. Logan? He called. But quietly, fearfully attracting the wrong kind of attention, he decided he'd never retrieve his weapons before doing anything else. That's not good, he said, peering into his bedside chest. It was more that he stashed all his valuables before heading down for the night. He had ores and ingots and redstone dust, potions and arrows that had been treated with potions, a diamond pickaxe, an enchanted sword, and emeralds. A whole stack of beautiful, glittering emeralds. It was gone now. All of it. Gone. Oh, that's really not good, he said again. Logan, he called. Buddy? He had to try. He wasn't expecting an answer. Really, Logan had just disappeared. His bed was gone, too. Packed up and hauled off with all of Logan's stuff. And yes, apparently all of Ben's stuff, too. Logan, he said, shrill this time. Something answered. It wasn't Logan. From the darkness, a harsh hissing sound that set Ben's nerves on edge. He knew precisely what he was turned to face the sound. A creeper skulked toward him. Its eerie alien face was a mask of horror, a downturned mouth open in a frozen, silent scream. Ben took an instinctive step forward, lifting his sword arm, which was empty, right? He followed through the swing anyway, striking the creeper with his bare hand. The mobs faltered for a moment, knocked backward by the force of the blow, and Ben thought, I can do this. Then the creeper exploded. Ben felt a pain of the explosion and then a disorientation of being thrown off his feet. Grainy smoke filled his vision, and the ground beneath him seemed to disappear. He fell a short distance, taking even more damage upon landing. It took a few moments for Ben's head to clear. When it turned, he realized he'd been falling into a lower, darker cave. He was surrounded by a stony rubble left behind the creeper's explosion. One of the torches from the above had fallen by his foot. The explosion knocked it right out of the wall where he placed it right before. He snatched it off the ground and set it upright. A small halo in the light cast by the torch, Ben gathered up the loose blocks of stone. Aside from the armor he'd been wearing, he slept in, the stone was all he had in the world, and his armor had seen better days. The simple iron breastplate was pitted with a pocket mark. It had probably saved his life just now, but it wouldn't take any more hits like that one. He was hurt, but worse than physical pain, it was the knowledge that he'd been abandoned. Ben didn't seem like this could happen. Logan had warned him about being needed to start pulling his weight in a partnership, and Ben had tried, hadn't he? He knew he had tried and failed, apparently. Ben's gloomy musings were interrupted by a sound of growling in the darkness. Regrets and remorse would have to wait. Between Ben and relative safety of the sunlight were no knowable number of monstrous knobs intended tearing him bit to bit. He was unarmed, under-equipped, and barely armored, and the only sources of light he had available to him were torches that he and Logan had left behind the day before. Retracing their steps would be the best chance of surviving, and perhaps of reuniting with his lost friend. In his plan, anyway, he would then love his odds. But he got out of this alive, he would be a pretty great story to tell. And maybe that would be enough to prove Logan, once and for all, that Ben had took what it took to be a hero like him. 5. In the days that following the burning of the heart tree, the memory of the stranger's words and actions hung over Plaintown like a curse. But days became weeks as Bobby returned to her routine. The boy was soon forgotten, more or less. He left his mark, though. Bobby now started her days by checking the town square. He had removed the makeshift dirt barrier, and the grass had grown back quickly after that. The tree itself was another matter, and not easily fixed. Bobby had planted 4 small saplings in the hope that they would intertwine as they grew. Maybe, one day, they would grow into a great tree, the rival of the one that had been lost. But that day, it never came. It was a long way off. Come on, little one, she coaxed. Grow big and strong. You know you can do it. Farmer Breyer honked at her. Bone meal? Where would I get bone meal, she asked. It's not like I'm going to fight a skeleton. The farmer honked again, and Shepherd Ellis claimed to agree. Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence, you two, Bobby said. I'll keep it in mind. Night came early. The midday sun had began its slow dip into the western horizon when it disappeared behind a thick wall of clouds. Bobby felt a chill as the daylight suddenly dimmed. There must be a storm coming, she said. She had no idea. The wind picked up and the thunder pealed in the distance. Bobby hurried to finish what she was doing. She strayed from the village again to a small cluster of oak trees. The trees stuck from a flat plain like a single tuft of unruly hair, or like hand grasping upward at a grave. Bobby had come here to relish her supplies. She could never have too much oak, but as a bolt of lightning flashed in the horizon, she decided to cut her errand short. Getting caught in a thunderstorm would be dangerous, and not just because of the elements. Sometimes if a cloud cover was thick enough, nocturnal creatures would come out during the daytime storm. Somehow, Bobby didn't think her wooden axe would be much good against the monster. The first drops of rain tap danced across her shoulders as she crossed into the village. She passed Goalie, who stood watching the plains for signs of danger, or maybe the golem was just intrigued by the lightning. As always, Goalie was oblivious to the rain, making no effort to seek shelter. Bobby was glad the golem couldn't rust. As she hurried through the center of the town, Bobby saw her neighbors running to and fro, and all rushed to finish their task. It's gonna be the big one, I think, she said to a weaponsmith who stood at an anvil, putting the finishing touches on a new sword. The villager grunted in agreement. The window shutter clacked in the wind. Farmer Breyer's crops swayed wildly. Lightning flashed overhead, and Bobby ran at least a few yards to her home, swiftly closing the door behind her. Through a window, she could see the drizzle become a downpour. She made it indoors just in time. Phew, she said, leaning against the closed door. Her parents looked up, startled by the sudden entrance. They offered her a bowl of soup. Thanks, that sounds good, she said, but where's Johnny? Her parents honked. What do you mean you don't know? There's a storm out there. They muttered defensively. Then put a bell on him, he said. You can't be out there unsupervised all the time. Bobby huffed. He braced herself and then threw open a door and ran out into the rain. Within a second, she was drenched. Actually, that is exactly what she hoped to avoid. Bobby was going to get a good scolding. She just had to find him first. There was no choice but to go door to door. She knew she wouldn't be outdoors. She checked the shepherd and the farmer, the cartographer and the librarian. None of them had seen her brother. Thunder rumbled angrily over the village, and Bobby grumbled with it. She was soaked, though. Her boots felt heavy and squished at every step, and she had a dozen buildings to check. It was getting darker out, too. She would scarcely see a thing. A flash of lightning gave Bobby a fleeting view of her surroundings. She saw a figure standing in her path, right in the middle of the dirt road. It could even be her brother. He was dying when you went because you have to wander around in a storm like this one. Besides, the figure was too tall to be her brother. Clara Gaver, is that you? She asked. Or Shepherd Ellis? Her voice sounded faint with her own ears. The figure didn't seem to hear her at all, but it was hard to see anything. Hello? She called, raising her voice that heard over the storm. Who's there? The figure's head snapped up. She had its attention at least. She immediately realized her mistake. Zombie, said Bobby, her voice a whisper. The zombie fixed her with its gaze. The eyes with dark swells of the hunger lurched forward. Although this is some distance away, it lifted its arms as if grasping for her. It uttered a groan, mindless and hollow. like a rumbling of an empty stomach. Bobby knew it wanted to eat her. He spun in her heels and ran. One wasn't far, she could make it. So as long as she didn't turn around, she just had to trust the zombie wouldn't catch her. That was the right behind her, closing the distance, so it could grasp her, drag her down, and bite into her. She was worried about the zombie behind her that she didn't see the one in front of her until it was nearly too late. But the girl had saved her, alerting her of the danger in her path. She looked up and saw the clutching hands, green with rot, reaching out to receive her. She skidded to a stop, slipping to the ground. The second zombie loomed above her, and she kicked out of it, pushing away the scrabbling back at her feet. She ran in a new direction. The path home was blocked. She ducked into an alleyway. The darkness was unnerving, but it worked to her advantage. Both zombies had been pursuing her, shambling past her hiding place. She held her breath, not staring in the exhale until they were out of sight. Even in her breath, Bobby realized something important. One zombie was bad luck. Two zombies might be something worse. A flash of lightning proved her suspicions right. Terrifyingly so, in a momentary strobe of light, she saw figures spread throughout the town. A dozen, at least. And every one of them was a zombie. It was a siege. The town was under attack. Bobby screamed, and then realized that was the last thing she should have done. She clamped her hands down over her, worried that the scream would bring right to her. But she was lucky. The peal of thunder masked the sound of her panic. The zombies still shambled mindlessly around the town. She could just see their outlines set against deeper darkness of the storm. Her first thought was of Johnny. Everyone else was safely tucked away at home. She had a story for that. What about her brother? She would have sought refuge in the storm too, but as soon as the rain stopped, he could step outside right into a horde of flesh-eating undead mobs. Bobby needed to raise the alarm. She had to let everyone know about the danger. She thought about screaming again, but she thought only bring the villagers running. They'd be helpless against the horde. Slowly, carefully, she edged herself to the edge of the valley, peering into the storm. She could see the town square, the light of the torches. Standing in front of the four saplings of the wooden arch, and hanging from that arch, glinting in the torchlight, was a bell. If Bobby could ring the bell, the whole town would know Johnny was in danger. They know to stay indoors and to keep Johnny indoors too. Just one problem. Between Bobby and the bell, there's at least 4 zombies. She might as well to get past 1 or 2 of them, but 4? It was impossible. And even if she got past them somehow, they might even make it to the bell. The moment she rang it, every zombie in the area would know exactly where to find her. It would be like ringing the dinner bell. The shift her weight back and forth. Consider your options. None of them were good. Come on, Bobby, she whispered. You can do this. Don't be a chicken. Chicken. That was it. Did it? As soon as she said the words, she thought of Farmer Briar's prize for the poultry. If Bobby was smart and careful, if she did everything just right, those chickens just might save the entire village. Chapter 6. Bobby knew Plaintown inside and out. She could have drawn a map in her sleep, and she could have walked to the town center of the front door of any given building with her eyes closed without stomping on a single flower. That's why she decided to destroy the torches. And she had to force herself to do it. Something deep inside her howled at the idea of making the village even darker. But she knew rationally that the dark would give her an advantage. It would make her harder spot as she made her way. Carefully, slowly, painstakingly, so too for the farmer's enclosure at the north end of the village. On the other side of the fence, 2 chickens, Sally and Sue, clucked and cooed, going about their business as if they don't have a care in the world. A little warning would have been nice, she whispered at him. You know, like cock-a-doodle-doo, you know there's zombies invading. What would have gone a long way? Maybe next time? Sally clucked lightly. Fine, said Bobby, and she wiped a freshly laid egg. But I'm taking this. Bobby looked to the north. She couldn't see far. The storm swallowed the normally picturesque view of the farmer's field. She knew the vast expanse of open grassland stretched before her. Anything might be lurking out there, and normally that knoll edge was enough to make her glad of the safety of the village. But the village wasn't safe now. It could actually be smarter for Bobby to head out into the plains and turn back and try to reach the bell in the center of the town. Sometimes the smart move was too selfish to even consider, she whispered to herself. Sue clucked as if agreeing with her. You can say that again, Bobby said, and she clucked at her egg in her chest. Back I go. Bobby took her care of and considered her every step. She stuck close to every building, where the shadows pulled most darkly. She was determined to take her time so that she wouldn't make any careless mistakes. And then the rain slowed, and Bobby knew she had to hurry. If the storm ended, her neighbors would finally might step outside and be overwhelmed. She picked up the pace, sliding along the oaken walls, stepping lightly but swiftly. Within minutes, she rounded a corner, and the town center came into view. Its bell was tantalizingly close, but there was no more buildings to hide behind. Between her and the bell, nothing but open air, and the walking dead. The ran up completely, and Bobby knew she had no more time to waste. She hefted the egg in her hand, testing its weight, and let it fly. Then the tremendous splat, the egg shattered against the bell. The bell swung back and then forward, then back again, and it was moved it sung out. Clang, clang, clang. Bobby wanted to cheer. She'd done it. She alerted the village of the danger they were in, but she alerted the zombies too. Bobby was hoped the zombies said she would be drawn to the bell, giving her time to slip away. But one had seen the egg that as a sword through the air, and then its sweep of the night black eyes, it had found her. The zombie groaned loudly, drawing the attention of its companions. Within seconds, every zombie in the square had Bobby in its sights. Bobby spun around, and she needed to get indoors. It didn't matter where, the temple was closest. But there were zombies between her and the temple. In that case, the smithy. No, the zombies were closing from that direction too. Bobby turned into a tight circle. Everywhere she looked, everywhere she might try to run, there were zombies, shambling toward with their arms outstretched, reaching forward to her. She stumbled as she spun, tripping over her own feet. The circle of ghouls closed in around her. She couldn't fight it anymore. She screamed. Bobby curled into a ball, desperate to avoid the touch of the undead for as long as she could. She closed her eyes tight. She could hear the zombies' footsteps echoing in the night, almost sounding like a low, distant thunder in the storm. Only, that was strange, wasn't it? The footsteps sounded too loud, too heavy to belong to a zombie. She opened her eyes and saw the zombie go flying through the air. There was only one thing Bobby knew was the power to send him up flying like that. Goy had come to her rescue. The iron golem was carrying a path for her, fighting its way through a cluster of the undead. The zombies all around her shifted its focus to the oncoming threat, turning away to the Bobby and swarming the golem instead. Goaly's great iron fist swung back and forth, and zombie after zombie was knocked off its feet. Zombie felt elation at the sight, but it was short-lived. As mighty as Goalie was, the golem was vastly outnumbered. The injured zombies got back up again, rejoining their brethren. They encircled Goalie, punching and clawing and biting at the metallic hide. Bobby saw cracks spread across that hide. As Goalie's shining skin took more and more damage. That spurred her into action. The closest thing she had to a weapon was her wooden axe, but it would have to do. She leaped forward, swinging the tool in front of her, battling zombies aside. They barely noticed her. They kept all their aggressive focus on the golem, and she pressed forward. She had to help Goalie, as Goalie had helped her. Suddenly her axe shattered against the zombie's skull. What she should have known, the axe had never been intended as a weapon, and she wore it down like chopping wood out in the plain. She reached in her inventory for another weapon. She had to be something, and then Goalie struck her. Bobby didn't know what happened at first. She only knew that she felt pain and that she was flying backwards. She landed right at the door of the temple, almost as if she'd been thrown to safety. She looked back to where Goalie stood. The golem would head taller than any zombie, but the undead swarmed to construct, climbing atop one another to overwhelm it. Goalie gazed out at the other fracas and met Bobby's eyes. She expected to see the golem's features twist in rage or pain or even fear, but Goalie was expressionless as ever. Did Golem know it had saved her life? Did the knowledge bring it any peace? Bobby searched the construct's eyes for answers, and then Bobby landed the killing blow. Goalie's iron skin cracked and splintered. The golem uttered a final tortured breath and saw a stony death rattle, and then shattered. "Goalie!" she screamed. "No!" The zombies immediately turned their attention back to her. Bobby whirled around, throwing herself against the temple door, and slammed it open. As soon as she crossed the threshold, she slammed it shut again. She watched as the closed door mounting dread. And would the zombies pursue her, or was she finally safe? Footsteps surrounded behind her, and Bobby lashed out instinctively to her elbows. She clocked Eric Avery right in the face. "Sorry," said Bobby, "you startled me." The cleric honked in irritation, but upon seeing the state Bobby was in, the voice had softened with concern. "I'm okay," answered Bobby, "but they got Goalie." Cleric Avery's faces dropped. They noted sadly, and then reaching out to touch Bobby's shoulder, the cleric promised they were safe in the temple. But that was when a door shattered into splinters, and the zombies started storming the building. Chapter 7. The temple broken doorway spat forth an endless stream of the undead. Bobby and the cleric, both weaponless, were immediately surrounded. Bobby pushed and punched her attackers, pulling Avery to her greedy, grasping hands. She narrowly avoided the zombie's gnashed teeth. She moved, said Bobby, and she gripped the cleric's arm and tugged. "Come on!" She ran for the stairs, dragging Cleric Avery around behind her. The villagers stumbled but didn't complain. They took the stairs two at a time, faster than the zombies could follow. Moonlight shone through the yellow stained glass windows. The staircase was a dead end. Eventually they would run out of stairs, but Bobby would only deal with one problem at a time. Suddenly, the Cleric Avery began to tremble. "Don't be afraid," Bobby said. "It's going to be okay." Maybe, she thought. Avery slipped on her grip, sinking suddenly in her knees. "Don't stop now. She would have to keep moving," said Bobby. "They were right behind us, and you," she squinted at a better look at the dim light. "Cleric Avery, are you still right? You look kind of green." Cleric Avery's head snapped. Her their skin has mottled, moldy, great shade of green, and their eyes showed an unnatural red, roaring an inhuman threat. The cleric lunged for Bobby. Bobby leaped back, panicking. She had the only thing she could think to do. She punched a stained glass window beside her, then dove out of the window into the night. She fell only a short distance before landing on the temple's stone ledge. As a long way down, she tried not to look below. She crawled along the edge, intended to put the distance between herself and the undead pursuers. Cleric Avery, frothing at the mouth, stood with a broken window, groaning in frustration and menace. Bobby choked back a sob. She had known the cleric her whole life. She remembered the potion of healing the cleric had given her when she skinned her knee. She recalled lightly the less grumpy than usual look on Avery's face whenever the wandering trader let them with just the right ingredient for brewing something new. That person was gone now. Avery must have been bitten by a zombie when they got surrounded. The change had taken only seconds. She looked at the sky. The storm had ended, and the clouds had moved across the plain. Now she could see the moon, low in the eastern sky. That meant it was early. The zombies had towers to terrorize the village before the sun could drive them away. For a moment, Bobby thought it was staying on the temple's roof, out of sight, out of the way, out of danger. That's when she heard a sound of wood splintering, as if followed by panicking, honking, ravenous groans. The horde had broken into the other building. They attacked more of her neighbors, and her brave brother was still out there somewhere. Bobby couldn't afford to hide. She had to act. She hurried across the roof and far side of the temple, checking to make sure no zombies awaited her below. She slid to the ground and hurt, a little, to fall so far, but she could take a little hurt. She knew now there was no way to survive this night unscathed. Next door was a smithy, where she had seen the weaponsmith working on a sword as the siege had begun. She crept into the open deck, alert of any sign of danger, peering into the window. Bobby saw the structure was empty. She hoped the weaponsmith had made it to safety, but she remembered she had stubborn about going inside and the raid had started. The zombies might easily have gotten the weaponsmith before Bobby had rung the warning bell. There was a new iron sword sitting atop the anvil. That was some small bit of luck, at least. Armed, at least. Bobby crouched to the snug decks, trailing. Chaos reigned over Plaintown. The Fletcher's hut had caught fire, casting the whole village in cheery light. Zombies were everywhere, shambling up and down the dirt path that ran through town, and now some of the zombies were familiar with Bobby. The weaponsmiths shuffled past, still wearing their apron and eye patch, but their remaining eye glowed red, and their teeth gnashed in unholy hunger as they shuffled aimlessly past their abandoned home. Home, Bobby canned for her head, but she couldn't quite see her own house from here. She ran around the back of Smithy, walking around the outskirts of town, sticking close to the building she passed. There was no back door in her house. She was going around to the front and felt too risky, so she hacked her way in. Not the best use for a sword, but new and sharp and it would last for a while. Inside, her worst fears were confirmed. The house was a mess. Furniture was overturned. Pictures had fallen from the walls, and all the remaining front doors broke in splinters. No sign of her parents, but maybe they'd gotten away. Maybe they were okay. Bobby heard a cry from outside, and she ran to the door. The cry came from the village cartographer, Haven, who stood trembling on the lawn outside as several zombies closed in. Bobby sprang into action, leaping over the porch rail and rushing toward her neighbor. She caught several zombies by surprise, slashing them with her sword and forcing them back. It was enough to give her an opening. She leaned forward, grabbed Haven's arm, and pulled the cartographer free from the attackers. Bobby held Haven back toward the house, but the cartographer had other ideas. They pulled against Bobby's grip, gesturing to follow in their direction. "Where are you going?" Bobby asked. "They've taken the whole town." Haven corrected her in her hushed arms and haws. "Survivors," Bobby said. "Gathering at the library?" Her heart swelled with hope. But the library was just the far side of town. "This way," Bobby hissed, pulling Haven in between two buildings. Their light of the moon could reach them. "We have to be careful, otherwise we'll lead those things right to the others." Bobby took Haven on a twisting, circuitous route through town, staying strictly to the shadows, pausing whenever the sound of shuffling footsteps drew too near. Then, at last, they made it to the library. They saw the building's iron door and kept evading at bay. Bobby had installed the door herself and attempted baby-proofing the library against Johnny's mischief. She could see inside the door the pressure plate would open, but if they had to fight their way through several zombies to reach it. And after the happened at Cavery, it felt too risky to drag a cartographer through the gauntlet of ghouls. "I have another idea," whispered Bobby. She drew her sword. "Cover me." Going back around, Bobby hacked her way into the library. There was a small group of villagers huddled inside, and seeing the hole Bobby had made in her sanctuary, they protested loudly. But one voice rose above all the others, a baby gurgling cheer. "Johnny!" she cried. But she rushed to her brother, sweeping up in her arms. "Are you okay? Are your parents here?" Johnny cooed sadly. "We'll find them," Bobby promised. On Bobby's back, Haven stepped through the hole of the wall, and then gestured manly at the honking of Bobby's attention. "Yeah, I know," said Bobby. She set Johnny down and walked to the hole, plunging into the blocks of oak. "That should hold." she said, and she crammed the worried face of the villagers where few of them left. This is everybody? She asked. Farmer Briar mothered sadly, and another villager had picked in Bobby's hands. What do you want me to do with that? Said Bobby. Dig us a tunnel out of town? She shook her head. We're safer here. I don't think those things can break through iron door. Besides, there might be survivors out there. We can't just abandon them. At this, a great cacophony went up as all the villagers argued with Bobby, with one another, each of them determined to voice their opinion of the best course of action. That's enough, Bobby, said Bobby. Adding her voice to the cacophony, she pleaded for calm, quiet, but no one was listening. Then fists pounded against the door. The villagers all felt silent. The inhuman growls left no mystery to who was at the other side of the door. The beacon continued. They can't break through, Bobby said again. I'm pretty sure. She looked at her brother and then the tool in their hand. Maybe we dig just in case. I can carve out a basement, put an extra barrier between us and them. The tireless fist continued to knocking at the door. Bobby set the pickaxe to the ground and dug. She was expecting to find solid layers of dirt and stone beneath the library. Maybe some coal or even iron. She was not expecting light from pouring up from underground. What in the world was that? She asked as she bent over for another look. But before she could make sense of the unexpected light, a dark, fast-moving shape sprung from the hole. It caught Bobby right in the face, filling her vision with darkness and causing her head to fall backward. The boom erupted into chaos. Villagers screamed and crying and scrambled for safety. It's a bat, Bobby said, struggling to be heard over the panic. It's just a bat. But it was too late to calm the crowd. In their panic, desperate to escape, Farmer Briar stepped to the pressure plate that opened the front door. It was a tragic mistake. Before Briar could take a single step to the threshold, a zombie lunged forward, biting Farmer savagely. No, Bobby cried, and she stepped across the room with 3 quick strides. Slashing out of the pickaxe, she knocked the zombie back and away from Farmer Briar. Just the iron door slammed shut again, trapping the zombie outside, and trapping the rest of them inside with an infected Farmer Briar. Stay back, said Bobby. She held a pickaxe out in front of her, and her hands trembled. She didn't want to use the weapon on her neighbor. Farmer Briar showed no hesitation. Mouth frothing, eyes burning red, they lunged for Bobby. She knew she was done for. But then Johnny was there. Poor sweet baby Johnny, wholeheartedly fearless and tender Johnny, was leaping between Bobby and her attacker. Bobby screamed for her to stay back, but Johnny never did listen to her. The Farmer Briar's attack meant for Bobby found her brother instead. Bobby steadied quickly, pulling Johnny out of Zombie's grasp. They carried her brother away from the danger, toward the back of the library, where she cradled him in her arms, rocking him back and forth. It's going to be okay, she promised, and she thought it might be true. Right until the moment Johnny's eyes turned red. Chapter 8. Bobby's in a nightmare. None of this was real. That was the only explanation her mom could accept. But her body knew otherwise. When Johnny lunged her, she instinctively leaped back. Johnny kept coming, though. He gnashed his teeth and slashed at the air. Johnny, it's me, she said, stumbling backwards, saying it out of reach. I don't want you to hurt me. I'm your sister. Johnny leaped, and Bobby did the only thing she could think to do. She set a block of wood between them, quickly raising the pillar of oak. But Johnny wasn't able to change the direction mid-leap, slammed into it, falling to the ground. While her brother was dazed, Bobby quickly dropped more wood, encircling him. It's like when we used to build forts, Johnny, Bobby said, keeping her voice light and calm. You remember? Johnny only growled. He could see the top of his bald head over the small pen she built. It was open at the top, but try as he might, Johnny could not hop high enough to get out. With Johnny no longer attacking her, Bobby had a moment to catch her breath. She turned to check on her neighbors, but Farmer Briar's infection had spread unchecked through the crowd. The entire group of survivors had been turned. They stood at the iron door, pounding and scraping, trying to escape out of the night. Bobby ducked between the 2 log bookshelves. Grief and hopelessness struck her with a raging river. She felt like she could drown. But she couldn't give in to despair, not until she had seen her own safety. She blocked off an aisle at both ends, lighting the bookshelves on either side of the walls of the structure, and improvised a panic room made of wooden books. She closed herself in completely, getting the last of her wood blocks to assemble a low roof just overhead. The space was small and narrow, more like a coffin than a fortress, but with a torch for light, it was so scary. She could barely hear the growls of her mindless neighbors through the walls. Cold comfort that. Bobby slumped to the ground, alive, but defeated. She plugged her ears, closed her eyes, and wished for sleep to take her, but it never did. It was a very long night. Chapter 9. Bobby was in sort of a daze when she realized that sunlight was pouring into the library. The realization made her like a bucket full of cold water. She didn't know much about zombies, but everyone knew that zombie and sunlight did not mix. And her brother was a zombie now. As impossible as that seemed, it was true. Heedless of any danger that awaited her in the stacks, Bobby cut her way in the makeshift shelter. The villagers are all gone. Either they'd finally managed to open the iron door, or they slipped through the hole in the floor. Bobby quickly plugged that hole. At least some undead creature reached up below and grasped at her ankles. Right now, the only thing she had time to worry about was one particular undead creature, trapped in his wooden pen. Johnny was safe, for now, from direct sunlight. She could see just the top of his green head, turning tirelessly in the endless clockwise circle as he looked for a way in his block-wide prison. It didn't feel humane to leave him there, so Bobby blocked the windows, moved the lantern so that light could only ever compensate for the lack of sunshine, and cut away one side of Johnny's enclosure. He lunged for her immediately. Bobby dodged his grasp, quickly shoving him back into his pen and sealing it up once more. Okay, that was probably my fault, said Bobby, her breathing ragged, her knees shaking. Yeah, I probably should have seen that coming. Johnny, unseen inside his prison, growled at agitation. You're just hungry, aren't you? Bobby said. Well, I understand, I guess, but you can't eat me. Johnny growled again. I'm sorry, said Bobby, but that's where I draw the line. Maybe that's what makes me a bad sister, but so be it, she sighed. I'm sure I can find you something to eat a little less me. Bobby walked out into the daylight. It was all quiet. And just for a moment, she could almost believe the previous night had been a terrible dream. She turned toward the town center, where the neighbors liked to gather. There was no one there. The broken remains of Goalie lay in the dirt nearby. There was nothing left for her to protect her but 4 iron ingots and a poppy flower that looked, from the distance, like a bloodstain on the ground. Last night's fires had burned out, leaving several homes in ruins. The remaining structures had all had their doors destroyed. It seemed no one else had escaped the wrath of the zombies, but maybe she could still save her brother. The way Bobby saw it, there was a matter of education. She already taught Johnny a lot of things at the time she'd been born. She taught him not to pull her hair, he taught him not to share his toys, and not to jump on the bed that was occupied. She even started teaching him names of different colors. So teaching him not to eat her shouldn't be too hard, she reasoned. She started a simple test. So he got a juicy steak in the corner of the library and a fresh baked cookie in the other corner. She opened Johnny's pen hard. Before he could react, he heard across the room to occupy a third corner. When she waited, would Johnny go for the dessert, or would he go for the steak? No such luck. Johnny stumbled directly toward her, reaching out, coming in for a hug. But then, as he got closer, lunging toward and gnashing teeth. Bobby was ready for the outcome. She covered one hand with an iron boot. It looked funny, but it prevented her from picking anything up. But it at least offered some protection. As Johnny lunged, she held up her arm, intercepting his bite attack with the boot. He gnawed harmlessly at the iron. Bad baby, she said. You don't get any food by attacking me. Wouldn't you like a soft, gooey cookie instead? Look how defenseless it is. Bobby growled and grumbled as he slobbered on her boot. And don't talk with your mouth full. After a few days, the constant growling started to give Bobby a headache. A reminder of Johnny used to cry all the hours of the night, and a pacifier of some kind might help. What had pacified a zombie? She tried everything but she could get her hands on. Honeycomb, a piece of sugar cane, even an emerald, which might have been a choking hazard if Johnny still needed to breathe. He spat everything out of his mouth immediately. Nothing worked. And then one day she found him suckling a bleach-white bone. Where did you get that? She asked, and reached forward to take it from him. He twisted away with grasping hands, growling at her and holding the bone close. Oh, fine, Bobby said, watching her brother gnaw on the bone like it was candy. It's a little morbid, but at least you're quiet. Johnny slobbered contentedly. With the pacifier to calm him, Johnny grew slightly less aggressive in Bobby's presence, and she considered letting him out of this closure a bit more often. First, she needed to test his instinct of the self-preservation, and so, one morning, she opened the library's iron door and threw Johnny's favorite bone outside. Johnny followed it, stepping right into the glaring sunlight. A moment later, he had burst into flame. Bobby drowsed her brother in a ready bucket of water and immediately dragged him back inside. Johnny, slightly charred and completely wet, growled miserably. This is for your own good, Bobby said, and she tied one end of the lead around him. The other end was attached to a wooden post she had set in the library. It's just until you figure out how to keep yourself safe. Johnny strained at the rope, determined to go back outside and retrieve his bone despite the clear and present danger of the sunlight. Bobby sighed. Something tells me you're going to be on that rope for a very long time. On his lead, Bobby had more bit freedom to explore the library. Bobby watched him just out of range. What would he do now that he could walk around? Would he pick up an old favorite book? Would he play an enchanting table or try to climb the bookshelves? Johnny didn't do any of those things. Instead, he knocked the nearest torch off the wall. Hey, Bobby said. No. Johnny growled. Clearly, he preferred darkness. Well, I need to be able to see, Bobby said, and she set a new torch nearby. Otherwise, you might be able to sneak up on me. Johnny grumbled. He batted in the blood-red eyes, sweetly, and let out his arms for a hug. Aw, said Bobby, coming closer. But Johnny lunged forward, attempting to bite her, but she was just out of his reach. The lead held, and Johnny's teeth closed harmlessly in the air. Bobby sighed, then leaned over and patted him on the head. We'll keep working on it, she said. Chapter 10. Ben approached the village with caution. It was abandoned. It was much certain from this distance. Cobwebs stretched across the empty windows, vines clung to the dark buildings, and old, neglected fence had fallen apart, allowing whatever animals it once held to roam free. As last one building had burned down in its crumbling foundations. But abandoned only meant there were no people living there. In the past, Ben and Logan had stumbled upon all sorts of mobs in otherwise empty buildings, zombies, skeletons, creepers, and worse. and without Logan to lead the way, Ben might easily overwhelmed. So Ben took it slow. He started in the fields, where crop grew in abundance. He could hardly believe his luck. His bounty would sustain him for a while. If the village's chests were as full as the loot and the fields were full of food, he would be able to replenish his inventory in no time. He held a melon open with his weapon, a simple sword he crafted out of stone, grabbing a slice and devouring it with enthusiasm. It had been too long since he'd eaten fresh food. He wiped the juice off his sword, and then put several melon slices in inventory, keeping one to eat while he walked. The first house he checked was empty of any threat, which was easy to figure out because it had no door. Ben stepped inside across his chest and checked it for traps, and threw it open. It was empty. Slime balls, he cursed. Empty it was not what he hoped for, but here he was, a lot more houses to check, and not like he had anywhere else to be. 3 hours later, he was beginning into despair. He was clear that someone else had already helped himself to whatever treasure had been here. At this point, Ben doubted he'd ever find any loot, but as he looked around the village, he found no shortage of curiosities. In the town center, 4 saplings stood naturally close to the together, as if someone had planted them there purposefully. Nearby, a solitary poppy grew. It looked delicate out of the place, and bright pop of red among all the earthy browns and greens. And at the far side of town there was a building of iron door. Ben tried to peer through the small openings in the door, but the room beyond was dark. If there's anything of value in this village, surely this is where he'd find it. He lifted his foot above the pressure plate that operated the door. Then he hesitated. "Is this a bad idea?" he said. "It's probably a bad idea, right?" He looked again at the iron door, wondering what secrets hid behind it. "Oh, slime balls, you win again, curiosity," he said, and he put his foot down on the plate. The door swung open in this dark room. Ben stepped inside and placed a torch beside her. He saw now that the library, or it had been, the only place was in complete disarray, with shelves that had been almost entirely emptied of books, dirt blocks stacked in front of the windows, and a few random blocks of oak strewn about. What had happened here? He heard footsteps in the back room. "Hello?" Ben said. There was definitely someone back there. He could see them moving on the far side of the empty shelves. "Just a humble traveling adventure here," Ben said. "No reason to lurk." He took a step forward, then stumbled over to a pile of books. "Are you embarrassed about the mess? I'm not really judgmental. You should be in a state of... see the state of my inventory." His answer was a low, threatening growl. "Okay," thought Ben. That's not a someone after all, some kind of animal. "Here, kitty," he said, creeping forward. "I don't suppose you're guarding a precious treasure back there, are you?" As soon as Ben reached the bookshelf, as soon as he unobstructed view, he knew he'd made a terrible mistake. "Zombie!" he cried, and he stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding the grasp of the mob as it lunged for him. Ben was too surprised to go for his weapon. All he had to do was escape. He scrambled backward, trying to regain his footing. The zombie's eyes flashed red as it lunged again. Ben flinched, closing his own eyes and bracing for impact, but nothing happened. Slowly, cautiously, Ben opened his eyes. The zombie filled his vision, grasping for him, but it was stuck somehow. It couldn't reach him. Ben got up to his feet and realized he was significantly taller than his attacker. "Aren't you a little short for a zombie?" he asked. Ben saw now that he was left tied to a wooden post. He couldn't quite make sense of that, unless it had entangled itself by accident. Zombie growled, swiping impatiently at the air. Ben laughed. "You're like a little baby zombie, aren't you? That's adorable." He drew his sword. "Honestly, I almost feel bad about this." "Grar," said the zombie, as it clacked its teeth in an attempt to bite him. "See, you get it," said Ben. "Mortal enemies, the two of us. In the fight to the death." He raised his sword, ready to strike the creature down. "Stop!" shouted a voice, and Ben paused for mid-swing. A girl stood in the open doorway, wearing simple clothes, supplemented with an iron helmet and boots. She held a bow, loaded and drawn, but her hands were shaking. "Don't worry," Ben said, in what hoped to be a reassuring voice. "You're perfectly safe. I'll take care of this monster." He hefted his sword up once more, and then suddenly an arrow was lodged in his chest plate. Everything went instantly still and silent, as if time itself had stopped. Ben looked down at the arrow, then at the girl, who appeared to be as shocked as he was. Even the zombie had stopped moving and gazed mutely at Ben's injury. "Ow," he said at least. "You shot me." "I am so sorry," said the girl. "I can't believe you did that," said Ben. "That hurts." "Again, super sorry," said the girl. "But I mean, I did ask you nicely to stop." "Not that nicely," Ben countered. He pulled the arrow out of his chest plate. It had gone right through the armor, but I only nicked his skin. "I thought I was doing you a favor. By attacking my brother? That's not your brother. That," he pointed, "is a zombie." The zombie attempted to bite Ben's outstretched hand, and Ben felt approved his point. "He's my brother," said the girl, "and he's a zombie," he sighed. "Put your sword away, and I'll tell you about it." Chapter 11. Bobby did tell him everything. "I'm sorry," Ben said. "Losing your whole village like that. I can't imagine what that feels like." And he truly couldn't. Ben had never stayed in one place for long. He had a hard enough time imagining what it would be like to have neighbors, a family, much less what it would be like to have them all swept away in a zombie siege. "It feels bad," Bobby told him. "Really bad." Ben twisted, uncomfortable, in a somber silence that followed. They cast about for something to say, something that might listen lighting the mood. Still, she said, and he footed a grin, you got a pretty sweet house out of the deal. An entire village to choose from, Bobby had decided to stay in a towering temple made of stone and built far taller than any of the other buildings. It was more like a fortress than a home. When Ben saw the appeal in that than each purely aesthetic level, it was an impressive space, grand even, with high ceilings, stained glass windows, and colorful banners. It was messy, though. Bobby had stacked books everywhere. It was only where library's missing volumes had gone, and there were potions strewn out of the place, too, including the fresh one bubbling in an active brewing stand. It smelled a little off. Bobby scowled at him. If you're trying to get me to look on the bright side, don't. She crossed her eyes. There's no bright side, other than Johnny, who's not exactly himself these days. Everyone else I know is gone. They got bitten by zombies and then vanished without a trace. They probably burned away when the sun came up, Ben said, and then he saw her scowl deepen. Ugh, he added. I'm sure it was very quick and painless. Ben picked up the nearest book and leafed through it. It's full of recipes. Then he realized the silence was gone for too long. He looked up to see Bobby watching him intently. What are you doing here anyway? He asked him, a note of suspicion in her voice. Nothing in particular, Ben shrugged. The usual. The usual, echoed Bobby. Attacking harmless kids? Not harmless, Ben encountered as he rubbed his sore chest. Either of you. Johnny was literally tied to a post. I'm a little biased, I guess, Ben countered. Look, I'm a hero, an adventurer. That's my sort of whole deal. He puffed out his chest, flexing a bit, hoping he looked the part. That means I fight monsters wherever and wherever I find them. And when I discover a village I abandoned or otherwise, I drop in on it. You know, to resupply. To loot the place, you mean, Bobby said hotly. I know you're kind. You think villagers are just happy little idiots who exist only to make your lives easier, for adventures more epic. He frowned. Well, our lives matter, and we don't have some epic times in our home, you know. There's one time a fox chased a bunny right through the center of town. Ben waited, assuming there was more to the story, and then no more details were forthcoming. He prodded. And, Bobby said flustered, the rabbit got away, I think. I hope. Ben scoffed. Too bad for the fox, you know. I once shot a rabbit with an arrow from 50 paces away. What? Why would you do that? To survive, Ben answered in a tone he'd hoped sounded very grave. Out there, it was all about survival, and I'd rather be a fox than a rabbit. Funny, you strike me as more of a donkey, said Bobby. Listen, I don't know what it's like out there, but I know that this is a peaceful place, full of good people who are just going about their business. All the heat went out of her. He deserved better, and then retreated like we didn't matter. Ben felt guilty suddenly. His eyes fell to the floor. They mattered, he said. Of course they mattered. And I can tell you for a fact this village had the best melons I ever tasted. Bobby slapped him across the shoulder. You ate our melons? What was wrong with you? Hey, come on, he said, ducking her follow-up attack, and in doing so, he accidentally knocked the recipe book off the table. That was a compliment. Yeah, well, I'd pass it on to Farmer Breyer if I could, said Bobby. Just ask before you take anything else, okay? He picked up the book from the ground, placing it back on the table. What are you reading? This looks like recipes. Potion formulas, Bobby corrected. Oh, that reminds me. He hurried over to the brewing stand, removing the bubbling flask and giving it to Feeder a sniff. Hey, would you drink this? I would not, Ben said. He could smell from a distance, and it did not smell appetizing. Yeah, that doesn't look right, Bobby said, and she placed the flask among half a dozen other failed attempts. I'm not exactly natural at this, but I'm determined to find a cure. Cool, said Ben. A cure for bellyaches? A cure for sore feet? Bobby rolled her eyes. A cure for my brother, genius, she said. You're looking for a cure for zombieism. That's not a word, Bobby said, but yes, she sighed. But that's why I set up in here. Not because it was a sweet house or cleric used to live here. And that's where they're really talented at this sort of thing. I guess I was hoping to, I don't know, invoke some kind of their old magic. That's not surprising, Ben said. Clerics are always good with potions. He sniffed at the nearest flask, then recoiled. It's apparently harder than it looks. You know other clerics? Asked Bobby. Sure, said Ben. I mean, not the first time basis or anything. She shrugged. There's a good one at the next town over, Seventon, I think it was called. Logan and I sold some of the rotten flesh a while back. Hey, he said, pointing a flask. Maybe the rotten flesh is the missing ingredient here. It can't make it smell any worse. There's a cleric nearby, and you know where to find them? Bobby leaned forward, and Ben shrunk back, expecting to be hit again. Instead, this time he enveloped him in a hug. Thank you, oh, thank you. Oh, sure, said Ben. I'm sort of getting emotional whiplash, but you're welcome. She gripped his shoulder and shook him lightly. He looked a little maniac. Now, how do I get to Savatown from here? When was the last time you got some sleep, or a decent meal? Ben asked her. I know where you can get a good melon slice. She took from him firmly now. Savatown, she said. Where? Okay, stop, Ben said, and pulled out her grip. Look, you can't just hop on to the other next town. You have to think about food and shelter, and it's easier than you think you'd get lost. But he shook his head. And that's not to mention the monsters. Did you think if zombies are bad? There's way worse things out there. It sounds like I need a hero, Bobby said, smirking. You know, the kind of guy who fights monsters wherever and wherever he finds them. Ben felt his mouth go dry. He definitely oversold his talents. Well, yeah, but, he said, casting an excuse to go allow him to retain some dignity. It's not like I go looking for monsters, and besides, I've got a lot of quests lined up right now, and I can pay you, Bobby offered. What, in melon? Ben grinned. It wasn't that good. I have emeralds, Bobby said. Heroes like emeralds, right? Ben did like emeralds. Ben, in fact, loved emeralds. He tried very hard not to show it. Logan had taught him that the key to any successful negotiation was to stay cool. He said, they're alright. I also have cake if you prefer, Bobby offered. Tell me more about these emeralds, Ben said, in a manner that was not entirely cool. Well, they're shiny, practically new, said Bobby. Every time a hero came through, they traded emeralds for whatever supplies they needed. But the village didn't have a lot of use for gems. We're mostly self-sufficient, so we just kept them stashed away in a safe place. She smirked, as if she could sense Ben's desperation, as if she could smell it. Escort me to Savatown and back, and the emeralds are yours. Ben made a show of weighing the offer, holding out as long as the mask his desperation. Fine, he said at last. It's a deal. But then we're out of the real world. You have to do what I say. No questions asked. You got it, hero, Bobby said brightly. You're the boss. Ben, perpetual sidekick, found it like the sound of that. That's right, he said. I'm the boss. He sighed, noticing the fading daylight through the temple's stained glass windows. One of the windows was broken, offering an unobstructed view in the late afternoon sky. I guess we should set our first thing in the morning. Bobby, can't you go in the sunlight, though? Said Bobby. Ben narrowed his eyes. Why does that matter? Because he's coming with us, Bobby answered. Obviously. Are you kidding? Said Ben. The kid who tried to eat me earlier today. That Johnny? I can't leave him here all alone, Bobby insisted. I'm responsible for him. Bobby opened his mouth to argue, but then he was struck dumb. How could she possibly think this is a good idea? And why would she go along with it? Heroes like emeralds, right? I'm regretting this already, he said, moaning. You'll keep him on a leash the whole time, right? A short leash. Bobby nodded, then saluted. Whatever you say, boss. But something in the way that she said it made him doubt her sincerity. Suddenly, Ben felt like he wasn't actually the boss of anything. Chapter 12. Ben eyed the zombie boy warily as Bobby led him out of the library. He had him on a lead, as promised, and the moment he seemed docile, gnawing on a bone. He didn't even acknowledge Ben's presence. You see, she said, he's very well behaved. Why, said Ben. And you're wearing a boot on your hand because? It's because of precaution, she said. Honestly, he barely even tries to bite me anymore. Fantastic, said Ben. Just what I was looking for in an adventuring partner. Only occasionally attempts to eat my face. I think he'd start with your toes, Bobby said, and then Ben looked in horror. She added, I'm kidding, he'll be fine. And as if she could possibly know that, and anyway, if and when they ran into trouble, she clearly wasn't going to be much help, not with one hand gripping the lead and the other stuck inside of an iron boot, and hand gripping on the lead, and the other stuck inside of an iron boot. Listen, I took some things in a cartographer's house, said Ben, and holding up a hand for full star objection and added, out of necessity, and I'm only borrowing them for our errand. I mean, our quest. Quest does not sound more impressive, agreed Bobby. Ben helped up a map. It's a locator map. I cloned it from another one I left inside the cartographer's house. Long story short, this map will always show the way back to Plaintown, so we don't have to worry about getting lost. It'll even work when we're traveling underground. Underground? Echoed Bobby. That sounds dangerous. Quests are dangerous, Ben answered. If it were up to me, we'd be traveling overland by day, and there are other few dangers in camping at night. But we have got your brother's skin condition to worry about. So we're going overland by night and underground by day. You have your pickaxe, Bobby showed him. Good. But there's sure to be remember the first rule of entry. Don't dig straight down. Why not? Asked Bobby. Well, you never know what's directly beneath your feet, and you wouldn't want to drop down to tremendous distance or fall into lava, or land in the grip of an ugly, stinky, slobbering zombie. He turned to Johnny. No offense. He turned back to Bobby. Now, are you sure you grabbed everything of value? He quickly corrected himself. Of use, I mean. Value in a useful sense. Bobby sighed, throwing her pickaxe and looking through her meager belongings. It's like I told you before, every chest in town is ransacked at some point. I think it might have happened right after the siege, when I was distracted. But you definitely have the emeralds, Ben said. Oh my gosh, yes, she said, and she had one out and waved it in his face. We had them hidden away and no one would look. I promise you're going to get paid. I wasn't worried about that, Ben said, fibbing a little. And it's not like he was greedy. He was amassed a lot of good gear with those emeralds. And good gear meant staying alive, improving his mettle. They did not have good gear at the moment. Ben and Bobby each had a bow, but they only had 5 arrows between them, which wouldn't last them very long. They also each one sword and one pickaxe, none of which were particularly good quality. They would need replacements and upgrades soon. Then Ben wore his iron chestplate, which would have been worn down before Bobby had added a puncture mark, and he cobbled together a new pair of leather boots, or the toes should, in fact, be safe from zombie nibbles. Zombie had normal, unarmored clothing. Aside from her boots and her iron helmet that gleamed in the light of the moon, it had clearly never seen combat. Johnny, of course, wore the tattered remnants of the once truly adorable baby clothes. They would have to be careful. A single hostile mob, if it got the drop of the would spell their doom. Well, nobody lives forever, Ben said glibly. Should we get going? Ben had thought Bobby would be eager to get started, but hesitated. In a minute, she said at last. Just give us a minute first. Bobby pulled on Johnny's lead, and the two walked over to the lone poppy growing near the town center. Bobby kneeled before the flower. Thank you for saving me, he said, and she patted her own helmet. You were still protecting me, even now. I'm taking a piece of you with me. She turned to her brother. I want you to say anything? Grar, said the zombie boy, who stared blankly again at it with his creepy little eyes. He was always good to you, said Bobby. Ben tried to give him some space for whatever it was they were doing. He turned away from them, twirling his sword in his hand and looking up at the moon. It was a rare moment of peace. And then Ben was struck from behind. Tumbled forward, barely managing to stay on his feet. That had hurt. What's the big idea? He shouted, whirling around. Bobby looked up from the poppy, beneath her helmet. She surprisingly wiped a tear away. Johnny feigned empty-handed. What's the matter? Bobby asked. Your pet zombie just attacked me. Johnny tilted his head, as if confused. Grr, he said. He did not, Bobby argued. I was holding on to his lead the whole time. Well, hold it tighter, Ben said, rubbing his aching back. We're not going to get very far if he takes a bite out of me every time I turn. Look out! Ben's warning came too late. A strange creature had dropped from the sky. It had large, tattered wings, eerie green eyes, and exposed bones sticking out as long as its body. It struck Bobby from behind, then swooped back in the sky before either of them had a chance to react. Ow, said Bobby. Is that a giant bat? Way worse, said Ben. He held up a sword in front of him. Phantom. Ben looked up in the sky, where he counted at least 5 phantoms circling high above them. When's the last time you slept through the night? I don't know, answered Bobby. I mean, my brother's nocturnal, so I might have been focused on looking for a cure. I sort of lost track of the days. Well, these things can set you exhaustion. They strike when you're weak. The phantom swept down to attack him, but he sidestepped, slashing it with the sword as it passed. Lucky me. Now they're here. They don't seem too picky about who they attack. Ow, said Bobby again, dropping Johnny's lead. Oh, perfect, thought Ben. Now they had to deal with phantoms and a zombie he wasn't allowed to destroy. But then Johnny leaped into action. It was a phantom he pounced upon. The one he had struck with his sister. He tore into it, and the phantom pounded its wings, taking the sky in panic. He had the zombie actually protected her? Ben had never seen anything like that happen before. Then again, maybe Johnny had just lashed out the nearest moving target. Could you please hold on to that lead? Ben complained. We've got to get out of here, fast. But he barely dodged another phantom. There are too many of them. We gotta dig straight down. But you said never do that, Bobby said. Well, why start listening to me now? Dig, dig. Ben struck the dirt beneath his feet, and the ground was gone. He was falling, hurtling straight down to an open space. He opened his mouth to scream, and then landed on his feet. Oh, he said. That wasn't too bad, actually. Bobby landed on his heap beside him. Johnny was pulled along his lead, so he was landing on top of her. Ben helped pull her out from under the zombie while it was still dazed. Are we safe from the phantoms? Bobby asked as she dusted herself off. I don't think he'll follow us underground, Ben answered. But just to be sure, he leaped up and using the dirt to plug the holes they'd fallen through. Now there were no way the phantoms would reach them. Then double-checked that Bobby had a good grip on Johnny's leash. And then he took a breath and surveyed their surroundings. They landed in some sort of tunnel. It had cobblestone floors and walls and dirt ceiling, and it measured 5 blocks across, 6 high. Room whatever maneuver, but as far as spacious. Torches were placed along the eastern wall at regular intervals, and a rail ran along the ground. Someone built this, and recently, I think, said Ben. He turned to Bobby. I've seen some mine shafts before, but they're always old and falling apart and full of, he shuddered, spiders. This is either brand new or well maintained. There are many miners in your village. She shook her head. No, nobody spent their time underground. I would have noticed. She tapped her chin. It's weird, though. I didn't notice the light coming from underground the night of the zombie siege. After everything had happened, I forgot about this tunnel. The source of light I saw. It must run directly under the library. And beyond, Ben peered up and down the tunnel. It continued straight in a direction for as far as the eye could see. Well, we may as well be taking advantage of it. You want to head that way, said Ben, pointing north. Then she turned back to Bobby. She saw her gaze on the ceiling. Some part of her wanted to linger. I'm sorry for goodbyes were cut short, said Ben. That's all right, said Bobby, and she forced a smile. We'll be back soon, right? Just a quick errand quest first. We'll be back before you know it, Ben promised, doing his very best to keep the doubt he felt out of his voice. Chapter 13. It's not forever, that's what Bobby told herself as she followed Ben down the eerie subterranean path. He was leaving her village behind, her home, and because they were underground, she wasn't even sure how far they'd gone yet. Would they still see Clark Avery's temple rising above the plains? She were up in the ground level right now? Or were they past the plains already and underneath the forest, or even distant mountains? Bobby had no idea, but she promised herself she'd be back, just as soon as her brother was cured. Johnny gurgled and growled from behind her, and she dragged him along. It was tiring, keeping close to not so close. She didn't trust Ben not to take his lead, though. Johnny was her responsibility. Okay, hold up, said Ben. She stopped looking from his map. We have to go any further in this direction, we'll overshoot our mark. We need to veer east, but the phantoms are still a problem if we don't get some rest first. You packed a bed, right? Bobby set her bed down, positioning it against the wall just beneath the torch. As she glad for the light, but also perplexed by it. Somebody had put a torch here, just as somebody had laid the rails. But why? I don't get it, said Bobby. Aren't you curious about the rail lines go? Or who built it? It must serve some purpose. I'm not curious, said Ben, and he set his own bed a little farther down the tunnel. But the overworld was full of strange stuff. He'd seen some abandoned mine shafts, desert temples, structures that somebody must have built for some reason. But that reason could be anybody's guess. He sat on his bed without removing any of his armor first. So, you can waste brain power making guesses, or you can focus on survival. I highly recommend the latter, because not surviving sounds like a real drag. Better to live in ignorance than die knowledgeable, said Bobby. Got it. Is that lesson number 2? That is not what I said, Ben huffed. I only mean that there are things you need to know in order to survive out here. And the purpose of getting underground rail isn't one of those things. He pointed at the spot beyond her bed, a good distance from where it was at. Now set down a fence post, tie your brother to it, and let him sleep. Tomorrow's going to be challenging enough without having to worry about phantoms. Bobby had thought she'd find it difficult to fall asleep, and the opposite was true. The moment he hopped into bed, before she even taken off her helmet, she fell into a deep, dreamless slumber. Ben awoke by her throwing an egg at her, which Bobby felt was the definition of a rude awakening. Really? She said. You couldn't gently shake my shoulder or something? I couldn't get any closer, Ben said, defensively from the short distance away. He pointed at Johnny, who stood vigilant at the foot of her bed, surrounded by several torches that had knocked off the wall. She wouldn't let me get anywhere near you, Ben explained. Sweet baby, Bobby said, patting Johnny's head. Were you guarding me all night? Did you need any sleep? Johnny growled. It almost sounded like a purr of a content cat. I scattered around topside, said Ben. We're near the road and leads into Avatown. Bobby was surprised by that. You left us down here all alone? She asked. Sure, said Ben. You looked like you needed to sleep, and sweet baby over there was on guard duty. Bobby rubbed her arm, feeling a sudden chill. I don't think we should split up, she said. If I woke up and you weren't there, that seemed to strike a chord of some kind in Ben. His eyes softened, then he spoke. He sounded unusually solemn. Hey, I wouldn't abandon you like that, I promise. He rubbed his back of his head. But you're right. We should stick together, and I found something that might make it easier. Just keep an open mind about it. Ben seemed suddenly hesitant, and Bobby found that deeply suspicious. Go on, she said. To her surprise, Ben produced a carved pumpkin from his inventory. Having it up in both hands, he grinned and said, What do you think? It is Johnny's size. Chapter 14. Ben felt a carved pumpkin was a marked improvement. Admit it, he said to Bobby. It suits him. Bobby frowned. Well, he can tell where you're mocking him. Johnny grumbled, turning from Ben to his sister, and then wobbled slightly. His head was completely enclosed within the pumpkin, which was almost as big as his body, making him a bit unsteady to his feet. The pumpkin's carved smile made the zombie boy appear downright jovial. Who's mocking? Said Ben. It's pragmatic. It's stylish. It's unique. Form and function in a single accessory. He pointed out the sun as it traversed the eastern sky. Or haven't you noticed that your brother, unique among dead monstrosities, has not caught fire in the light of the sun? That's probably a good perk. Bobby blinked into the sun. I thought you were lying about that. Oh, come on, said Ben. You think I want to see your brother catch on fire? You want me to answer that truthfully? She asked, putting her hands on her lips. Look, I'm glad it means you can travel by daylight. She watched her brother look up the clouds and almost topple backward. I can't help wondering if there's more dignified option here. Well, said Ben, I suppose you could give him your helmet, or you could wear the pumpkin. As he talked, he set 2 blocks of stone down, one atop the other, and then he placed the lit torch on top. At Bobby's questioning look, he explained, I'd like to leave little markers for myself as I travel. If we need to find our way back to the rail tunnel, this should make it a little bit easier to find. Johnny swatted the torch, knocking it from its perch. I'll try not to take that personally, said Ben. They traveled a good distance in peace. It was a clear day with no monsters to be seen, excepting Johnny, and though Bobby had found it necessary to greet every animal they passed, Ben felt that they were making good time. At their current pace, they might even make it to Avatown before nightfall, but Ben knew they're better than to count his turtles before they hatched. So he kept his eyes open, scanning the horizon for danger, and he wasn't entirely surprised when he saw a figure on the horizon ahead. "Hey, heads up," Ben warned. "Someone's coming this way." He drew his sword. "Is that really necessary?" asked Bobby. "Third rule of adventuring," said Ben. "You can't win a sword fight with your holding a sunflower." "Sure," said Bobby, "but a sunflower might help avoid the fight altogether." "Better safe than sorry," Ben sighed. "Anyway, what happened to me being the boss?" "Well, I thought you about it some more," said Bobby. "I bet you did," Ben groused. "And," Bobby continued emphatically, "I realize that I'm paying you. That means, technically, that you work for me. Ergo, if either of us is the boss, it's you," Ben said, finishing her thought. He stopped walking, forced her to stop too. "But you're paying me to keep you safe. I can't do that if you don't let me. And, if you don't mind me being honest with you, this ought to be good. You are alarmingly naive." Ben held up a hand to forestall her argument. "I don't mean it as an insult. It's sort of charming. But that person on the road ahead of us could be X-wheeling Illager, or an adventurer looking to steal our stuff, or a trigger-happy Trader Riley," said Bobby. "Sure," said Ben. "A trigger-happy Trader Riley. What would be another example, I guess?" "No, you goof," said Bobby. "I recognize him." He started running up the path, calling back to his shoulder. "There's a merchant. They would come through the plain town sometimes." Ronnie pulled behind her in a wake, growled in the attempt to bite Ben as he passed. "Yeah, good luck biting anything through that helmet, chomp chomp," Ben muttered, low that Bobby could hear it. Ben sheathed his sword and followed behind them, and he didn't hurry. At this distance, he would see that Bobby was right, and the stranger appeared harmless. They wore a fine garment of blue, accessored with glittering gold trim, with a matching hat and simple sandals. Like Bobby, the trader had held a lead, but instead of the zombified sibling, the trader was pulling along two llamas. The llamas wore colorful carpets and agreed expressions, but then llamas would always look a little irate to Ben. Having been to receiving end of a llama spit more than once, he's not particularly fond of the animals. As he caught up, Bobby was giving tearful, abbreviated account of Plaintown's fate. "They're all gone," he said, and the trader honked and humped in response. "Wearing a pumpkin? That's Johnny. You remember him. He's just a little under the weather." Ben could see Bobby straining to keep Johnny still. The trader made more noises and Bobby chuckled. "His name's Ben. He says he's a hero, but he's some sort of, like, mercenary." "Hang on," said Ben. "Do you understand each other?" He pointed at the trader. "They're just making gibberish noises," Bobby tutted. "First of all, rude. Second of all, just because you don't know the language doesn't make it gibberish." He lifted her chin. "It actually sounds quite poetic to me. And it isn't so hard to get the gist, if you pay attention." Trader Wiley honked in what seemed to be an agreement, or perhaps in a very short poem. "I'll take your word for it," said Ben. Bobby turned back to Riley. "He said he's very nice to make your acquaintance." "Yes, he's very polite for a mercenary." While Bobby and Riley continued the conversation, Ben watched Riley's llamas. They appeared especially grievous, stamping and bleeding. They eyed Johnny warily. Johnny, for this part, had grown unusually still. It was hard to know where the gaze was pointing to until he wore the pumpkin. But Ben had a feeling he knew that Johnny's intention. Bobby," said Ben. "Just a minute, Ben," she said, focus remaining on the trader. "That's lovely. How are you selling it for?" Bobby rooted around in her inventory, letting her guard down. It was just for 1 second, but a second was all it took. Johnny pulled free of her grasp, lunging into the nearest llama, who bleated in alarm. In absolute chaos, Johnny was still particularly restrained by the helmet. Couldn't eat the animals, but he swiped at them, tearing into them with his claws. Bobby shouted for him to stop. The llamas retaliated with copious amounts of spit, and Trader Riley, reasonably enough, in Ben's opinion, chugged a potion of invisibility and vanished from view. "Hey, stop laughing and help me," said Bobby. Ben hadn't realized he'd been laughing, but she was right. By the time he reached her side, he only let in her hand and was straining a pull of Johnny of llama number 1. Llama number 2 had taken off, running for the hills. "Sorry," Ben said, still chuckling a bit, "but you know I would have been able to react faster if I had my sword drawn and ready like I wanted." "And who are you going to stab in this scenario?" Bobby said sharply, finally pulling the brother away. The llama spat at Johnny one more time before turning tail and running. "A sword doesn't solve everything," Bobby continued. "It doesn't solve most things. It could have solved the llama's attitude problem," Ben countered. "They're all like that, you know. My friend Logan used to run up and slap him, then he'd hide, so they'd spit on me." "He sounds like a terrible friend," said Bobby, exhaling. Johnny gave up pursuing animals. He led once lack when he finally let down. "What? No," said Ben. "It was a joke. A game." He chuckled again, but this time it was a little forced. "We were both in on it." "If you say so," said Bobby, but her attention was elsewhere. "Johnny, what am I going to do with you? Here, look at this." She produced a seashell from her inventory, a Natalis shell, and waved it at her brother. Johnny remained uninterested, but it caught Ben's eye. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. "I just bought it from Riley," he said Bobby. "It only cost 5 emeralds." Ben gasped. "You spent 5 emeralds on that?" She said. "Sure, Bobby friend. Why not? It's pretty." "I've never seen—" "It's useless," said Ben. We need armor. We need real weapons. My soul is a dull hunk of stone. He pulled the sword out and waved it for a point. That trader obviously had a potion of invisibility. You could have bought that. They weren't offering any potions for sale, Bobby said. It was either the Natal shell or a bucket of fish, which you would have known would bother to interact with Riley at all instead of giving those llamas a stink eye for the last 5 minutes. Oh, fine, said Ben, throwing up his hands. Just maybe don't spend any more emeralds without talking to me first. At least I know what they're worth. You can do whatever you want with the emeralds, said Bobby, once you have earned them by completing your part of the bargain. She cast a hopeless look at Johnny. She can't keep going on like this. I have to cure my brother. I know, said Ben, chastened. His temper evaporated at the sight of desperation in her voice. Come on, Sabatown is just this way, and the path looks clear. He put his sword away, hoping that it would put Bobby more at ease. If he could notice the column of smoke snaking above the horizon, he might have kept it at it ready. Chapter 15. What happened here? Asked Ben, and Bobby knew the answer. He knew, and he wished he didn't. It was a zombie siege, she said. Bobby looked at the scene. It was a village much like hers, except the building materials were different. The wood was more vibrant red, the terracotta where Playtown had used stone, and the detail of the wood stood out immediately to Bobby, the lack of doors. The homes didn't build that way. Something had smashed through them. Ben looked skeptical. Are you sure? He asked. I mean, another zombie siege? What are the odds? Could it be the same group of zombies? Bobby asked, roaming across the land, hitting on one village after another. No way, said Ben. He looked up at the moon. They couldn't make it to another single night, and they burn up in the sun, remember? Johnny found a way around the problem, Bobby said, and he inclined her head toward the brother, who was tied to a post. She moved his helmet, and the sun got down. He couldn't make the feeling that he found it uncomfortable, even if Ben insisted Johnny had shown no obvious signs of discomfort. Well, technically, I found a way around it, Ben pointed. I don't think a pack of growing zombies is going to figure out the same trick. They're nowhere near smart enough. He turned to Johnny. No offense, champ. Johnny growled, staring at his lead. Ben looked over the booped his nose. Bobby turned in a slow circle, taking in the damage. There might have been survivors. He probably hoped there had been, but if so, they seemed to have fled. She turned to Ben. Do you think they left anything useful lying around here? Oh, ho, said Ben in an obnoxious tone of voice. Isn't that interesting? Suddenly it's okay to take other people's things, Bobby scowled. It's not like that. Well, the moral line is looking a little hazy is all I'm saying. He smiled. Come on, I'm teasing. Let's go shopping. Ben led the way to the nearest home, practically skipping it seemed excessively pleased that Bobby was going along with this, eluding Bobby for her part. Decided she couldn't afford it if the villagers had left behind anything that could keep them alive, or otherwise help her brother. Then she was willing to bend her own moral code. Ben hoped up through the open doorway. As Bobby watched, he saw a sudden violent change come over him. Even from behind, he saw a view of his face. It was unmistakable. His elation was gone in an instant, and a trembling thrum of terror leaped through him, nearly as soon as he stepped through the open doorway. Oh no, he cried. Mercy, mercy, oh help. Bobby ran forward, practically leaping through the doorframe, but then he came to a sudden halt. It was the fear of hesitation, and he held her rooted floor. It was a tangled mess of sticky webbing that she'd seen up to his waist, and as it clung to her fiercely, she couldn't see what she could still move, but barely, in a tremendous effort. Where did this come from? She asked. Ben sputtered. Spider! Ben pointed, directing Bobby's eyes to the darkened corner of the room. He was right. A large spider crouched in the corner of the black body, almost impossible to see in the shadows, but her glittering eyes shone in the dark, and as it considered her caught in his web. Oh, it's okay, said Bobby. I don't think it's hostile. But ignoring her completely, Ben drew a bow and fired an arrow at the spider. Well, now it's hostile, said Bobby. Ben shot off 2 more arrows, and its arm was erratic, and the spider enclosed the distance quickly, scurrying impeded through the webs. As it neared the striking distance, Bobby thought Ben would draw a sword. Instead, he curled up into a ball. What are you doing? Bobby demanded, and then Ben only whimpered. She added, What should I do? Help, was all Ben said. Oh, this is ridiculous, said Bobby, as she drew her sword, swiftly cutting through the webs away from her body. Clearing a small area, she stepped forward and stabbed out with her sword, slaying the spider with 2 hits. You can come out now, Bobby said, cutting the webbing away from Ben's crouching form. It's gone? Ben asked, keeping his eyes clenched tight. It's gone, Bobby confirmed. And this is way less dangerous than those phantoms you tried to fight. What just happened? I don't like bugs, Ben said painfully. Bobby thought he might be elaborate, but he could only dust himself off and stepped out into the night. Bobby scooped up several spider eyes before following him. He knew they were useful in potions. After a thorough inventory of abandoned village, Ben and Bobby found precious little use. They managed to collect several loaves of bread, some round flesh, and gently used shield. Ben thrilled at the sight. The cleric, of course, was gone, and they hadn't left behind a single potion. Ben lingered at the cartographer's home. It was similar to the one in Plaintown, and the large map upon his wall covered a different area. Bobby opened that note. Ben seemed particularly preoccupied with the muddy brown region that, she assumed, had to be some sort of swamp. "What is it?" she asked him. "It's nothing," he said. Then he shook his head as if to clear it. "Come on, let's get your brother to choose a house to stay in for the night. I'll replace the door." They stepped outside, and Bobby was overwhelmed by the sense of hopelessness. It didn't matter which house they chose. They were all the same. All husk, empty of everything that had given them purpose. It was true for Savatown, as it was for Plaintown. "You may as well just leave us here," said Bobby as she sat down in the dirt. "Huh?" said Ben. "Leave you here in Savatown?" He made a show of looking around. "Cute place, but there's not much of a nightlife." "I know this wasn't the deal," said Bobby. "The deal was you bring us here and take us back again." "But what's the difference? Why even go back? There isn't anything for us here." She rooted around the inventory, pulling out a stack of emeralds. "Here," she said, putting in the ground between them. "I think that should cover it." Ben stepped toward the emeralds, but he stopped short. "Hold on," said Ben. "That's what we agreed to? Are you sure?" Bobby looked at him. "Isn't that enough?" she asked. "Is all I have." "It's enough," said Ben. He scratched his head comically. "But I thought our deal was to take it back home after we figure out the cure. We haven't done that yet. Wait, let me check." He ran over to Johnny, extending a hand toward her brother. Johnny attempted to bite him, but then Ben ready for that and too quick, pulling away and leaving Johnny's teeth clacked close in the empty air. Ben ran into the air. "He's still a zombie," he reported. "So, we're not finished yet." Bobby searched Ben's face, half expecting there to be a prank of some kind. Are you serious?" she asked. "I'm pretty sure. I thought, listen, I don't go getting all weepy on me," said Ben. "This is just business. Suppose I got around and I took your emeralds and didn't deliver on my end." He clicked his tongue, shook his head. That sort of negative review could follow a guy around for ages. Bobby resisted the urge to leap up in the dirt and hug him. He clearly wanted to maintain an illusion that he was no big deal. But Bobby knew it was doing for her, and she was grateful. "I appreciate your professionalism," she said, rubbing at her eyes. "But unless you know where to find another cleric, I'm not sure we go from here." "I don't know where to find a cleric," said Ben, "but I might be able to get us to the next best thing. I know the detail of the map back there." He shook his head. "That might be a terrible idea, but it's the only one I've got." "What?" asked Bobby. "What's the idea?" "Well," said Ben, "have you ever met a witch before?" Chapter 16. Bobby, Johnny, and Ben were off to find a witch, and seemed entirely uncertain about this plan. It had been his plan to begin with. If Johnny had an opinion one way or another, he was keeping his thoughts to himself. For either part, Bobby was happy to have something to do. As soon as they started moving again, the despair she felt back in Savannah Town had fallen away. The new hope had bloomed in the hollow space where worries lived. That hope had carried her through all long day of walking and on into the night. Bobby had always thought of some people who were naturally hopeful. That optimism was simply a personality trait. It wasn't until confronted with tragedy that she realized the truth. Hope was something you worked for. It looked constant effort to seek solutions, to believe those solutions were out there, in the face of ceaseless harrowing problems. Because you need to see these problems, the problems they're undeniable. But the solutions, those had to be crafted. They were on grassy expanse, but wasn't quite like the plains that surrounded Plaintown. Even in the moonlight, Bobby could see grass here that was slightly discolored, less vibrant shade of green than she was used to seeing. Nearby, there were sparse trees strewn with vines. A shallow pool of murky water, more like a huge puddle than a lake. Bobby's boots were made a squelching sound. "It's entirely wet here," he said. "I'll take you to the nicest places, don't I?" said Ben. "We should be right on the edge of the swamp now, in the middle of the night, which is good for Jubilant Johnny over there, but not great for us." He swiped at the vine with his sword. "Have your weapon ready. We can run into trouble pretty quickly." Bobby did as he suggested, switching to the lead to her offhand and switching her sword to her right. She looked briefly from her gleaming iron sword to Ben's sorry stone version. "I've been wondering about something," she said, considering her words carefully. She never entirely sure how she would bend off. She seemed to be a lot of sore points. "You've been adventuring for a while now, right? So why don't you have a better gear?" "I did have better gear," he answered, "but some pretty great stuff, in fact. But shortly before I met you, I lost it." "That seems careless." "I took precautions," Ben argued. "But everything was stolen from me, by someone I trusted, actually." "Oh," Bobby said. "I'm sorry, that's hard." "Yeah," said Ben, "thanks. Although—" "Oh, please don't," said Ben. "Please don't what?" "Please don't turn into one of this big sister teachable moments," he said. "I don't do that," Bobby ejected, which a raised eyebrow. "I don't. I just thought it was worth pointing out that your reaction to getting looted was apparently to come to Plaintown so you could loot us. So maybe it's worth examining whether to think of the cycle of plundering as a problem, and, if so, whether your actions are particularly responsible for perpetuating the cycle." Ben groaned, and Johnny echoed him. Hey, I think I understand why he makes that noise now, Ben said. He's totally exasperated by you. So rude, said Bobby. I hope we run into the wild wolves that raised you, so that I can ask them where they went wrong. As they walked, the ground became more sodden, and the trees grew closer together. Soon, it was hard to see the moon past the towering trunks and their dense hanging foliage. I'd never seen trees like these before, said Bobby, and pressed a hand on one as they passed. They're mangroves, Ben explained. They grow big and strong around water. He took another step and suddenly up to his knees in swamp water. Ick, he said. I prefer solid ground myself. Bobby growled, which itself wasn't unusual, but this time he tempered off the different. He sent prickles down Bobby's back. It somehow was like a warning. She raised her sword and turned to peer the shadows beneath the trees. She saw a light wavering in the water, a green luminescence that she took at first was some sort of otherworldly flame. She heard stories of ghost lights haunting the overworld's mires, luring unwavering travelers to a murky, drowning doom. But she isn't certain that those spooky stories meant to dissuade young villagers from leaving the safety of their homes. She rubbed her eyes, blinked fiercely, and looked again. She saw now what was a ghostly light, but instead of quivering, gleaming its mass, its wet surface reflected the moonlight that it was separated from within. It was a sickly shade of green, and as it propelled itself forward in a bouncing motion, Bobby could see a shadowy impression of its face on an otherwise inhuman form. It's cute, she said, lowering her sword. Sure, cute, said Ben. Too bad it's a malevolent ball of slime intent on destroying us. Bobby smirked. You said that about the llamas, too. Llamas are jerks, and everyone knows it, Ben said hotly. He stepped between Bobby and the slime, brandishing his sword. I'm starting to question your judgment. Ben waited until the slime took one more quivering leap forward. Then he slashed out with the sword. The slime caught mid-leap was an easy target. But it did not fall to Ben's sword. Instead, it split apart, forming two separate slimes, with each half the size of the original. I'm questioning your judgment, Bobby said, lifting her sword again, because now there are two of them, and they're even cuter at that size, she thought, but did not say. She stood shoulder to shoulder with Ben, waiting to see if slimes could press the attack. Should we retreat, she asked. It's too dark out here, he said. And there are so much things than slimes. Last thing we want to do is run into another threat while we have slimes on our back. Okay, said Bobby. Then I have the one on the left. Bobby, then paying attention, just as Ben said before, waited for the slime to make its move, and she caught it mid-leap. To her consternation, it split in half again. This is ridiculous, she said. To her right, Ben was having the same issue. Still think you're cute? I mean, kind of, she said. Now they're pocket-sized. Just smite them, please, said Ben. Smite them, she echoed. Do adventures actually talk like that? Despite her teasing, Bobby prepared to do as Ben had suggested. Then Johnny leaped suddenly forward, gobbling up one of the tiny slimes in a single gulp. Said Bobby, stopping in her track. Ew, said Ben. That can't be healthy. Johnny made a gurgling noise, and Bobby decided to take care of the remaining slimes before her brother tried to help himself to seconds. Smite, she said, thwacking the sword to the dirt. The remaining slimes were so small that they made for difficult targets. Come on, Ben, smite, smite. I'm smiting, he said, laughing. Johnny watched them as they slashed at the tiny hopping mobs, and he realized that some up silently burp. Chapter 17. The swamp was still and silent, except for the frogs moving just outside the reach. Ben took a moment to enjoy their frantic hopping. He rarely had a reason to pass through the swamp, and never been amphibians anywhere else. Bobby seemed charmed by them, too. Even her slobbering sibling stood transfixed by the sight, which was good, because it kept young Zombie from rocking the boat, literally. After the slime smiting, Ben had directed Bobby to collect the slime balls left behind. You never know what might come in handy later, he told her sagely, and he was pretty certain she'd appreciate the advice. Even though she made a face at him, while she gathered goods and kept jaundiced Johnny off the back, Ben had hacked into the mangrove to collect the wood he needed to construct a small rowboat. Then he realized that none of them were a murderous zombie, and he gathered enough wood to craft a second boat. I don't see why we're in separate boats, Bobby called from across the water. Were you worried about getting separated? I'm worried about a lot of things, Ben answered. Getting my nose bitten off by your brother is pretty high on my list. Bobby sighed. He's probably full after eating that slime, she said, as if it would make Ben feel any less concerned about the boy's appetites. It was in the heart of the swamp that Ben saw he had hoped and dreaded to see. The trees fall away, and the draping vines parted, and the rickety structure loomed before them, rising out of the water on a tall wooden stilts. In the moonlight, it looked like some strange boxy animal standing on legs too thin to reasonably support its weight. There, Ben whispered, hoping he would be heard by Bobby and no one else. That's the swamp's hut. There should be a witch inside. I hope they're feeling helpful, said Bobby. I'd hate to be turning into a frog or something. Oh, don't worry about that, said Ben. They'll probably just outright kill us. Bobby chuckled weakly. And you think I'll be able to reason with them? I don't know about reasoning with them, said Ben, but I hope you'll be able to communicate with them at least. He shrugged. I admit, it's a long shot. I've encountered a couple of witches in the past, and they don't make sense of anything they said.
But if it was true of Wandering Trader, too, and you're chatting them up without any problem, so witches are all about potions, right? Bobby asked. All I can say for sure is that, on 2 different occasions, a witch has thrown a potion at my face, he smirked. And if it happens a 3rd time, I'm going to start wondering if I'm a problem. You're the problem, Bobby deadpanned. Ben ignored her jab. So, how do you want to do this? He asked her. I don't know, said Bobby. I figured I'd just ask politely for information. Ben frowned. Sure, after we sneak into the witch's hut, knock them out, and tie them to a chair, right? What? No, Bobby said, was obviously appalled by the thought. Why would they tell us something after we invaded their home and threatened them? Because our threats will be very convincing. Adventurers, honestly, Bobby said. You can't just go acting around as if you're entitled to everything. Please stop yelling, said Ben. Bobby appeared immediately remorseful. Ben, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I wasn't worried about my feelings, Ben said in a low voice. I was just worried that you were being too loud. It was the moment that the wicked cackle rang out across the water. Ben's gaze snapped to the hut, where a figure had appeared in the open doorway. The figure resembled a villager, but wore peaked and flowing purple robes. Despite being the source of miraculous laughter, they did not seem especially good-natured. Which, he said, pointing. Yes, thank you, I see them, Bobby sang. Then raised her voice. Hello, kindly witch, mage of the mire, Bruja of Burring, esteemed wise person of the wilderness. The witch had a splash potion in her grip, but Ben gestured for Bobby to get to the point already. We are on a quest to seek your aid, she said. You see, my brother's been transformed, and I was hoping you know of a cure. Or of that you would invent one. The witch paced up and down the porch of the hut, waving the flask around and yapping unintelligibly. Oh no, said Bobby. I can't understand what they're saying. She turned to Ben. They're almost sound like a villager, but not quite. I think I'm picking up some hostility, though. You think so? Said Ben. Hostility, you said. And with a sharp cackle, the witch hurled a flask at Bobby. Duck, said Ben, and Bobby didn't listen. He took a full brunt of splash potion and a flask shattered against her. Hey, that hurt, said Bobby. Why didn't you duck? Cried Ben. My baby brother is right behind me, said Bobby. I can't let him get hit. I've never been so glad I'd be an only child, muttered Ben, and he paddled out in front of Bobby. Hey, witchy, he cried, waving his arm. Why don't you aim over here instead? What are you doing? Bobby asked him with a witch madcap cackling. I have a shield. I'll be fine, he told her. You sneak around back and build a staircase up to the porch. And then what do I do? Bobby asked, already paddling away. Ben met with an upcoming potion and a shield. It shattered as he battled lingering fumes away. Try asking politely one more time, said Ben. Really? Said Bobby. No, he said. Hit him over the head with something heavy. Or sick that nightmare you call a brother on him. That's a rude thing to say, and we'll discuss it later, Bobby called, as he battled around to the far side of the hut. Ben, through a combination of taunts, gestures, and experimental dance moves, managed to keep the witch's attention on him. As he dodged a 5th potion, Ben began to wonder when Bobby would make her dramatic entrance. He kept expecting to see her sword poking through the witch, or perhaps Johnny would tackle the mob, sailing over the edge of the balcony and dragging the witch into murky water below. Then Ben would have a perfect view of whatever ending befell their witchery adversary. As he dodged the 6th potion, he called with a sing-song voice. What's taking you so long up there? We're done, said Bobby, and her voice was not coming from above. It reappeared from around the far side of the stilts, rowing her boat toward Ben, Johnny gnawing absentmindedly on a bone. What do you mean you're done? Said Ben, and distracted he ducked a thrown potion just in time. I thought you were going to smite the witch. I was always smiting with you, Bobby said, and she smiled. I went through the witch's things, found a recipe book with different formulas the cleric ever had. Maybe there's something there we can use. And there where the bone come from? And asked, a little bit afraid to answer. Oh, that was just lying on the floorboard, said Bobby. Is that sanitary? Asked Ben. Well, he wanted to eat the cat, said Bobby, so it felt like it was a good compromise. Ben sighed. I guess zombies probably don't have to worry about germs, he said. Then he turned his head up toward the witch. You don't know how lucky you are. If that had been up to me there, you would have been smited or smote. I'm sorry about the burglary, Bobby called up to the witch as she rowed past Ben and back toward shore. I want to break the callous cycle of looting, so I'll try to find a way to take your book back to you one day. As Ben rowed after her, he called over his shoulder, but we're keeping the bone. Chapter 18. The sun threatened to rise at any moment, and Johnny put up a fuss when Bobby tried to put a pumpkin on his head. So Ben suggested he set up camp as soon as they had put a little distance between themselves and the witch. The spot should be fine, Ben said, and he brought up his pickaxe to bear against the low, soggy hill in the outskirts of the swamp. Within seconds, he had carved out a small space just below ground level, with a torchlight and room for beds and crafting stations, in case they decided to stay there for the day. Bobby sat beneath the torch and set immediately to examine the book she'd stolen. It's not completely coherent, said Bobby. It's mostly scribbles and drawings, but I can interpret some of it, especially the open pages. He shouted up for Ben to see. Look at this first entry. Ben leaned through the look, but then as soon as he got close, Johnny growled menacingly. Why don't you summarize it for me, he suggested. Bobby nodded. Well, from what I can tell, the witch wasn't always a witch. They were a village cleric, and they used the book to record their experiments. She flipped through the pages. Something bad happened. A storm, a bolt of lightning, transformed them. She looked at her brother, tied to a wooden post. They're like Johnny in a way, she said sadly. Keep reading, said Ben. Check your gear. Maybe patch things up with some torches. You hungry? Bobby frowned. I don't think I can eat when we're clear of the swamp. It smells funny in here. Yeah, Ben agreed. Now that you mention it, it smells sort of like rotten flesh. I wonder what that could be. Bobby sniffed the air, and then grimaced. All the more reason to find a cure, he said, and turned back to the book in her lap. It was some time later than Ben was gnawing on a loaf of semi-stale bread with Bobby hopped suddenly to her feet. It's here! It's actually here! She looked over at Ben, a huge smile spreading across her face. The witch must have been looking for a cure in her own condition. They were documenting cures for all sorts of things. Everything from poisoning to bad luck curses to zombification. She passed him the book, opened the page with a hand-drawn illustration. He recognized the image immediately. That's a golden apple, he said. Is it a real thing? Bobby said. It exists? Yeah, said Ben. It exists. They are even craftable. Bobby looked the book back and flipped to the next page. We need one. If I understand this right, a golden apple, then combined with the effects of a potion of weakness, will cure Johnny completely and forever. Tears welled in Bobby's eyes. I knew it was possible. I just knew it. I guess I shouldn't have doubted you, Ben said. That's right, said Bobby, chuckling and wiped her cheeks. Are you a hugger? She asked. I think I'd like a hug. Sure, said Ben, and stepped toward her, and then stopped short when Johnny growled and put his lead. Or not, said Ben. Maybe later. Bobby nodded, her tears gone. Tell you what, she said. If you could tell me how to craft a golden apple, that would count as dozens of hug in one. It's a simple recipe, but it would take a long time to get our hands on enough gold, Ben replied. We might have the better luck trying to find one. My buddy, Logan, found one once. Do you know where Logan is now? Well, no, Ben said, and he felt a little pang. And anyway, he ate that one. He said it was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted, but I had to take his word for it. He did tell me where he found it, though. Hold on a minute. Ben rummaged through his things, pulling out the maps he'd taken from two photographers' house. He flipped through them, laying them out on the floor, searching for something he'd spotted earlier. There, he said, pointing at a small rectangle in the heart of the forest. A woodland mansion. He looked up at Bobby. It's not a sure thing, but you can sometimes find golden apples there. A mansion? Like in the storybooks? Bobby swooned. Is this the family who lives there nice? Do they want nothing more than a bounty of gold-plated fruits and vegetables with well-traveled strangers? Yeah, it's sort of like that, except the complete opposite, Ben shook his head. I'd better take another look at our gear, and you should get some sleep, because we're in a very tough fight. Time when Bobby failed to take his advice, Ben knew better than take it personally. He told her to get some sleep, and he knew she tried, but she was too anxious about her plan, too eager to get her brother back to normal. She lay in bed, but sleep wouldn't take her. Ben wondered if the fact that Johnny was looming right in the front of their bed contributed to her insomnia, too. He really watches me over when I sleep? She asked. Every time, said Ben. He won't let me get anywhere near you. We've come a long way, said Bobby. First few days as a zombie, he tried to eat me every chance he got. He seemed to consider something. Hey, come here, she said. Ben looked up at crafting. No way, he said. Didn't you just hear me? I get close. He gets bitey. Here, Bobby said. She tossed an iron boot in his direction. Put that on your hand. Before he could object, he said, if you wanted, we would skip the part where you whine about it and get right to the part where you do what I ask you to do. You underestimate me, Ben said, taking up the boot. I can whine while I do what you ask me to do. Is my hand going to smell like a foot after this? Johnny, look over there, said Bobby, and she pointed to the very underestimating wall of dirt. The zombie boy dutifully turned his head. However, gazing in the dirt, it held some great secret. With her brother distracted, Bobby slipped out of the bed, grabbed Johnny's bone from the floor, and handed it to Ben. He took it with a free hand. Great, said Ben. Now your hand smells like foot, and the other smells like zombie saliva. The bone is awfully wet, he narrowed his eyes at Bobby. And it's whining. That isn't whining. I'm just stating a fact. The sound of Ben's voice, Johnny turned a low growl at the throat. He took a few steps toward him and stopped him short. Okay, said Bobby. I want to get into his range. Offer him a bone? And what if he ignores the bone and goes after me? Asked Ben. That's fine, said Bobby. He can't chew through iron, and he can't maneuver very much if he's tied to his post. Keep your armored hand up in front of you, and you'll be okay. Ben crept forward toward both of his hands raised. There you go, Johnny, he cooed. Nice, slimy chew toy just for you, he frowned. To be clear, I'm talking about the bone. I'm not slimy. Johnny ignored Ben's humor, and he ignored the bone. As soon as Ben was in range, Zombie attempted to bite him, as Bobby had predicted. However, the boy's teeth didn't penetrate the makeshift gauntlet. It didn't stop him from trying, though. Johnny kept his mouth affixed to the boot, gnawing and drawing in equal measure. What is he even doing? Ben said. He's learning, Bobby said. Eventually, he figured out that trying to bite you only gets him a mouthful of bland iron, and that he'll be much happier going for the bone. Eventually, echoed Ben. How long will this take? Well, for me, it took a few hours. That isn't too bad, said Ben. A few hours every day, Bobby clarified, for many days in a row. Ben looked at Johnny, who was still nodding away futilely. I guess we all learn at our own pace, he said, sighing. But then he had an idea. So how about I give you a lesson now? Bobby seemed wary. What do you want to teach me? So many things, Ben said. He smirked at her. Let's start with combat. Chapter 19. So you've all heard about these mansions, but you've never seen one yourself, Bobby asked him, as they traveled across the overworld by the light of the moon. Actually, I did see one once, Ben told her, from the outside, at a safe distance. I heard all sorts of stories of what might be stalking around inside, and I figured I wasn't ready for this sort of challenge. He looked up at the moon. It was before I met Logan. He really helped me refine my skills. I'm ready for a woodland mansion now, he hoped. They had left the swamp behind then, and were traveling back through the savannah region surrounding Savannah Town. It was warm, like a swamp, but without all the murky water. Ben was relieved not to devote so much mental energy to watching his step, particularly since they needed to be on the lookout for hostile creatures. For once, they were trying to avoid all dangerous mobs. In fact, Ben was hoping to find a bit of trouble. It didn't take long. The trees were sparse, giving them a good view of their surroundings. And in the dead of night, monsters were never hard to come by. I see something, whispered Bobby. To the northwest. Ben strained his eyes, peering into the dark, then nodded. It's a creeper. That's perfect. You said a weird definition for perfect, said Bobby. Aren't creepers the ones who blow up? When you get close, yeah, said Ben. He ducked behind the tree and gestured for her to come to do the same. That means the timing of your attacks is critical. That's the exact lesson you need to learn. Bobby looked over his shoulder at him, and then tried to brother's lead to a post. My timing was pretty good against that spider in Savannah Town. Yeah, but I was drawing its attention with my strategic weeping, Ben said. That was the siege of your village. Did you fight any zombies that night? Sort of, Bobby answered, but I didn't defeat any. It would hit one and then run before I could recover. That's what I'm talking about, said Ben. It's easy enough to hit an enemy one time, but when a mob is coming after you, then it's really fighting back. You need to choose your moments carefully. Just lashing out randomly will leave you open to counterattack. Like with the slimes, said Bobby. The way you waited until they were leaping forward? Exactly, said Ben. It's even more important with a creeper. You have an iron sword, which means it'll take several hits to defeat it. If you send in place of a slash, you're in big trouble. Kaboom? Asked Bobby. Kaboom, Ben confirmed. Focus on your footwork. Keep some distance between you and the dart forward and slash when you see an opening. Bobby hefted her sword. She had a good grip. But Ben could see the doubt in her eyes. You got this, he said. You're smart, and that's what he wins to fight. He thought about it for a second. Sometimes the diamond sword wins a fight, but we work with that we have. As they approached the creeper, Ben let Bobby walk ahead of him. He kept close, though. He had a sword at his ready. If her timing was off and she got into trouble, he would only have seconds to step in and help her. But he didn't need to have worried. Bobby was the natural. Once the creeper had noticed her, she held her ground, letting it come to her, then batting it away with her sword as soon as it came up within reach. She just as Ben told her, keeping her sword up as she stepped back, then lunged forward for her attack. Bobby leaped up and cheered when the creeper last fell over and evaporated in a burst of harmless dust. Ben wanted to cheer for her, and she shushed her and said, You don't want to draw every hostile mob in the area this way, he warned. Beating one mob in one-on-one combat is one thing, but fighting multiple enemies? You're as stingy as your prize as you are with your loot, said Bobby. And she ran forward to collect the small piece of gunpowder left behind by the creeper. So I'm keeping this. Ben laughed. Fair, but be careful with it. It isn't food season, you know. They went back to collect Johnny, then continued on their way. Bobby felt a rush of battle, scanning the horizon for their next adversary. What's that? She said, in the distance, over there. Ben turned to look, then quickly averted his eyes. His brief glimpse was enough to give impression of that tall, spindly figure, unnaturally long with his limbs, and his eyes glowed in visual. That's an Enderman, he said. Don't look. They crouched behind a small incline. They were still a good distance from the mob, but at their route, it would take them right past it. I've seen one of them before, Bobby told him. It's eerie, but they seemed harmless. They are harmless, usually, but they also can be very aggressive, Ben explained. Staring at them as sunfire way to set them off. They always have tricky to fight, and I'd rather avoid angering it. Let's just hang here for a moment and hope it goes on without his business. Okay, Bobby said. She began fidgeting almost immediately. It's hard not to look, though, she said. It's like when someone tells you not to think about axolotls, and then that's all you want to think about for the rest of the day. It sounds like a very strange game, said Ben, but I know what you mean. By not looking at the enemy, you don't know what it's doing, and so it feels like you're vulnerable to an attack. But the enemy only attacks if you look at it. It's like a super mind game. You've just got an extra control over its own impulses, and oh no, Ben turned to look at Johnny, who stood off the side, gazing into the night. Zombie boy over there is nothing but impulses. Johnny, said Bobby, yoo-hoo, look at me. Don't look out there. At this complete lack of response, she just took her head. Never could get him to listen. She sat in silence for a moment, then turned back to Ben. How much of him is still in there, do you think? Can we cure him? Will he remember any of this? I have no idea, said Ben, and he learned against the grassy hill block his back. I mean, how much do you remember about being a baby? We tend to forget all sorts of things. I don't remember much, Bobby agreed. Ben hesitated before he pressed on. So you Have you always lived in Plaintown? Yes. I mean, you're from there. I know what you're getting at, said Bobby. I used to get questions like this whenever an adventure passed through town. I don't mean to pry. No, it's okay, Bobby said. I'm not sensitive about it. I'm obviously different than most villagers, she shrugged. I'm adopted. My parents found me as a baby, and to answer for your earlier question, I don't remember what day or anything before it. Growing up, I always knew I was foundling. They never hid that from me. But they always been my parents, as far as I remember. She looked suddenly solemn. Or they were my parents. I keep forgetting they're not back home waiting for me. Ben wasn't entirely comfortable with displays of emotion, but he knew better than let loose words hang in the air acknowledge. I'm sorry, he said again. After a moment's hesitation, he reached over and patted her on the helmet. Bobby gave him a puzzled look. Did you just pet me? No, I was comforting you, he answered. Is that what that was? Bobby said, and she laughed. But hey, Johnny didn't bite your hand off or anything, so that's progress. Yeah, said Ben. He and I will be best buddies in no time, I bet. Johnny, sensing the renewed attention, made a ghastly rasping noise. Adorable, said Ben, and he peeked out from above the incline. All clear, I think. And Johnny didn't draw the Enderman's ire, so maybe things are really going to go our way. Knock on wood, said Bobby, and she sat down on a wooden plank, just so she had something to hit as she said it. Chapter 20. Even Johnny seemed very wary to walk among the trees of the dark forest. Bobby sensed the slightest hesitation of his part, a subtle tug upon his lead, and they approached the tree line, as if it were dragging his feet. She wanted to give him a pep talk, but the dark oak trees loomed over them, and the inky blackness of the trees shrouded night opened above to receive them. It was all she could do to suppress a shudder of fear. She almost forgotten used to the darkness of night, but the forest offered a deeper darkness. It was a thick canopy of leaves, blocking out any hint of moonlight. This is creepy, Bobby whispered as they entered the forest, but nothing to worry about, right? Oh, there's a lot to worry about, said Ben. Keep your eyes open. This place is probably crawling with monsters. The trees grew close together, so they had to walk single file instead of side by side. Bobby let Ben walk in front so that she could remain between him and Johnny. It doesn't seem much farther, Ben said, consulting the map. We might actually make it there without any hassle. Bobby knew as soon as he said it that they were doomed. There was a twang sound and a rush in the air, and suddenly next to the tree Ben appeared to sprout a new limb. Not a limb, Bobby realized, an arrow. We're under attack, she yelled, and Ben told her, run! She did as she suggested, happily. But there were so many trees, it was so dark. She made it only a few steps before Johnny's lead became tangled. Wrapped around a trunk, they passed on opposite sides. The fastest way to untangle them was to drop the lead, but she was worried too much about getting separated in the forest. It was too easy for them to disappear into the gloom, but maybe that gloom could work to their advantage. Maybe they already evaded their attacker. No such luck. Bobby looked back in the direction they fled from. They could see a movement in the gloom. A shock of white, a ghoulish face, with a bow, aimed directly at her. Before Bobby could react, Ben was there, stepping in front of her, batting the arrow aside with his shield. Wow, thanks, said Bobby. I'd say don't mention it, but I live for the praise, said Ben, and he ran ahead, closing the distance between him and the attacker in 4 quick strides. Bobby watched to be certain, and he had up her hand before she turned away and started untangling Johnny's lead. For this part, her brother simply stood in place, blinking. One skeleton down, said Ben. I got some more arrows from it, and look, it's fresh. She held a bone out to Johnny, who sniffed with suspicion before snatching it from Ben's grip. He sat down in the dirt and said immediately to gnawing on it. You know, that's still creepy, said Ben. I'm sorry, said Bobby. I was no help at all. Oh, I wouldn't say that, Ben said. You drew its fire long enough for me to get into striking distance. He hefted his sword, which appeared to be blunted with overuse. I still wish I had a better blade, though. It took forever to hack it up, and we're making too much noise. I have a feeling we're about to be overwhelmed. What can we do? Asked Bobby. Should we try tunneling the rest of the way? Right idea, wrong direction, Ben smirked. You're not afraid of heights, are you? Bobby hadn't thought about that she was afraid of heights, but she never really put that to the test. Are you sure these things can support our weight, she asked, loading out her arms and said to herself. Pretty sure, Ben answered. As long as you don't make a wrong step. Bobby gripped the lead more tightly. Stay close, Johnny, she said. Step where I stepped. Johnny gnawing on his bone made no reply. They had taken a canopy crossing the breadth for the forest by the way the very rooftop. Shadowy shapes lurked far below them. Bobby caught glimpses of them through the leaves. But up top there was no mobs nor monsters to fear. Only gravity, and the gentle sway of the branches beneath their feet. She moved slowly but steadily, taking one measured step at a time. Despite its size, the woodland mansion seemed to Bobby to almost appear out of nowhere. One moment she was navigating the endless expanse of a canopy, the next the leaves parted, and she saw a great building looming before them. It was huge, perhaps as large as all of Powhatan, built of dark wood and cobblestone. It rose above the trees in a massive beast, as if rows of identical windows glaring at the eyes of spider, pitiless, multitudinous points it lit in the dark. Bobby followed Ben's careful hop of the canopy to leaves, then guided Johnny across the small gap. They stood together on the sloping roof of wood, similar to the oak used to construct Plaintown, but darker. "Which way is the front door?" asked Bobby. "And how are we going to get down from here?" "You have got to stop thinking like a villager," said Ben. "Oh," and with his sword he shattered the nearest window. "Ta-da! One entrance." Bobby gasped. "That's hardly going to endear us for whoever lives here. We're not here to make friends, Bobby," Ben said as he ducked through the window frame. "And the creeps who call this place home were never going to like us." Bobby followed him aside, pulling Johnny behind her, and they were in some kind of dining room, which potted flowers placed atop a long table and simple chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Nearly everything was made of wood. "It's sort of cozy," Bobby said, determined to be positive. The truth was the house was unsettling atmosphere. The Ben affected his spooky voice. "If you like it here, then perhaps you will stay forever." He waved his hand in front of her face and made ghostly noises. He slapped his hands away. "You're not funny, or scary, or whatever you're trying to be." "Charming," said Ben, pretending to pout. "The answer is always charming." "Then you're way off the mark," teased Bobby. "I won him over," said Ben, but Johnny, having completely devoured the bone and been occupying his attention, grabbed menacingly in Ben's direction. "That beastly growl reminds me. We should be careful. These places are supposed to be crawling with trouble. Not just monsters, but spellcasters and axe murderers, too." Bobby barely suppressed a shudder. "I was picturing a bright palace of fairy tale. This is more like a haunted house from a ghost story." "There's no such thing as ghosts," said Ben. "Worry about the axe murderers instead." They moved quietly, swords drawn, and they crept up into the upstairs hallway. The hall was high ceilinged with tall columns, and lined with torches and open doors. A vibrant red carpet ran the length of the hall. Looking at it, Bobby tried not to remind it of blood. It was only a short distance from the first open doorway, which Ben approached with caution. He leaned against the hallway wall for a moment, gripping his sword in front of him, taking a deep breath before he whirled around, rushing into the room in the battle-ready stance. Only for a moment later he said, "It's all clear," and sort of random. Bobby saw what he meant as soon as he followed him inside. It was a small boxy room, empty of threat, empty of everything, except a large pile of wool, all dyed in various shades of blue. "On the long list of everything I expected to see," said Bobby, "blue wool was very low." Johnny's reaction was somewhat more enthusiastic. The zombie boy groaned, lurched forward, and fell face first into a pile of wool. "Did he do that on purpose?" asked Ben. "He's not going to eat it, is he?" Bobby watched as her brother thrashed around, sending blocks of wool flying in the air and across the room. She smiled a little sadly. "He's playing," she said. "See? He's still in there. Somewhere." And the next room contained rows of bookshelves and inviting benches. This made Bobby immediately nostalgic of Plaintown's library, a little guilty remembering the state she left it in. After that they found a bedroom with all neatly made bed. The musty air suggested that Bobby's room had not been used in some time. They relaxed their guard as they continued exploring the room after room. Bobby, for one, assumed this place would be completely abandoned. Ben was a little more wary, but even let his sword fall to his side. "This is outright bizarre," Bobby said. She examined an oak tree growing in a small patch of dirt. "Who puts a tree inside a house?" Ben crouched beside her, checking the chest for traps. "Sign ball," he said once he finally opened it. "It's empty, and look." He stood, crossing room's entrance. "At some point, this room was sealed off with planks. The door we came through was actually a hole that somebody made." He shook his head. "That explains the lack of monsters. Somebody's come through and cleared them all out." "You see that like it's a bad thing," said Bobby, "but I could use fewer monsters in my life." "You don't get it," said Ben. "It's a high-risk, high-reward situation. These mansions are supposed to be perilous, but adventurers still seek them out because their loot is worth the danger." "Look like a golden apple?" asked Bobby. "Yeah, exactly," Ben sighed. "Someone beat us here. They picked the place clean of everything valuable. We won't find a golden apple here." Bobby fought a wave of disappointment again. She struggled not to let her frustration show. Instead, she forced a smile. "Well, we'll just have to look somewhere else," she said. "Let's come up with a new plan." Ben comforted her optimism, responded with a look of abject terror. Bobby, perplexed, said, "Are you okay with that? Can we negotiate your rate, if it helps?" Ben gripped her shoulders, whirled her around. At the far end of the hallway, she frightened himself. "Is that a—" she began. "Ghost?" said Ben. Chapter 21. The ghostly figure hasn't seen them yet. It drifted aimlessly along the hallway on the dark, tattered wings. As Ben watched, it passed right through a column, as if it had no physical substance. The sword it held looked substantive enough to do some damage. "I thought there was no such thing as ghosts," hissed Bobby. "Believe me, so did I," whispered Ben. "I've definitely never seen one before now. But it doesn't look too tough. I mean, it's got a sword, which is better than a barbed tentacles or prehensile ectoplasmic tongue." "Your imagination is horrible," said Bobby. They took in silence for a moment, considering the specter at a distance. "Okay, so here's what we're going to do," Ben said at last. "I'm going to try to take it out with arrows. You be ready with your sword in case the arrows don't do enough damage." "Are you sure it's hostile?" asked Bobby. Ben wasted no time swapping his sword for his bow and lining up a shot. "If it's not hostile now, it's about to be." He let an arrow fly. It thunked instantly into a column, missing the target by a good margin. "What was that?" asked Bobby. "I'm out of practice," Ben. Sword! The arrow had failed to hit, but it succeeded in drawing the mob's attention. It flapped its wings furiously, bearing down on them with a sinister intent in its eyes. Johnny leaped into his path, knocking off course before it close to the swinging sword. With the mob caught off guard, Ben and Bobby acted quickly, in unison. Ben worried their weapons might pass right through it, but his fears were unfounded. The mob was vanquished in a matter of moments. That went well, said Ben. Maybe that should have been a plan all along. We're not done yet, warned Bobby, and Ben lifted his gaze into time to see a second ghostly imp materialize at the very end of the fireway. How many arrows do you have? Asked Bobby. Not enough, said Ben. Let's just stab it a whole bunch. Ben ran down the remaining trench of the carpet, striking the mob with the sword faster than it reacted to presence. After the first blow, he stood back, lifting his shield and swaying out of its reach, and he learned its attack patterns. In the meantime, Bobby snuck around behind it. Trapped in between, the mob proved his easy prey. Did you see where it came from? Ben asked. Did it just appear out of nowhere? Not nowhere, said Bobby, and she pressed a hand into the wall. It came through this wall, but there's no door. Well, said Ben. I know, Bobby smirked, put her sword away, and pulled her the pickaxe. I need to stop thinking like a villager, right? As soon as Bobby had made an opening, Ben ran through with his sword held high. Whatever might be on the other side of this wall, he felt might be an element of surprise would be crucial. But Ben hesitated when he saw a figure inside. They looked at Ben in their wide eyes, uttering a startling sound, then raised their hands. Ben saw immediately that those hands were empty of any weapons. Had a stranger been trapped here in a small, dark room? Did they need help? Hi, said Ben, lowering his sword. Everything cool in here? Sorry to barge in. The stranger's face twisted in a unmistakable sign of aggression. Ben had a sudden impression that their arms were not raised in surrender after all, but their empty hands were calling forth some terrible power. Slime balls, he's casting a spell, Ben said under his breath. He charged. Too late. With a word of command, it sounded like a woo-woo. The spellcaster summoned a ring of traps. One would appear just beneath Ben's feet. It snapped shut, like a mouth lined with razor-sharp fangs, and Ben was pinned in place. The pain was excruciating, like being stabbed with half a dozen swords all at once. Though the haze of pain, Ben chided himself in dropping his guard. It was Bobby's fault. She had rubbed off on him in the worst possible way, and now her talk first fight later approach was going to get him killed. An arrow was by his ear, lodging itself in the spellcaster's shoulder. They barked in pain and surprise and turned to flee. The trap released its grip on Ben and staggered to the floor. Nice shot, he said through teeth clenched in pain. Thanks, said Bobby. I just tried to do the opposite of what you did. So far it's working out for me. Happy to help, wheezed Ben, and he rose unsteadily to his feet. The spellcaster, Ben recognized now as an evoker, was a dangerous foe, but wearing only a simple robe, they were also a vulnerable one. The evoker was attempting to escape, but there was no exit in the room. Ben and Bobby had cornered. This time Ben showed no mercy. The wicked wizard backed up against the wall. He brought the sword down while Bobby continued firing arrows from a distance. Their foe finally collapsed and turned to dust. They dropped some loot, Ben said, and he sat back in the door. Grab it, won't you? I need to eat something to get my strength back. While Ben munched a slice of melon, Bobby went believe in an unfamiliar item. This is some kind of doll, she said. It's familiar, but from where? She held it out for Ben to see. It was a golden idol, humanoid in shape, with bright green eyes. I've never seen anything like it, he said. Johnny, who's led Bobby and the combination, wandered off to sniff at the item. Evidently deciding it was indictable, he wandered off again. Hold on, said Bobby. She stashed the idol in inventory, then pulled a witch's journal and began flipping it through. Aha, she said, tapping on a page. It's in here, some sort of magic relic. Here's a picture of a skull with an X drawn over it. She looked at Ben. Maybe it's a weapon against skeletons. Sounds valuable, Ben said. Let's hold on to it. He felt his strength returning, but the memory of those fangs was hard to shake. Who knows what else is going to run into this place? As it turned out, they didn't encounter any more resistance. They continued to explore the mansion. And, other than a few melons harvested from an indoor farm, they didn't find any loot either. Whoever ransacked the place must have wished a hidden room, Ben said as they stood at the entrance hall of the ground floor. Other than that, they're impressively thorough. So, now what? Asked Bobby. Do we need to find another forest, another mansion? That would take a long time, said Ben. Years. I've got an under idea. Ben led him to the front door to a cobblestone porch, surrounded by dark oak trees. The canopy extended right up to the mansion's walls. Though it was day, the shade was deep and unbroken, protecting Johnny's eyes from direct sunlight. A pop of red caught Ben's eye, standing out on the other side of otherwise muted colors of this mansion's exterior. Someone had planted a banner inside of the entrance, a long red flag, embellished with the image of a skull and crossbones. But that wasn't why Ben had led him there. He once more drew his sword, then straining to reach, he let out slashing through the canopy. The leaves frayed, the branches shattered, and after a short while an atom dropped into the broken foliage. Ben leaned over, picked it up, and presented it to Bobby. It was a perfect, glossy, bright red apple. We don't need to find a golden apple, he told her. We'll just have to make one. Chapter 22. They needed to go deeper. Deeper? Said Bobby. I feel like we've been digging for ages. Just as he never had an opportunity to consider where she was afraid of heights, Bobby had rarely the occasion to wonder if she might be claustrophobic. She had done a little digging for coal in the past, and she felt no great sense of unease when they had walked around the underground rail tunnel or camped out in Ben's burrow in the edge of the swamp. But this was different. There was no blocks of dirt hanging suspended over her head, obstructing her access to free and open air. Bobby tried not to think about it, but it proved hard, resolving not to look at an Enderman. Her mind kept drifting back to the cramped, suffocating thoughts. Ben kept digging. Deeper is better, he said. Technically, you can find gold almost anywhere, but it's more common a bit farther down than this. Ben cut a narrow, decent path through the subterranean stone. Like a steep and artless staircase, it was the direction. Bobby placed his torches around the path, picked up any stray bits of coal, and came loose as she dug. And make sure we make a good team, she said brightly. Sure, he said, huffing. That's what the person with the easy job always says. Oops, I just dropped Johnny's lead, Bobby said. What? Ben said, whirled around, gripping his pick like a sword. Just kidding, Bobby said brightly. But let me know if you want to trade jobs at any point. Ben gave her a dirty look. I'll stick to digging, thanks. Eventually, Ben hacked his way through the cave. A narrow, descending passage opened through the underground space around Bobby's home. But the scraggy, irregular edges and a single passageway led off into pitch darkness. Bobby was quick to place torches all around. Careful with those, Ben said. We're in trouble if we run out. I've got wood and coal, Bobby replied. I can make more if we need them. Watch away from here. Well, that's the beauty, said Ben. There's no wrong answer. It kind of sounds like there are no right answer. There's no guarantee. That's why it's an adventure. He hefted his pickaxe. Start digging and see what you can find. Bobby huffed as he directed. She didn't find much of anything through andesite, diorite, granite. But soon her inventory was full of various types of stone. Just dump that stuff anywhere, Ben told her. What? You mean litter? Bobby shook her head. I'm not really comfortable with that. It isn't littering, Ben insisted. You're just putting it back. She sighed. You can arrange it artificially if it makes you feel better. Bobby began stacking her excess stone in single columns while Johnny tugged lightly in his lead, growling with boredom. Ben was clearly distracted and unnerved by the noise. Growling is usually my first sign of danger's coming, he said, so he's sort of throwing me off. Do you have any more bones for him to gnaw on? Bobby asked. You're spoiling him, Ben said. He stopped over in the dark corner in the cavern. He placed the fence post on the ground and then stopped back to take Johnny's lead. Careful, Bobby said. I know, said Ben, and he fixed the lead to a post. He'll be fine over there, and over here. And across the opposite side of the Bobby, he placed a small chest beneath one of the torches. He picked up the chest to Savannah Town, promising it would become handy eventually. We can keep everything we're not actively using inside the chest. That's why we're not littering, and we'll have plenty of room in our inventory for anything exciting we might find. Makes sense, said Bobby. She opened up the chest and filled it with stone, coal, wood, and emeralds. She held on to the witch's journal, the seashell, and the strange idol she'd taken from the evoker, plus her iron sword and pickaxe, which both were beginning to show signs of wear. She got back to digging immediately after that. More stone, more coal, and then a golden glint shone through the slab grave. I think I found some gold, Bobby said excitedly. Ben peered over his shoulder. No, sorry, he said. That's iron. Bobby groaned. It's super useful, he said. Our tools won't last forever, so you might as well grab iron while you can find. If you say so, said Bobby. She tried not to feel discouraged, but this was already taking longer than she hoped. It was difficult, monotonous work, and the cave was eerie, even though the haunted house, that space, at least, appeared habitable, meant for people. The chandeliers and the bookshelves and chairs. Underground, she felt like an intruder in a landscape that she was not meant for her, a cold, alien place that did not care to her comfort. She was silence, in particular, unnerved her. The silence? Why was it silent all of a sudden? Bobby poked out of the little hole she was digging, and looked over for Ben and that tied up Johnny. The fence post was right where she remembered it, but her brother was nowhere to be seen. Johnny's missing, she cried. Say what? Said Ben, who popped down in his own hole. He said it was an empty fence post. Oh no, he said, and looked wildly in every direction. He could be anywhere. He could attack us at any moment. Bobby huffed. More important, my brother could be lost underground forever. Oh right, Ben said sheepishly. Yeah, that would also be bad. Chapter 23. Look on the bright side, Ben said to her as they ran. As zombie, your brother is probably safe from some monsters. Remember the Enderman? I didn't seem to notice him watching it. That's something, I guess, said Bobby. Yeah, said Ben. The real concern is that environmental hazards. He could end up in lava, for instance, or fall into a chasm and climb out into the sun. Oh, or, this could be bad, what if another adventurer finds him? Ben, please stop trying to make me feel better, said Bobby. Please. They were rushing down naturally formed tunnel of stone. The irregular floor meant that they were on the top-down jump every few steps. And Bobby was having a hard time watching her footing, while also checking for side paths and placing torches every dozen or so blocks. We're running low on torches, she warned. I told you, said Ben unhelpfully. Their luck ran out, as she feared it would. A single linear path came to a T intersection, splitting off into two directions. Which way? Said Bobby. How should I know? Said Ben. Which direction does your brother like to more, left or right? That's not the thing, said Bobby. And then she shouted, Johnny, Johnny, where are you? The silence followed her question. Silence, and then low, trembling growl. The echo made it difficult to know which way it had come from. This way, said Ben, as he turned to the right. I heard him. I see him. The bird, as he shambling figure in the dim light, had back turned him up and shuffled aimlessly in the tunnel. Ben, stop, Bobby shouted. That isn't Johnny. Ben reeled back as the figure turned to face him. The zombie, but it was not the zombie he was looking for. Bobby turned past him and he swung her sword. He knocked the ghoul momentarily back, but it had focused on her now and it kept coming. Ben came at him from behind, slashing his sword and regaining his attention. Bobby stepped back and watched his time as it swung separately, avoiding the zombie's lunges as he hacked away from it. Only after a few hits, the zombie crumbled to dust. That looked nothing like Johnny, he said. Are you kidding me? Said Ben. Don't you tell the zombies apart now? The thing was almost twice as tall as my brother, she said. And he definitely wasn't at a lead, and his nose was definitely different. So, should I go on? Please do, said Ben. But you can lecture me while we run. They continued along their current path, but soon came to a dead end from the form of an uneven wall of dirt. Slime ball, said Bobby, and Ban tooted. I think I'm a bad influence on you, he said. Come on, this way. Don't worry, we'll find him. They turned around, retracing their step at the T intersection and making another path. I only have 3 torches left, warned Bobby, and I left behind nearly all the coal we found. Ben cursed under his breath. Okay, then going to backtrap to grab some torches off the wall, back the way we came from. We can't turn back yet, said Bobby. We're not, I promise, he said, but we need light down here. I'm not going to retrace our steps for 1 minute. But the longer we argue, the farther away he gets, he said over his shoulder, nearly retreating. Stay here, I'll be back before you know it. Ben turned the corner and Bobby was suddenly unknown. The silence, the darkness, the stone above her head, and the worry in her heart, all pressed in on her. She tried not to peer into the darkness ahead of her and wonder what might be beyond her vision. Well, Johnny, for one. He was ahead of her somewhere, and he took a step forward. She had 3 torches after all. She could take some progress while she waited for Ben to return. She waited as long as she could before placing another torch, tiptoeing the very edge of darkness, determining to make the most of her suddenly limited resource. She would have been pacing them further all along, but she never would have thought she'd run out of them so quickly. Funny how easy it was to take off what you have for granted. As she edged forward, she heard a strange sound ahead. It's sort of clacking, like dry rocks in a sack, knocking into one another, and then something flew toward her. If he had been peering forward, she would never have seen it in time. As it was, she barely had time to dodge it. She turned around to see what it was. An arrow stuck in a wall just behind her. Something had shot at her. She whirled back toward saw a skeleton emerging from the darkness. This time, she had her sword ready. She had watched Ben fight a zombie, timing his attack perfectly to hit a zombie each time it lunged within reach. She had to use similar technique against the creeper. She should do all the same thing against the skeleton. Except the skeleton wasn't coming any closer. Took time for his bow and fired. This time Bobby didn't dodge quickly enough and the arrow sliced across her arm. It hurt. Get over here and fight me, she bellowed, brandished her sword. It took aim. Another arrow already knocked in his bow. Bobby realized she needed a different strategy. If the skeleton wouldn't come to her, well, Bobby ran forward, the sword raised, and she screamed in a ragged war cry. The skeleton fired its arrow, injuring her again. But she didn't let it stop her. A second later, she was upon the skeleton, striking it again and again with a wild fury of furious blows. It shattered to pieces, leaving behind only a single intact bone and 2 arrows. Bobby turned around and saw his footsteps and saw Ben approaching her from behind. Ben, she said, I just beat my first skeleton. Ben's eyes went wide, and she broke into a run, heading right for her. You missed one, she said. What? Before Bobby could process a word, Ben had tackled her, dragging her down to stony ground. She was ready to complain, but then an arrow whizzed by overhead. Oh, she said, turning toward the dark end of the tunnel. She saw another skeleton, bow raised and ready. She was joined by a second and a third. That's a lot of skeletons, she said bleakly. What should we do? Try not to die, Ben answered, and urged forward down the tunnel. Sword flashing as she closed the distance to the nearest mob. Bobby followed her example, reasoning that it better be in striking range than to hang back and draw fire. As she advanced, she saw a strange object just past the skeletons. It looked like a small metal cage. A tiny flame burned within it. I'll handle the skeletons, Ben told her between swings. You destroy the spawner with your pickaxe. Spawner? Echoed Bobby. The cage thing. If we don't destroy it, they're going to keep making more skeletons, and we're completely overwhelmed. Bobby didn't like the sound of that. She hurried past the skeletons. The ire was directly entirely at Ben. For a moment, she brought out her pickaxe down on the spawner. It broke in just a few blows. She intended to whirl back around and then run to Ben's aid, but she saw another figure up ahead. One she thought she'd recognize. Once she placed the torch down, casting a sphere of light to push back the darkness, she was returned. Johnny, she cried. Her brother was wandering up to the very edge of the rushing subterranean river. At the sound of her voice, he didn't recognize his name. Johnny turned to look at her, but he turned too quickly. He lost his footing. As Bobby watched in horror as her brother fell into the raging river and was immediately swept away in its current. But she only watched for a second, then ran toward as fast as she could and dove headfirst into the water. Chapter 24. Bobby fought to keep her head above water. It was a losing battle. The current was so strong that the river took a tortuous path back through the pitch dark under the ground. How could Bobby hope to find the surface when she couldn't even tell which way was up? And now she find Johnny in all this chaos. After a little time, even though the river continued to rage, the darkness began to lighten. An eerie orange glow filled the cavern. She only hoped it wasn't daylight. There would be no protecting her brother from that. And then suddenly, as Bobby was heading to wonder where she had swept out to sea, she calmed, and narrow river widened to a tranquil underground lake. In the eerie orange light, Bobby was able to see Johnny nearby, struggling to swim. The poor thing was trying to bite the water, as he could fight it off or infect it. Turning it into the side, she grabbed him from behind, carefully to avoid his teeth and claws, and dragged him to shore. Gripping his lead, Bobby collapsed to the dry stone, and Johnny did the same. Bad baby, she said, breathless. Although part of her took some comfort in knowing that Johnny still had a tendency to wander off, it was another reminder that Johnny she knew was still in there, somewhere. Bobby remained splayed out on the ground, allowing herself a moment to catch her breath. As she lay there, a voice rose over her and the sound of the water. Ow, it said. Slime balls. As Bobby popped up from one of her prone positions, to be Ben swimming in her direction. Bobby extended a hand and he took it as she clambered on the shore. "That was awful," she said, wheezing for her breath. "You followed us?" said Bobby. "Well, sure," said Ben. "I've done more anything than less for a payday." He plopped down the ground. "Not much more idiotic, though." "Right," said Bobby. She kept forgetting why Ben was really there. She grazed back into the river and he saw now the source of the cavern's strange orange glow. It was lava, a whole chrism of it, rolling and bubbling mere steps away. The right sight took her breath away. Ben lifted his head and followed her gaze. "You look like you've seen lava before." "I hadn't," she said. "It looks only in books. It's beautiful." "From a distance, I guess, but don't touch it," said Ben, and he turned to Johnny. "That does devil for you, you nocturnal numbskull." Johnny opened his mouth to growl, and a mouthful of river water poured out. "That black wall," Bobby said. "That's the one separating water from the lava. Is that obsidian?" "Yeah, useful stuff, because it blocks lava and explosions," and answered Ben. "It forms sometimes when water and lava come into contact. I'd say we should mine it, or our paltry iron pickaxes won't do the job." He pulled himself to his feet. "It can also be a little tricky, mining so close to lava. I once set my boots on fire and had to jump in a lake." Bobby, who had been creeping closer to the edge, took a big step back. Ben chuckled. "The good news is that the light will keep new monsters from spawning and no torches required." He rolled his shoulders. "Should we rest? Maybe eat something? I don't know about you, but I took a couple of arrows back there." While Bobby started a campfire with her last piece of coal, Ben stepped out of her bed, and then he ringed them with cobblestone. Only a few minutes before they had an open-roofed structure with simple openings to serve as doors and windows. Bobby blinked fiercely at the sight. You just built a whole house in the time it took me to shake the water out of my boot gloves?" "Well, sure. It's pretty basic," Ben said. "And it really were no big deal. And I had all this stone in my inventory. Why not?" "You sure you would have been handy around Plaintown," Bobby said. "It was all I could do to keep our fences in shape." "Speaking of fences," Ben said, and planted some wooden posts in the ground outside the structure. "Is that for Johnny?" "Forget it," she said. "I'm not letting him out of my sight again. You can't put a post inside, please." "But," Ben looked back at the structure and he sighed. "Fine, but I'll have to take down a wall and make the place bigger. I don't want an infant idiot lurking over my bed while I'm asleep." Another minute, Ben was satisfied with the interior large enough to share with Johnny. Bobby tied his lead in post, which was one corner of the structure, while Ben pulled out some food he'd been saving for a rainy day. He was getting tired of melon slices. "By the way, I'm sorry he got away," Ben said, setting a pork chop over the fire. He took a look at Bobby. "I must not have secured the lead well enough, but I promise it was an accident." "I know," Bobby said. "I don't blame you, but the whole thing makes me nervous. The longer it takes us to cure him, the better chance that something bad will happen to Johnny." "Something bad," echoed Ben. He smirked. "Like something worse than turning into a mindless zombie?" "He isn't mindless," Bobby said. He turned to look over to Brother. She saw he was staring blankly at a wall and drooling a little. "Yeah, and anyway, yes, there's worse things than being a zombie." Her voice got softer. "At least there's a cure for it. There's a lot of bad stuff we can't be fixed." "Yeah, fair enough," said Ben, and he looked up over the walls of their little fort. The light from the lava lit up a vast hollow space overhead. "We will find some gold tomorrow, I'm sure of it." They ate a silence after that, illuminated by the glow of lava and fading campfire, each thinking about tomorrow might bring. Johnny ate his pork chop raw. Chapter 25. Ben shouldn't have made a promise he couldn't keep. "Well, find some gold tomorrow," he said, and it hadn't been so certain. But then Bobby was certain that her undead brother wasn't going to devour him in their sleep, and that remained to be seen. Ben also awoke in unsettling grunts and groans of Johnny. He strained his lead. Bobby insisted that he was just bored. Zombies apparently didn't sleep, but Ben thought it was half pint of Helens and looked hungry. They decided to get some distance from the lava before starting the day's mining. They ended up in a dripstone cave with massive stalactites that dripped with moisture. Ben shouldn't shake the feeling that they looked like fangs bearing down on them from above. After hours of digging, they had a little to show for their efforts. A few chunks of raw copper, some iron, and a lot of coal. Not useless by any means, but not what they were looking for. "I don't understand," said Ben. "I've had some bad luck before, but this is ridiculous." "I might have something over here," said Bobby, and she about getting him to follow her in the stony corner. Johnny, tied to his post, growled and stayed put. Bobby found a chamber of smooth purple. The material glittered beneath the torchlight. "It's an amethyst geode," Ben said. "There should be clusters of gems here." He ran his hands over the flat, featureless purple. "But it's all been harvested already." "I did find one piece," Bobby said. He had a single shard of purple gemstone. "It's been lying on the floor in the shadows. It looks like someone had missed it." "In the shadows?" said Ben. "Yeah, that's the other thing," Bobby said. He pointed the torch. "I didn't put that there. Is that normal?" It was not normal, but it certainly explains some things. "It's the Woodland Mansion all over again," he said. "And somebody's been through here already. They scored the place for a look at all the good stuff." He shook his head. "Probably a group of people working together to have been so thorough." "But we're out of luck," said Bobby. "All the gold is gone." "We will find gold," Ben said, despite his resolution to stop making promises. "He just might have to travel a little farther than I planned. Can I have the amethyst shard? Bobby handed it over. Is it worth something? It's useful, Ben answered, turning it into his hands. This and the copper I dug up earlier, we can craft a spyglass. He stashed the shard in his inventory. I don't like being underground for too long, and our little river ride got it all turned around. I think we should head back for the surface and see where we are. He shrugged. Maybe we can find some badlands by him. You can find gold above ground there sometimes, in the mountains. I like the sound of that, Bobby said. Only what? Said Ben. You have to break the news to Johnny, he said, pulling the carved pumpkin over the inventory. He really hates this thing. Marking the way up to the surface took longer than it had taken to carve the path down. Rather than cut blindly through the stone and risk hitting the lava flow, Ben opted to build a staircase. They were deep enough it took time, but it took more time to coax Johnny up the staircase. One hop after another, Johnny was practically digging them at one point, pumpkin helmet and all. If Ben didn't know better, he'd think the zombie boy was pouting. Don't be so glum. The pumpkin really suits you, Ben told him. It brings out your beady little intensity of your blood-red eyes. Johnny growled and swiped in Ben's direction, and then Ben laughed. Please stop taunting him, Bobby said to Ben. And you, she said, turning to Johnny. No hitting, no fussing. The pumpkin is for your own good. We have no idea whether it's day or night up there. When he finally broke through the dirt to feel the sun on his face, Ben experienced a wave of relief. Ah, sweet sunlight, he said. I almost forgot what it felt like. Bobby blinked fiercely. Me too, she said. It felt like I've been holding my breath for days. Nothing to fear up here. Not while the sun is up, Ben said, hopping onto the grass and offering her a hand. No phantoms, no skeletons, no zombies. Present company included, he said, as Johnny clambered up behind Bobby. It's an undead-free existence as long as a beautiful yellow square is shining down on us. Then let's move quickly, Bobby said, because I'm experienced. The weather can change in a blink of an eye. The weather remained bright and clear, however, as the trio continued to climb. Ben knew that they got some altitude in order in their lay of the land, and as luck would have it, the overworld had been provided in the form of a nearby mountain, a nearby quite steep mountain. Up and down and up again, complained Bobby. The life of an adventurer is exhausting. Imagine how your brother feels, said Ben. He's the first zombie who's ever had a list of rules to follow, and he's doing so well, said Bobby. She patted him on his orange helm. At last, they reached the peak of the mountain. Ben got right to work, setting down a crafting table, pulling his materials together, and getting it hit in the face with a snowball. Blah, he said. Bobby's laugh tinkled in the icy air. Ben, it's snow, snow. I can see that, said Ben, wiping off the snowflakes. And I can also taste it. What's the big idea? Then he watches her hopping and prancing and rolling around the deranged pig. She realized something. You never seen snow before, he said. Nope, said Bobby, and she laughed. It's sort of amazing. Better than lava, anyway. Well, it's all right, Ben said, as he smiled despite himself. He'd seen plenty of snow and tended to think of it an obstacle, if he thought of it at all. But seeing Bobby prancing around, it was hard not to imagine it through her eyes. It was sort of magical. Even Johnny had tied to a post, seemed entranced by the snow, and crackled beneath his feet. Bobby lobbed to get another snowball at him, and he dodged it. No fair, he said, laughing. I don't have a shovel. Who said I was interested in a fair fight, she said, sticking her tongue out. Her third snowball was aimed gently at Johnny, who appeared utterly confused at the entire thing. Ben got back into business, working the copper and amethyst into a functioning spyglass. With a new tool in hand, he stepped to the edge of the peak and gazed outward. Bobby, huffing exertion, trudged through the snow and standing beside him. He gasped. The overworld, it's so big, she said. From up here, it looks like just one of the cartographer Haven's maps. This is nothing, Ben said. He peered through the spyglass. I've been exploring for years, and I haven't seen a fraction of the overworld. It's bigger than I can wrap my head around. Ben handed her a spyglass and watched as she spun to look in every direction. I don't see any badlands out there, he told her, but there was some other biomes we might want to check out. I saw a desert and there's a pyramid there. We can find some good loot. What about a village? Said Bobby. Village? Where? There, she said, pointing, and she handed him the spyglass. You could just see it through the trees. I see it now, said Ben. Good eye. Only, what is that? Just beyond the village, rising above, is a featureless gray monolith. Now that you notice it, Ben could see it without a spyglass. It was big and out of place. How do you feel about a little detour? He asked Bobby. Those people might need help, she said, so let's try to keep me away. Chapter 26. Ben was determined not to get his hopes up. The village in the distance would almost certainly be as devastated as the last two villages he found. Then again, Playtime would provide an unsuspected bounty. Bobby herself, maybe this village too, would have survivors. Maybe they'd finally have a new ally, even amidst the devastation. But as they drew closer to the village, Ben kept the real mystery at the forefront of his mind. Do you see it? He asked. The gray building in the back. Bobby peered ahead, past the inviting spruce and stone structures, and her eyes found a boxy cobblestone monstrosity looming behind the village proper. I see it, she confirmed. Any closer to figuring out what it is? Your guess is as good as mine, Ben said, and pulled a sword out. But let's get ready for trouble again. A fence ringed the village. That, too, was unusual. Although Ben had often wondered why more villages didn't put up some sort of defensive perimeter, it made sense in a dangerous world to put barriers between yourself and the monsters. But Ben noticed that there were no gates along the length of the fence, and he had to wonder, was it there to keep unwanted visitors out, or was it to keep something inside from escaping? Bobby cut through the fence without hesitating. Look at you, Ben said. From fence mender to fence dismantler in a few short days. That's me, said Bobby. Bobby, smiter of fences. But Ben noticed that as soon as they all passed through, Bobby replaced the broken piece. He smiled. He didn't actually want her to change, not too much. This is way too familiar, Ben said. Approaching the first building, this door had been blown off its hinges. Bobby saw them again, said nothing. Yep, Ben said, confirming the home's chest was empty. Looks like the same deal as before. Wait, Bobby said. Something's different this time. Ben watched her as he turned in a slow circle, taking in the details of the home. She narrowed her eyes, obviously struggling to put her suspicions into words. Finally, her eyes lit up. The bed, she said. There's no bed. That's strange, Ben said. Were there any beds missing from the last time? Not that I noticed, said Bobby. Let's check the next door, Ben suggested. It's the same situation in the next house, and the other one after that. The entire village apparently empty of villagers, loot, and beds. And as they explored, they drew nearer and nearer to the stone structure. No more putting it off, said Ben. We need to find out what's inside. He began walking around the perimeter, stopping at the first corner, which gave him a view of two sides of the four-sided building. I don't see any windows, but there's a door. Bobby and Johnny followed close behind the approach down door and pressed the ear against it. Anything? Said Bobby. Ben shook his head. It's too thick. He eyed the button beside the door. Should I open it? Bobby tied Johnny to a post. You behave yourself out there, she said. We'll be right back. Then, at her signal, Ben pressed the button. Immediately, they could hear voices echoing in the building. It sounded like villagers, but they were in distress. Spurred on by the sounds, Bobby hurried past them, and he followed her. Careful, she told him, putting up her arms so that he wouldn't rush ahead. Ben felt a rush of vertigo as he realized that they were standing on a narrow stone platform set above the deep chasm. There were plentiful torches set about the space, providing light in the lieu of the windows. And there was also light coming from below. Ben recognized the telltale glow of lava. The staircase led down to their platform, but for now, they ignored that. Instead, right ahead in the center of the space, there was something that demanded their immediate attention. Zombies, said Ben. There was two of them, and they soon caught sight of Ben and Bobby. Groaning and gasping, they stepped forward, but they were stopped by a fence that ringed them, enclosing them upon their separate platform of stone. The zombies, mindless, didn't seem to realize that they were trapped within a corral, and that Ben and Bobby were forever out of their reach. The only other features in the room were cells, 4 of them in total, one in each corner of the structure. Ben could see right inside them because the walls were made of glass. They were giant aquariums, but instead of fish they contained people. 5 villagers stood in prison in each grass blocks, each of their own bed and nothing more. Bobby gasped. We need to get them out of here. I'm with you, said Ben. Let's be careful about it. He peered off the edge of the platform toward the warm glow of lava below. They briefly considered constructing walkways to the glass cells, but Ben's vertigo threatened to get the best of him, and in the end they decided to come up with the problem from another direction, going back outside then cutting into the cells from the exterior of the building. The harried villagers honked at one another, then Ben and Bobby, making a great racket in their relief and gratitude. One at a time, please, said Bobby. We're here to help, but we need to understand what happened here. Ben, realizing there was no use in communicating with the villagers, slipped away, returning to the inside of the building. Moving slowly, he descended the interior staircase, curious to see what there would lead. He wasn't surprised to find a small pool of lava below, but he was surprised to see something moving within it. Surprised, he was and horrified. It was an iron golem. It was on fire, struggling to keep its head above the lava, even as it burned. Ben instinctively reached out to it, but what could he do? Even if he could reach it in time, he would only doom himself to a fiery death by touching it. It was too late anyway. As he watched, the light in his eyes went dark. It melted into slag, a smear of silver swelling amidst the incandescent orange. The stairs descended deeper, and so did Ben. Below the lava had contained a glass pit, and there was a series of hoppers functioning like funnels. The hoppers had been set up to store the materials that fell into them from above. The hoppers, in turn, fed into a treasure chest. Ben opened the chest, suspecting that he knew what he'd find. He was right, but the sheer quantity was staggered him. Within the chest, he found neat stacks of iron ingots, thousands of iron ingots. This place had been built for one thing in mind, harvesting golems for their iron. Thousands of ingots meant hundreds of golems. That meant a fiery end, one like the one Ben had just witnessed. His heart felt heavy at the thought. Ben? Said a voice. He turned to see Bobby watching over the stairs. What did you find? Iron. A lot of it, he said. The villagers must have been making golems constantly. Did you learn anything from them? From what I could understand, there was a zombie attack. They tried to flee, but someone had built a fence around their entire village. They were herded toward the building and then trapped. They've been here for 5 weeks. And how did they feel about it? Bobby frowned. They felt scared. That's why these zombies were up in here with them, said the Ben. These glass walls. The villagers are constantly threatened by zombies. And as long as they felt that way, they were still willing to make golems. He pointed at the pool of lava, which appeared to float above them in a glass enclosure. The golems were melted into slag, and the hoppers funneled the remains into a chest. Bobby's mouth was a thin line. This is so typical, she said. It's just like adventurers to exploit villagers, to treat them like they don't matter. I've seen it happen all my life. Ben almost felt a need to apologize, but he'd never taken it this far. even if it was sort of brilliant in a way. Do the villagers know who did this? He asked. I think there are at least 2 of them, Bobby answered. They come back and collect iron every few nights. He paused, then added, they should be due back tonight, in fact. That's good news, because I'd really like to meet them. But first, he opened the chest and grabbed a handful of ingots. I think we're overdue for some new gear, don't you? Chapter 27. Ben tried hard not to think about where his new armor had come from. He was still haunted by the sight of the iron golem as it melted right before his eyes. But there was no bringing the golem back, and putting the iron to themselves meant depriving the iron's farm masters' minds of their spoils. Although once he heard them speak, Ben immediately decided that mastermind was far too generous. It was the night, and Ben and Bobby had perched atop of the roof in the nearest house. From the vantage point, they get a good view of the iron factory, but would themselves be difficult to spot? They secured Johnny for one of the houses a bit farther down the path, where his growls were going to draw attention. The villagers they had hidden behind a newly constructed wall in the temple. If anyone went looking for them, they'd come up empty, unless that person was comprehensive knowledge of the temple's blueprint. And the pair who came around to collect the day's iron did not strike Ben as the type that have comprehensive knowledge of anything. Dude, said one of them, seeing multiple holes in the factory. What happened? Doesn't look good, said the other. Check inside. You check inside, was the response. At length, one of them was the last one inside. Ben crept to the edge of the roof and had a better look at one who would stay behind. It was a girl. She looked tough, with muscular arms and cold eyes. She had a diamond axe at her side. As Ben and Bobby watched, the second one emerged from the factory. He was wiry, with an edgy, thrumming sort of energy, like a taut string. He wielded a crossbow and a frown. It's no good, Hatchet, he said, bouncing from foot to foot. We've been robbed. What do you mean? The iron too? Yeah, he said. Villagers are gone, iron's gone, just an empty chest down there. He shrugged. Zombies are still there. Well, that's something at least, said Hatchet. I hate to tell the boss we lost any of his pets. Ben and Bobby exchanged a look. And on one hand, the idea of these two had a boss made some sense. They definitely gave off hired muscle vibes. But zombies as pets? Who would think that would be a good idea? Let's load them up, said Hatchet. Then check the traps on the way back. Bobby gave Ben a questioning look, but he only shrugged. He waited for the 2 strangers to disappear into the factory. Then he leaned to the whisper. I want to follow them, but let's keep our distance, Bobby nodded. Soon the 2 figures reappeared. This time they were pursued by a pair of zombies. With practiced speed, they stayed out of the reach of the zombies, but close enough to draw mobs forward. Get the trapdoor, Flip, said Hatchet, and the wiry one darted ahead to open the hinged door that had been set into the ground. Hatchet led the zombies into the edge of it, then punched them, knocking them into the opening. Flip giggled. Nice, he said. Say it for the using my axe, said Hatchet. Don't want to do any permanent damage, right? I still think we should spare 1 or 2, Flip said, and he jumped into the hole. But Hatchet followed immediately after, shutting the trapdoor behind her. Bobby exhaled. Ben didn't know how she felt. He had almost been afraid to breathe. The trapdoor brought the mercenaries purposely close to their hiding spot. Ben waited for a few moments before he slid to the roof and patted it over the trapdoor. Now he'd seen it in action, he wondered how he missed it before. Echoing his thoughts, Bobby whispered, We must have walked right over that thing. Ben pressed his ear to it. He agonized over how long to wait. He did not want to run full of those 2, but he waited too long. They'd get away. Unless they were immediately careless, they'd be possible to track once they were underground. Finally, he couldn't stand wait any longer. He opened the door. His jaw dropped at what he saw. Just below ground there was a cobblestone tunnel, with torch placed at regular intervals, and a rail. Said Ben. This looks very familiar. He looked up, his eyes meeting Bobby's, and she saw her gaze harden as he put the pieces together. Ben, tell me if I'm wrong, she said, but I'm beginning to think maybe the siege that destroyed my village wasn't an accident, said Ben. Chapter 28. They decided to follow the rail. Compared to digging their way through the underground, it was easy. All the work they had done for them, they had to retrieve Johnny from the hiding place, hopping through the hatch and walk. It bothered Bobby that they weren't sure that they were going in the right direction. They stopped periodically to listen, straining their ears and peering into the dark, but they neither heard nor saw any sign of Flip or Hatchet and their undead captives. But Ben had consulted his map, which showed that they were way back to Plaintown, and they decided to walk in the other direction, away from Bobby's home. Otherwise, it felt too much like they were retracing their steps. We should have checked beneath Savatown, Bobby said. I bet the rail extends all the way there, too. Maybe even to the Woodland Mansion, said Ben. These people are thorough. As they walked, Bobby lost track of time completely. With unchanged scenery and no sun and no moon to go by, time became vague and elastic. She got hungry very often, and she would stop to eat. Sometimes Johnny would utter a rattling growl from behind her. Otherwise, one moment bled seamlessly and endlessly into the next. Bobby began rummaging through her inventory. He pulled out a strange idol they'd be taken from the evoker. She waved it over Johnny's head, poked him with it. Nothing happened, except that Johnny became aggravated and swiped at the thing. As he put away the idol and took out her nautilus shell, she ran her hands over a smooth surface, letting its swirls of the shell draw her in. The effect was almost hypnotic. With a jolt, Bobby realized that something was missing from her inventory. The emeralds. She left them behind when they were digging for gold. She put them in the chest and never gone back for them. Her heart sank in realization. She was hopeless to think that they would find their way back to the area, especially after the river they'd gotten them to turn around. But Ben was continuing without those emeralds. The promised payment was the only reason he'd agreed to help Bobby in the first place. They'd grown closer to their quest. Ben even seemed to like Johnny a little bit, sometimes, but would he stick around if he knew he wouldn't get paid? Would he still want to help them? Or would Bobby have to defend her for herself? She decided she would have to take the risk. She didn't care to tell him the truth. What is it? Ben asked, and only then did Bobby realize she stopped walking. Oh, she said, it's just the shell. It's so pretty. Can I see it for a second? She asked. Sure, she said, and handed it to him. Just be careful with it. I know you don't think it's worth its expense, but shush, he said. Listen. He put the shell to her ear. A faint sound rose to the shell. It sounded almost like Ben's shush, but softer, and it rose and fell in an endless cycle. Bobby found it calming. What is that? Bobby asked. Ben shrugged, bringing the shell to his own ear. People say it's the sound of an ocean, trapped inside the shell by a powerful witch. He turned the shell to her and resumed walking. I don't think that's true, but oceans are eerily quiet, so maybe. Have you seen one? An ocean? As he fell into his deep step beside him, Bobby took care of the stow of the shell away safely. It felt even more precious to her now. I was hoping to catch a glimpse of one through the spyglass when we were up on the mountain. I've only ever seen one on maps, though, and it looks so big and so blue, like the sky came down to the ground and settled in for a nap. He turned to Ben. Have you seen one? What is it like? Well, big, said Ben, and blue. You got the right idea, really. Bobby rolled her eyes. You've got to do better than that. We've been walking around the sun for what seems like years, and I'm starting to wonder if I'm a zombie. Okay, said Ben. The truth is, yeah, an ocean is impressive when you see it at a distance. There's a vast anything, the scale of them. He shook his head. But at the same time, it was missing the point entirely. Bobby didn't understand. What do you mean? An ocean is a featureless blue plain if you see it on a map. That's just the surface. The real magic is underneath, he smiled. There was a fish in colors you barely imagine, and the coral is even more colorful. There's dolphins and squids and guardians that shoot laser beams. It's slightly less fun of those guys, but they do look cool, he laughed. There's one time I heard rumors about an island somewhere out in the water. An island where everything was made out of mushrooms. The trees were giant mushrooms, the ground was some kind of squishy fungus. Even the cows were made of mushrooms. How does that work? Bobby asked, skeptical. I don't know, said Ben. Logan and I decided we'd need to see it for ourselves. We built a couple rowboats and went out searching for the island. We ended up befriending this dolphin, and we named it Squeaklebeak. And Squeaklebeak showed us the way to the shipwreck. We never found a mushroom island, but if it even exists. But we really had a great adventure. I knew it, said Bobby. The ocean sounds amazing. It is amazing. The whole world is amazing, really, once you peek beneath the surface. He shook his head. I guess that's what the maps can't show you. I guess so, said Bobby. All right, Ben said, shoving her shoulder slightly to his own. It's your turn. Regale with me with this adventure. Me? Bobby scoffed. I don't have any stories. Oh, come on. There was that one about the chicken and the fox. It was a rabbit. Right, the fox and the rabbit. That was a great story. Bobby sighed. I never went anywhere. Never did anything. Behind him, Johnny groaned mournfully. Ben laughed. I think he thinks you're being too hard on yourself. Yeah, said Bobby. And then more firmly, yeah, I've never traveled. Only far enough to get lumber and sugarcane, but I was part of a community. She turned to Ben. Most people in my village had a job, one specific thing they were good at, and they do that thing every day. I did a little bit of everything, she smiled. I hope whoever needed help learned enough to do every job so that I was being of use to everyone. But it made sure that the village never ran low on supplies, Johnny gurgled. And I still want him to play with Johnny, which usually means trying to find where he had wandered off to. I'm jealous, said Ben. Ha, said Bobby. Yeah, right, a big-time adventurer jealous of a part-time babysitter? Tell me another one. No, I'm serious, said Ben. I never had roots. Never had anything to go back to after an adventure. His eyes fell to the ground. I think that's why I was so happy when Logan took me under his wing. He told me a lot to learn. He was willing to teach me. He didn't ask for anything in return. Just first dibs on any resources I found. Bobby frowned. I mean, that's not nothing. We had bases sometimes when there was an area that we wanted to explore in depth. One time we even set up a temporary headquarters in an abandoned temple we found. Ben's eyes lit up in the memory, but only for a moment. We never stayed in one place for long, though. I never really had a home. Total freedom, said Bobby. I guess I could see how it would have been a person unmoored. But stay in one place your whole life and you miss out on a lot, Ben put in. Maybe the answer is somewhere between the extremes. Bobby thought of the silence settling on them, and they continued their endless march. She had been so focused on curing her brother that he hadn't given any thought that would come afterward. She had assumed that they would return home, to their house, their village. But was it still home? It was a home without any people in it. She was so caught up in her thoughts that she didn't notice the strange sound of their backs. "Listen," whispered Ben as he came to a dead spot. "Do you hear that?" Bobby stopped, and now she did hear it. A rushing sound and a creak of old wheels. And then a voice shouting, "Make way! Clear the tracks!" Bobby reacted with only seconds to spare. She leaped back, pulling Johnny away from the rail. Ben did the same, moving in the opposite direction. A pair of minecarts sped between them, moving so fast that Bobby had time to gather only a few impressions. There was a person on the first minecart, a boy in a leather helm. He looked vaguely apologetic and a little queasy. Following his wake was a second minecart contained. Bobby thought they were eggs of some kind, but they didn't look like chicken eggs. But Johnny grumbled with complaint at the sudden jostling. "Sorry, buddy," she said. "We almost got run over by..." "What was that?" Ben shook his head and his eyes widened in bewilderment. "Were those turtle eggs?" he asked. Johnny growled again, and they pulled his lead hard. "Johnny, calm down," Bobby said. "It's fine." "What's gotten into him?" said Ben. "He's really agitated." "Yeah," said Bobby. "I thought he was mad at me, but it's like he's trying to get my attention." A girl rose in Johnny's throat, and it seemed to reverberate all along the tunnel, building upon itself. With Bobby felt she might be bowled over by an unearthly wail passed over her. Ben shuddered. "Creepy," he said, and then he smiled mischievously. "I want to try." He cupped his hands around his mouth, planted his feet, and cried, "Echo!" Another immense and animalistic growl reverberated from down the tunnel. Ben's eyes went wide. "That wasn't an echo." "Ben," said Bobby, "I think something else is coming this way." He heard a shuffling footfalls, gasping runs, and plaintive groans. "A lot of something else," she said. He knew what was coming their way. She knew in her gut, but she felt surprised at the scale of it. A wave of zombies stepped into the torchlight. A stampede. The far end of the tunnel was choked by the undead. Zombies had seen them. Their legs churned faster. Their arms were open to receive them. Their mouths yawned open, slavering with hunger. Bobby wanted to run, but she stood rooted to the spot. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. This time there would be no escape from the zombie horde. Chapter 29. Fight or flight? Asked Ben. "What?" asked Bobby. Ben would see that she was reeling from the sight of the horde. It was bore down on them. "Do we fight them?" he asked, and then turned his new iron sword so gleamed the forehead. "Or do we try to run?" "We can't fight them," said Bobby. But Bobby had other ideas. As Ben watched, Bobby's brother tugged against her grip. The lead slipped right across her grasp, and though Ben leaped to the snake across the ground, the boy zombie was too fast. He was loose and lunging toward the horde. Bobby darted through the throng of zombies, slashing to several of mobs before climbing on top of one. From his perch atop the zombie's shoulders, Johnny could see a perfect opportunity to bash his foe over and over again, while his bludgeoned zombie tried to fail and reach Johnny with his teeth. "He was doing a good job, actually," said Ben. "He's outnumbered 20-1, said Bobby, as she drew her sword. Whatever hesitation she felt before, it was evaporated in the face of Johnny's peril. He flung herself forward, slashing the nearest zombie, clearly intent on hacking away to Johnny's side. "For the record, my vote was going to be for flight," said Ben. "Not that anybody asked me." With a long-suffering sigh, Ben joined the fray. He sidled up beside Bobby and stayed on her left, giving her plenty of room to maneuver with her sword. There was a rhythm to fighting zombies, and she seemed to have gotten the hang of it. The narrowness of the tunnel worked to their advantage. While a full horde pressed forward, no more than 5 zombies could reach them. As long as they held the line, their troubles began a moment of triumph. Bobby felled one of the ghouls, reducing it to scrap of rotten flesh. Ben felt a sudden and momentary feel of victory. Maybe they had this after all. But the fallen zombie left an opening. As another zombie rushed forward to fill it, he was able to slip past Bobby's defenses. See Bobby take a hit through Ben off. And he was the one receiving the end of the horde's next successful hit. The rhythm faltered, and the horde began to slip past them. Once they were surrounded, they had no hope of winning. So Ben did something desperate. "What are you doing?" Bobby asked, noticing he put his sword away. "Ben, I can't defend us all." "Just a few seconds," said Ben, and his new armor soaked up the brunt of the horde's attack. He was glad that he had taken the iron. Without it, he would fall by now. Even with it, this was risky. With his hands free, Ben was able to pull the carved pumpkin from his inventory straight across the biting, rendering horde. He plunged the helmet over Johnny's head. Johnny howled in protest, but the pumpkin stayed on him as he buckled. He followed from the shoulders which he perched. He was newly vulnerable as several zombies turned to attack him while he was prone. Bobby screamed. "What were you thinking?" he asked him, swinging her sword as she fell worth. 2 more zombies fell at her attacks. Ben didn't have time to breathe or explain himself. Every second counted now. He pulled his pickaxe from his inventory, leaping up, and began to cut away the dirt ceiling overhead. Within seconds, the sunlight poured into the tunnel. Ben blinked, momentarily blinded, but he did not let that stop him. He kept swinging his pickaxe, knocking more dirt away, cutting a line across the dark. The stench and almost overpowering as dozens of zombies caught fire simultaneously. "Grab him," Ben directed, as he pulled Bobby clear of the fracas. He pulled Johnny backward by his lead. Even with the comically large helmet, the Bobby boy's bewilderment was oblivious. He didn't resist Bobby's tugging, seriously transfixed by the sudden light now. She was able to attach the lead to the post without any problems. The zombies kept coming, but they had lost a real sense of menace. Those in the front fell engulfed in flames, others advanced by a staggering pace, impeded by their following horde mates, and catching fire as they entered the patch of sunlight. With Johnny tied to the post, Ben and Bobby were easily able to find the rhythm again, knocking back any ghoul who made it into their melee range. It was only a matter of time for stalling time under the fire had done its work. As the last zombie crumbled to the dark ash before them, Ben's knees gave out. Physically, he was fine, but he could already feel his body healing itself. But whatever reserves of courage and willpower he had dried up to gave out when the danger was gone. It struck them all at once and how close they had all come to dying. Bobby, by contrast, seemed totally energized by the entire idea. Ben, that was amazing, she said, and he pumped her sword in the air. You saved Johnny. It was nothing, Ben said, wheezing. How did you know it was daytime, she asked. I totally lost track. Yeah, about that, said Ben. Lucky guess. It took some wind out of Bobby's sails. You mean you didn't know? But if not for the sunlight, she stared mutely at them, realizing how close they'd gotten to the answer. Very, very lucky guess, said Ben.
Chapter 30. After their battle in the tunnel, Bobby watches Ben build a wall, cutting across the railway. He knocked a few off the rails loose to a good measure. I feel bad about messing in somebody's build, he explained, but I'm more certain than ever these people are up to no good. He paused to survey the work, slapping dirt off his hands, and this would make it harder for them to sneak up on us again. Bobby found it difficult to argue. He only hoped that the boy in the minecart wouldn't send a hatchet or flip after them in the other direction. But the tunnel remained empty and quiet as they made their way ever forward. Bobby found it impossible to remain on high alert for long. It was exhausting to strain her ears for signs of pursuit and it might never come. And her mind kept going back to Ben. He'd been brave in her fight against the zombies, but he'd come to expect that by now, and in a way, bravery was easy when you're in an escapable fight. But what had struck her was he'd put his weapon down. He made himself vulnerable. He let himself be hurt because he'd been determined to protect Johnny. The thought that Johnny might be in collateral damage in the fight had never been acceptable to Ben. Bobby hadn't realized how alone she felt until she suddenly realized that she had a true ally in Ben. Now that you're back there, she told him. Ben puffed out his chest. I was, wasn't I? And that ruined it. Why couldn't he just take a compliment without letting it go straight to his head? Bobby had to keep his ego in check somehow, for both their sakes. Good thing it wasn't spiders, she said. You're weirdly useless around spiders. What about that? What's that about? Ben deflated. Why does it have to be about something? Spiders are scary. I don't know, said Bobby. I mean, they aren't cute, but they're just animals. Although, she grinned, I guess you're afraid of llamas too. Ben scoffed. I am not afraid of llamas, he said. I don't like getting spat on. It's a very common and reasonable personality trait. Yeah, okay, said Bobby. That's sort of my point. You have a rational aversion to the llamas, you can explain it with logic, and he rubbed her chin. Zombies are scary because they're relentless. Endermen are scary because they're unpredictable. What makes spiders scary to you? Fear isn't rational, though, Ben argued. It's the opposite of anything. We should be afraid of pigs. Bobby laughed. Pigs? What's so scary about pigs? Well, it's not much pigs themselves. They're harmless enough, right? But do you know what happens when a pig is struck by lightning? Bobby thought about it. Pork chops? She guessed. Not pork chops, Ben smiled darkly. Mind me to tell you all about that next time we set up camp. It was a short time later when they saw the end of the tunnel. Be careful and quiet, Ben whispered. Bobby nodded in agreement. Johnny growled. Maybe we could tie him up back here, Ben suggested. With Johnny secured to a post, Ben and Bobby crept forward. They could see that the tunnel ended ahead, but the light beyond him was dim, so they couldn't tell what they led to. The rail ended first. There was no minecart in position, ready to be sent down the tunnel and flip a switch. See that lever? It looks like a dead torch, Ben pointed. That's a redstone torch, she whispered. That means the whole rail system is powered. Whoever gets to know their stuff, they might have a whole mining operation going. Suddenly, sounds rang off in the space beyond the tunnel's exit. It started a single mournful groan. Then it grew into nightmarish cacophony. Even Johnny appeared agitated. What was that? Bobby hissed. Not another zombie horde. No, Ben whispered as he crept forward to peer into the chamber beyond the tunnel. I think the horde is undersettling it. The tunnel opened to a vast cavernous space. Not a cave, where there was nothing natural about the space. Its angles were too perfect, its lines were too straight. It looked to Ben as if someone carved out a perfect cube out of the subterranean rock, and then filled the cube with zombies. Hundreds of zombies. More than he could comfortably count. More than he was comfortable looking at. He inched back away from the opening. I've never seen anything like this before, he whispered. Good, said Bobby. I hate to get the impression that this was normal, she shuddered. This is impossible, just an accident, she asked. A spawner that's gone out of control, maybe? Ben shook his head. See the space? It looked constructed. He pointed. There's 2 more tunnels and entrances like this one, and I bet those lead to rail tunnels too. And up above, someone's built a little balcony so they can keep an eye on the mobs down below. So someone built this, Bobby said, and they wanted to be full of zombies? But why? I'd like to learn that myself, said Ben, but they're not going that way. Come on. He had a pickaxe. Let's go upstairs. Chapter 31. It was night on the surface and cloudy. It was visibly low and took them a moment to get their bearings.
Ben turned in a slow circle to get a sense of the surroundings, and he grasped. A mountain loomed ahead of them. Carved into the side of the mountain was a massive fortress. "Look at that," he said. "Look, oh, I'm looking," said Bobby. "You realize it's built over a zombie pit? Or maybe it's more of a zombie dungeon if it was the basement of a castle." "Oh," she smiled. "You think whoever lives there is locking up and keep people safe? Maybe they're determined to protect nearby villages, like a feudal lord." "I love the optimism," said Ben, "but something about the ominous stone edifice looming high above us feels a little menacing to me." Johnny growled, and Ben was going to joke of the growl of agreement. Then he realized that Johnny was growling in a specific direction and pulling his leaf. "What's up with the toothy toddler?" Ben asked. Ben slushed him. "There's probably somebody over there. I think they're watching us," she whispered. Ben squinted into a gloom. Bobby was right. He could just make out a silhouette up ahead. "Hello, we come in peace," he called, and he held up his empty hands, cascading a sideways glance at Johnny, who continued to pull on his lead. He muttered, "Most of us." The figure made no reply. Bobby tried next. "Do you know anything about who lives here?" She lifted her hand and pointed at the fortress, and in doing so, she let Johnny's lead slip over the grass. John didn't hesitate for a moment. He ran forward intent on attacking the stranger. Bobby called for him to come back, her voice cracking with panic. Ben wasn't sure whether he was more concerned that he'd eat somebody or that he'd smacked around and trying. Either way, both ran after him, determined to intercept him before he got into striking distance of the stranger, who remained eerily calm, standing in the ground, and the pint-sized zombie bore down on them. Ben saw as he drew closer, the figure wasn't a person at all. Someone had picked a jack-o'-lantern on top of a hay bale, then fixed wood posts to give the illusion arms and legs. "It's a scarecrow?" Benny said Bobby. "It's a trap," said Ben. His warning came too late. The ground disappeared from beneath their feet, and Ben, Bobby, and Johnny plunged off short distance into the bare stone room, dimly lit with a single lantern. A low growl sounded, and Ben said, "Do you say that again, Johnny?" "Ben," said Bobby. "That wasn't Johnny." Ben scrambled to his feet, just a creature lunged from the shadows. It was a zombie, a full-grown adult zombie that was grasping the hands and open mouth. Ben was getting well and truly sick of zombies. And then, before Ben could even blink, Johnny leapt forward, still free of his lead. The young zombie smashed into the older one, shoving it back before it could fall upon Ben. "All right, brother. Good save," said Bobby, and he closed the distance with her sword. She slashed at the hostile mob, stepping back whenever it swiped at her. Johnny tugged his legs, hampering the movement, and Bobby was able to destroy it without taking a single hit. Ben was watching an eerie scene without once having to lift his own sword. "You two definitely have a hang of that," Bobby sniffed at the rotten flesh left behind by the fallen zombie, as if considering its suitability for eating, but he stuck out of his tongue and turned away from the disgust. They're not so tough," Bobby said, "and there's no way one of them, but hundreds of zombies." Ben felt a thrill of dread as he remembered the look below. "You think this leads down to a dungeon?" he asked, noting a single downward sloping exit of their hole. "It must," Bobby said. "Zombies fall through the trap and end up in the pit. I bet there are a lot of these traps all over this area." "I bet you're right," said Ben. He hit his lip. "I should have recognized the trap right away. I fell for something similar back when Logan was training me. Only that trap was way worse than a hole in the ground." He gazed up at the night sky. "We can dig or climb right out of here. But if it had been filled with cobwebs," he shuddered. "Cobwebs," Bobby asked. "So how's about cobwebs? We were able to hack our way out of the ones we stepped in back in Savatown." "Webs are like zombies. They're fine at one at a time," said. "But when you're on your feet," he leaned against the dirt wall but followed a stack of cobwebs. "They're practically inescapable. Falling doesn't feel like the right word because you're moving so slowly, but you're helplessness. You're stuck in just drifting." I don't understand how this is part of your training," Bobby said. "Logan wanted to make a point," Ben explained. "It was a noob. He was making all kinds of stupid mistakes, and those mistakes put him at risk. So he wanted to prove a point," Ben sighed. "He set a trap, and I fell for it. It was like an endless chasm of webs in the dark. I felt like I was trapped there forever. And then the darkness started to recede, and I realized I was falling right into a pit of lava." Ben shuddered. "Every second I was in the web, I slipped closer to lava. I couldn't help any of it. I couldn't do nothing except scream for help over and over again." Bobby put her hands to her mouth. "Ben, that's awful. How cruel." Ben shook his head. "Logan was making a point. He wouldn't have let anything happen to me. He waited until the last minute. Then he stepped in to save me. All it took was a couple blocks of dirt placed over the lava, and I landed harmlessly on the ground. I still think it's cruel." "Maybe," Ben shrugged. "But I learned my lesson. It made me a better hero." "You've made me a better hero," said Bobby. "You taught me a lot. You never resorted to scare tactics and power trips to do it. You didn't think it'd make me feel helpless in order to inspire me." She frowned. "I know it's none of my business," she said, "but a Logan person sounds like a lousy teacher and a terrible friend and a rotten human being." "Well, I guess I don't have anything to compare him with," Ben said sadly. "Not a friend front, anyway." You do know," said Bobby, that he placed a hand on his shoulder. Johnny tried to bite at his shoulder, but his teeth clacked harmlessly in the iron armor. Then Ben assumed a gesture of affection. Then Bobby's hand suddenly squeezed. "Ben," she said, "do you know what this means?" What means?" "That story you just told me. That's why you're afraid of spiders." Her eyes went wide. "You associate spiders with webs, and webs was a traumatic experience that made you feel helpless and scared." Ben thought about that. "Yeah, you might have a point," he said. "On the other hand," he added, shuddering, "it could only be their beady little eyes." Bobby opened her mouth to say something, then suddenly stopped, gripping Ben's shoulder more fiercely. She suddenly shoved him back, knocking him prone. "What was that for?" he cried, and then saw the arrow protruding from the wall. Bobby had shown him the path just in time. I won't move if I was you," said a voice from high above. Ben didn't move, except to look up. Two figures loomed above, peering over the edge of the trapdoor. One of them was reloading his crossbow, and the other brandished a diamond axe in a sneer. Ben recognized them as Low Light, Flip, and Hatchet. "What are you doing in our trap?" said Hatchet. Her eyes darted at rotten flesh on the ground. "Did you destroy one of our zombies?" "The boss ain't gonna like that," said Flip, bouncing at his feet. "Does your boss want it with zombies?" Ben asked. "Well, they're so nosy," said Flip, and he took aim. Ben filled up with him. "Not nosy. Call it professional curiosity." "Professional?" echoed Hatchet. "Sure," said Ben. You say your boss wants zombies?" Ben put gently at his lead, and Johnny stepped out of the shadows. "Well, we've got a zombie right here." Chapter 32. Whatever Ben was up to, Bobby hated it. Hated it. Every big sister instinct that she would have was ringing an alarm. She didn't like those two heavily armed strangers. She didn't like Johnny using as a bargaining chip to meet their boss. And she didn't like the look of the fortress at her approach. Ben had been right. It was far too imposing and inviting. "Are those heads?" Bobby asked, aghast at the sight of a pair of zombie heads sitting atop us. "Welcome to Fort Rot," said Flip. "Hatchet chop, chop, chop," she said. "Don't fall behind now." Bobby turned to Ben. "It was a bad idea," she whispered. He whispered back, "Don't you trust me?" Bobby gave him a long, hard look. "I mean, sure," she answered. "Wow," Ben said. "You really had to think about that for a minute, didn't you?" Bobby scoffed and turned away. Trust was an easy word to throw around, but her brother's safety at stake. She had keeping both eyes open. The fortress was carved from the very mountain. It looked solid and imposing, but also very plain. There were no turrets or arched windows, and the entire structure was dull and monotonous gray. The only exception was a large hanging banner. It was red, and emblazoned upon it was an image of a fearsome black skull with two crossbones. Ben seemed to recognize it, but he didn't say anything about it. As they descended the stone staircase, Bobby saw a wooden porticus remained closed to them. "Hey, it's us," said Flip, and he banged against the gate. "Open up. We better not have wandered off," grumbled Hatchet. "I'm here," piped a voice from the bottom of the porticus. "1 second." The porticus lifted, and Hatchet ducked underneath it as soon as it was open. Flip waved Bobby and the others ahead of him. They entered a sort of courtyard. It was an artillery place, boxy and unadorned, with a manner of workstation bringing from the perimeter. There was a crafting table, a furnace, an anvil, and more. To Bobby, it looked more as someone had taken an entire village, moved everything from the warmth and beauty, shoved it in a single room. Seeing something new, Johnny tried to pull away, but Bobby was in a tight grip on his lead. Also, outside Johnny's reach, the boy who had been standing in porticus controls took a few steps back. This is unusual," said the boy. He was smaller than another two, younger in a simple leather armor and no visible weapons. "Zombies aren't supposed to come through this way. That's what the tunnels are for." Just twisted boy's helmet around, covering his eyes. "We know what the tunnels are for, you nerd. We dug them, didn't we?" The boy painstakingly realigned his helmet. "Then why?" "He's a special zombie," Ben said lightly. "There's all sorts of tricks. I'm guessing you're not the boss." Bib chortled. "That'll be the day. These are observation balconies," said the boy. Should I take them?" "We'll take them," said Hatchet. "You take this," and he handed over a small stack of loot. "It's slim pickings out there. I see why the boss wants you to move on." Bobby caught Ben's eye. These had to be people who had been gathering up every available source, and that meant had to have gold. But would they be part of it? Somehow she doubted it. The boy pressed the button, and the porticus dropped back into place, and he noted a nearby chest. "Don't forget." "We won't forget," said Hatchet, clearly annoyed. We stomped over the chest and opened it aggressively and placed a diamond axe inside. Flip did the same with his crossbows, then gestured to Bobby and Ben. "We'll hold on to ours if that's okay," said Ben. Hatchet gave him a dirty look. "That's not okay," she said. "Price of admission to see the boss," said Flip. Bobby felt a tangle of anxiety. She didn't like the idea of being defenseless amongst all these strangers. "Maybe we ought to meet your boss another time," she suggested. "Find neutral territory somewhere." "Out there?" said Hatchet. "It's all Ravager territory as far as the eye can see." "And we're the Ravengers," said Flip. "That means you're either our guests or you're our trespassers," he glowered at them. "Guests leave their weapons out temporarily. Trespassers have their stuff permanently confiscated." "Guess it is," Ben said happily. He dropped his bow and sword into the open chest. Bobby glared at him and did the same. "Trust me," he mouthed. He resisted the urn to open and stop his foot onto his foot. "Were those iron swords?" Hatchet chortled. "You might as well have been held on to them. We have a hard time cutting wheat with those things." "Yeah, well," Bobby said, annoyed. "Resources have been hard to come by out there." "I see why I say," Hatchet said, turning back to the young gatekeeper. "Slim pickings." Leaving the boy to catalog the organize their loot, Hatchet and Flip led Bobby to the others up a long, winding staircase with their basic windows. Just empty spaces. Really, looking more like the overworld, it was just too dark outside for Bobby to see much. Inside, an abundance of torches illuminated every corner. Bobby grumbled and swiped at more than one burning torch as they passed. They didn't take a staircase all the way up to the top, instead exiting into a stony hallway aligned with doors. "Are these the living quarters?" asked Bobby. She was never in stony silence. Ben leaned over and whispered, "Nice place, but the tour leaves something to be desired." A second spiral staircase led down. This one seemed to be interior space, perhaps going right into the center of the fortress. There were no windows either. The staircase and hallway to which it led. This hallway ended up in an open, arched doorway. Their captors paused for it. "I'll wait here and keep an eye on them," said Hatchet. "You fill them in." and Stout scoffed. I'll wait here until you fill him in. A moment of silent tension passed between them. Bobby half expected them to settle the matter with a fist fight. It was why they were expected to leave their weapons at the door. In the end, Bobby couldn't say what precisely had passed between the stare contest, but only an impasse had settled. Flip broke eye contact, grumbled "Fine," and stormed through their archway. Ben winked at Bobby. She could almost hear him thinking, watch this. He sat up next to Hatchin and said, you shouldn't let him push you around like that, especially not in front of, guests. Hatchin gave him a dirty look. Mind your own business, she said, and held up his hands in an exaggerated surrender. Throughout all of this, Bobby kept her brother close, with both hands gripped tight on his lead. She watched the strangers with interest, and she feared that slipping her grasp again he would attack. That he wasn't certain, however, his interest might be in his mindless hunger. But she thought there was something else in his eyes, something that was curiosity he used to show around others before he was transformed. He was still in there somewhere. She was only more convinced as time went on. Flip returned a gesture for him to enter. Bobby let Ben go ahead of her, so she would keep Johnny between them. She gasped and crossed out the hallway into the balcony. It didn't overlook the exterior of the castle. As Bobby had expected, the boy caught the observation balcony after all. But the balcony overlooked the zombie pit. From his vantage, the sheer number of undead was more overwhelming than contemplate. She could scarcely see the ground past the crush of shambling green bodies. Anyone who fell into the pit would land right on top of a zombie. Anyone who fired an arrow below land right on top of a zombie. Anyone who fired an arrow below would be certain to hit one. That's what the boss was doing, firing arrows indiscriminately into the crowd. Bobby watches one arrow lodge into a zombie's shoulder. The mob, confused and enraged, lashed out of the empty air, unable to understand where the attack came from. Bobby had no love for zombies, but toying with them like this seemed cruel. She would never expected nothing else from the boy on the balcony. However, she recognized his face as easily as recognized his cruel laughter. It was a stranger who had come to Playtown, the one who had set Hard Oak aflame. What was he doing there? How had he gathered all these zombies? And why was he embracing Ben like an old friend? Ben, he cried, drawing another boy loose. Wow, I never thought I'd see you again. Same here, said Ben. What's new, Logan? Chapter 33. Logan, said Bobby, and she stepped forward, putting herself between her brother and the voice. This is Logan? The stranger, Logan, grinned. I'm guessing Ben here hasn't said nice things about me, but I'm glad to see him again, and it's nice to meet you. So you don't remember me, she said. Seriously? You set my village on fire. Logan chuckled. You have to be more specific, am I right? He said, elbowing Ben. Heh, said Ben weakly. Bobby didn't do it on purpose, but she didn't lose her grip on Johnny's lead. But as he felt her slipping from the ground, she didn't react quickly as she could have. In an instant, Johnny pushed past her and lunged at Logan. The boy shrieked, jumping back, and to Bobby's astonishment, pulling Ben in front of himself like a shield. Ben put his hands out in an attempt to mollify Johnny. Hey, buddy, he said. It's all right. As Johnny approached, Ben eased his hands into Johnny's shoulders, and Bobby's brother calmed down. There, that's it. Logan's a fret. Well, Logan isn't for eating. Ben looked up and lead and then handed over to Bobby. Drop something? He asked as his eyes were accusing. Thanks, Bobby said, accepting the lead in uninvited but heavily implied scolding. Ben was right. That would have been dangerously irresponsible if Logan had gone for a weapon instead of retreating. How did you do that? Asked Logan. He stepped forward. Johnny growled, and Logan stayed there where he was. You actually train a zombie? He asked, as all in his voice. Nothing of your business, said Bobby. At the time, Ben said, we'll tell you all about it. Ben and Bobby traded glares. We have some questions for you, actually, Bobby said to Logan. All right, that's fair, Logan shrugged. Why don't you two join me for dinner? We'll make a game of it, he grinned. An answer for an answer. We'll take turns. A dining hall was an unaborted space, devoid of color and comfort. There was lanterns for light and furnaces for cooking, and dark windows that were likely provided a scant view of the surrounding landscape during the daylight hours. That's for aesthetic enjoyment. Bobby imagined that for defensive purposes, everywhere she looked, was she reminded her she was not home, but in a fortress. So who was Logan at war with? You almost got me, said Logan. The old wither rose in the treasure chest chick? And she shook his head and chuckled. I would have seen that coming. Well, you wouldn't have any trouble if you hadn't robbed me while I was sleeping, Ben said, apparently failing to see any humor at it. Logan chuckled again. Guilty as charged, but to be honest, are you mad I took your stuff, or are you mad that I did it before you could do it to me? The first one, Ben said happily. Why would I even think of doing that to you? We were partners. That was the whole issue, said Ben. This world's not made for partners, Ben. It was too much wealth for grabs. Well, somebody's got to grab it, eventually. Problem with the steak? Bobby realized he belatedly had the question but directed to her. Huh? She said, looking from the table. Your steak. You haven't touched it, said Logan. It wasn't your first question, Bobby asked, and she chortled. Clever, said Logan. But no, I don't actually care. Eat the steak or don't. I promise it isn't zombie meat, though, if that's what you're thinking. You're too valuable for that. Bobby's eyes flitted up to Johnny, who stood across the room where he was keeping them in view. She didn't like the idea that her brother had a value in his creep. While it might keep Johnny safe from destruction than he'd otherwise be, it was all too obvious that Bobby had Logan in person willing to steal anything for value he could get his hands on, and he wasn't a very good boss either. When Hatchin and Flip had shown up for dinner, Logan had chased them off, telling them to find themselves for the night. Neither of the mercenaries had liked that. Hatchet had glared at Bobby as if she'd purposely stolen her place, but they hadn't argued, instead sulking off to the fortress interior. The other boy, the younger one, had been in charge of cooking. He had fit into one furnace to another, attempting to prepare all three steaks simultaneously. Bobby had expected he'd been making a fourth meal for himself. Instead, he had immediately begun baking their dessert. He stood at the furnace now, keeping clear of Johnny's range. "I'll let you two leave the first question," Logan said, "since you're guests and all." Bobby knew they precisely wanted to ask. She opened her mouth to speak. Then Ben blurted out, "What did you do with all my stuff?" Bobby looked at him aghast. Was it really what they needed to learn? Bobby crossed his arms. "You know, I had a feeling you wanted it all back, but I might Squire gather it up." "Squire?" said Ben. "Yeah, sure. Squire, quartermaster, gatekeeper, cook. Ben does a little bit of everything around here." At first, Bobby thought Logan had gotten their names mixed up, but then the boy in the furnace turned around and waved. "Hi," he said. "I probably should have introduced myself before. I'm Ben." Ben gaped like a fish. Finally, he said, "You're not Ben, I'm Ben." The boy, also Ben, other Ben, shrunk a little and said, "Sorry." Bobby rolled her eyes. "You don't need to apologize for him," she said firmly. But then Ben's focus was entirely on Logan. "You replaced me with another Ben?" Logan cackled, nearly amused by no end to this. Bobby could think that Ben's emotional reaction was feeding Logan's desire to push the buttons. Logan liked to see people squirm, didn't he? "All right, look," said Logan. "I made a mistake. That's what I wanted here. I thought I'd be better off alone, but I was wrong. Being alone without there much work." He leaned back in the chair. "When I came across Hatchet and Flip fumbling around a couple of lost, directionless kids, I figured out the solution. Not a partnership, but a gang, and a clear hierarchy. He recruited Ben, too, a little bit after that. Promised to train him, toughen him up in exchange for his services. If Ben, too, objected to the new nickname, he didn't voice it. He would just pointed his chest across the room and said, 'I put all the items you asked for in the chest, sir.' He then turned back to his furnace. 'Go ahead, Ben 1. Logan looked. "Your stuff's right over there." Ben 1 gave Logan a long look, as if suspecting some trick, and then he stood and walked over to the chest. He made a show of checking for traps. Finally, content for the chest was safe, he opened the lid and started sorting through the contents. "My arrows," he said, "and my pickaxe, and it's here." Leaping to his feet, Ben held a gleaming diamond sword to the sky, striking a pose like an action hero. "Anthropox," he cried. "Scourge of spiders, smiter of silverfish." Bobby was anxious, impatient, and genuinely annoyed, but she found herself smiling at the sight of Ben's joy. Then her eyes kept to Logan, and she noticed how intently he was watching, not just Ben, but Johnny, too. "How'd you train him?" asked Logan. "The zombie boy." So that's why he had Ben's things ready for him. He wanted a chance to observe what would happen to Ben and got close to Johnny. Bobby had no interest in telling Logan anything, but Ben pressed her. "It's only a fair answer," Ben said, and he handed her a diamond pickaxe. "I mean, look at that. Quality craftsmanship," he winked. "Keep it. I've got all these cool arrows, too. One of these makes you invisible, one that lets you breathe underwater." "Not now, Ben," Bobby said. He turned to face Logan. "To answer your question, I trained him by treating him like a human being. You know, with love and respect. And lots of patience." She frowned. "I sort of doubt that you knew it'd be good at that." "Ouch," said Logan. "Still sour, the old tree." He pinned on the gaze. "Or did something else happen to your precious little village after I left?" "It's your turn to answer the question," said Bobby. "Happy to," Logan said lightly. "But let's move this to the roof. You've got to see the view," he smiled. "It's positively killer." Chapter 34. They followed Logan. Bobby tried to listen and showed them to the grounds, but her mind was racing. She paid attention, however, when Logan showed him to his menagerie of turtles. "For breeding purposes," he explained. "I don't know why, but zombies will go out of their way to stomp at turtle eggs," Logan chuckled. "So the eggs come in handy when you need to control which way a zombie's gonna go. Helps you hurt the horde, you could say." By this point, Bobby was nearly vibrating with anger. The more time she spent with Logan, the more her suspicions about him seeing the irrefutable. As she was right, they were dealing with a monster more terrifying than any zombie. Logan led them through the building up to another staircase, at last coming to a grand platform that stood across the fortress, and just below the pinnacle of the mountain. A great obsidian throne stood nearby, nestled in the crags. In the east, Bobby gasped at the sight of the sun rising over the ocean. "Nice view, right?" said Logan. He clambered atop the oversized blackstone throne. "Fit for a king, I'd say." "Is that what you're up to here?" asked Ben. "King of the zombies?" But Logan waved his hand dismissively. "The zombies are just a tool, a means to an end. The goal is the same as ways of loot." "Speaking of loot," said Ben, "there are a few things missing from the chest, some emeralds, some gold." Logan fiddled with the red-tipped scepter and then began to build into the wall beside her throne. "I'm rich now. I'm sure I can have Ben, too, scrounge up some emeralds for you." "Make it 8 ingots of gold and we'll call it even," said Ben. "And then we can all get out of your hair and make it get back to the count of your riches." "Hold on," said Logan. "You haven't heard my pitch yet." "Enough," said Bobby. "I'm sick of playing games, of more humoring you." He left the diamond pickaxe Ben had given her, wielding it like a weapon. Ben stepped in front of her to try to calm her down. She ignored him, keeping her eyes on Logan and sustaining his throne. "Logan, did you have anything to do with what happened in Plaintown?" Logan held up his hand. "Guilty as charged," he said guiltily. "Plaintown was our trial run." "What does that mean?" Bobby snarled. Sensing her distress, Johnny snarled too. Then Logan answered. He addressed Ben against her. "You remember what it was like, Benny? Long hours spent in the dark, digging at random for loot, then happening on a village by chance and hopping. That's something worth trading for or taking? Logan swept his arms out. What we needed was a system, a way to organize our plundering. It was never about plundering for me, Ben argued. Right, sure, Logan said. You can fool yourself with your little friend here, Ben, but you can't fool me. I know what payday as much as I do. His visage darkened. And I figured the ultimate payday, Ben, when I found a way to convert villages into a sort of farm for iron and make them work for me. Instead of just taking up space, it's actually sort of ingenious, he grinned. I've got his army of zombies, right? I send them to a village using tunnels so they sneak right past the defenses. The zombies cause a panic, and then the Ravagers step in and do what we do. Bobby felt sick. She swayed at her feet. She already suspected it, but now, confession, Logan had caused a zombie siege and wiped out the village. She'd done it on purpose. How could you, she breathed. How could you do something so brilliant, Ben said. Ben, Bobby said, appalled. He turned to her. I'm sorry, Bobby, but you gotta admit, it's a clever way of doing things. Set aside morality for a minute, he said. Put your personal feelings away and look at it objectively. I can't do that, she said. Our mortality is a part of us, Ben. You can't just switch off, or could he? Bobby's heart sank. He'd been sure that Ben was better than this. Part of her had known the truth, though, hadn't she? That why she hadn't told him he was lost in emeralds? I'm expanding, Ben, continued Logan. The truth is the operation's gotten a little big, and the Ravagers could use a little more help. Iron farms are more the wave of the future, and I intend to set up farms in interesting clients overseas. I could use someone like you on my team, Logan reveled Ben, with a very serious look, leaning forward to the obsidian phone. I need to know I can trust you, though. Of course you can trust me, said Ben. Not as long as you're with her, said Logan. He ran his hand along the scepter. You don't blame me. I've seen nothing but obstacle. She's been the one who's been stubborn. If he thought Bobby had been stubborn so far, he hadn't seen anything yet. He took a step forward, really pull him right off the throne of his. Then she noticed something. The scepters beside the throne was very familiar. It looked like the switch they'd seen in the tunnel. What had Ben called it? Ben, is that? Bobby's question died at her lips. As she had to turn toward her friend, she saw something she never thought she'd see. Ben was aiming an arrow at her. Ben, she said, what are you doing? I'm sorry, Bobby, he said. Really, it's been fun, but I just can't offer, I just can't refuse. Don't do this, Ben, Bobby pleaded. I know you know things of his friend, but you aren't blind. But you can see how cruel he is, can't you? She shook her head. Maybe you think you deserve his cruelty. Maybe you think you can fix him. I don't know. She leveled with a steely look. But I'm telling you that you deserve better than this. What are you better than this? And that together, you and me, she smiled, we can stop everything that's happening here. We can make a world better instead of just trying to make the richest, fiercest survivor. I'm sorry, Bobby. I promise you. This isn't personal, Ben assured her, and pulling the bowstring taut. Well, I guess this is a little personal. You did shoot me with an arrow the first time we met. Ben, think about this. But Ben didn't stop to think. He let the arrow fly. It struck Bobby in the shoulder, knocking her back. She dropped Johnny's lead. She tried to keep her balance, but she fell off the edge of the cliff, and she didn't stop falling until she splashed into the ocean. Chapter 35. When Bobby opened her eyes, she was deep underwater. This is not what she meant when she said she wanted to see the ocean. Her heart felt a chaotic whirl of emotion. She was angry and confused. She was hurt in more ways than one. But she was in awe, too, at the sight that greeted her. An alien landscape spread below her, like a desert covered in a hazy blue fog, with long swaying strands of sparse grass and little green tubes that follow an inner light. A school of colorful fish swam up to her, curious, and then she reached out to touch one of them and darted away. One fish riddled with spines and started all the movement, puffed up in epic proportions. In the distance, a multi-armed squid drifted lazily. It looked like it was flying. Bobby forgot her anger and her worry. The world was so big, but it didn't make her feel small. It made her feel like there were so many possibilities for her and that there were stars in the sky. But every possible future started getting Johnny back. She wouldn't let Logan and Ben use her brother as a tool to hurt others. Bobby gritted her teeth, pulling Ben's arrow from his shoulder. She decided then and there that she'd make them eat the stupid glowing sword of his. She'd regret the combat lessons he'd given her, and that was for certain. She began swimming for the surface, but then thought of it. Logan and Ben probably assumed she was dead, and why disabuse them of that? She didn't seem to have anything trouble holding her breath, so she took a moment to consider her options. What if she dug her way to safety? Bobby swam to sheer rock wall and started digging, and the water slowed her swing somewhat, but all the same the diamond pickaxe made short work of the stone. She carved a narrow tunnel forward, and then up. By the time she felt the need to take a breath, there was out of water and lost, somewhere, deep underground. But she was alive, and she had a mission. I'm coming for you, Johnny, she said, and if I have to go through a tragedy to get you, then that's what I'll do. It was late morning by the time she made it to the surface. Rather than rush in to save Johnny, which was desperately wanted to do, she decided to play it smart. Ben told her that the battles were won in intelligence, not swords. Just as she'd watch and learn the attack patterns of creepers, zombies, and slime, she would benefit from watching Logan's fortress at a distance, striking only when the moment was right. At dusk, she finally saw what she'd been waiting for. The gate opened and Logan's cronies appeared, leaving on their nightly errand to check on Logan's traps and round up any zombies they could find. As soon as they were out of sight, Bobby made her move, staying out of view in the main gate, hacking her way into the fortress from the far side of the mountain. As she stalked the Spartan hallways of the Logan's fortress, she took a grim pleasure in the irony. This time, she was invading his home, and she helped herself to all his stuff. She found a chest in an empty bedroom. It was booby-trapped. When taught her to look for, she avoided the trap, taking the TNT that had been rigged to blow, as well as the various valuables she found inside the chest. She didn't even have to use for most of it, but depriving Logan was reason enough. After a few more rooms, a few more booby-trapped chests, Bobby found Ben, sleeping silently by one of many identical bedrooms. She closed the door behind her and kicked him out of the bed. "Slime balls," he said, rubbing his eyes from sleep. And then, to Bobby's surprise, he smiled. "Thank goodness," he said. "I spent half the day looking for you," Bobby declared at him. He fidgeted nervously. How are you? You look good. All that iron really brings out the steely resolve in your eyes." "Save it," said Bobby, and she shoved her sword under his chin. "The only thing I want to hear from you is where I can find Johnny." Ben raised his arms and looked nervously at the bait. "He's perfectly safe. He's in a pit with all the other zombies." "He's safe?" Bobby said, unamused. "Surrounded by zombies. They won't hurt him. I watched them to be sure. He only seems to fight other zombies when you're endangered by them." Ben swallowed hard. "That's why I shot you. It was the only way I could have saved you both." "My hero," Bobby said. "Honest, didn't you see the redstone torch? The one by Logan's throne? The one hand on her blade, gently pushing it away. We're on a trap door the whole time. You, me, and Johnny. If I had played along, and if I had instead done everything he wanted, we would have been tumbled down into that pit. So instead of falling into zombie pit together, I took surprise swim all by myself," Bobby said. "I'm lucky I didn't drown." "It wasn't luck," Ben said. "Didn't you notice how long you were able to stay underwater without breathing? Didn't you think that was weird?" Bobby narrowed her eyes. "What are you getting at?" "I shot you, yes," he said. "But I shot you with one of my special arrows. It was tipped with a potion of water breathing." Then she shook his head. "I hated to do it, but I knew you'd be okay. And now, because of that, Logan trusts me. I can sabotage him from the inside." Bobby finally lowered her sword. "So he bought it?" "Yes," said Ben. "Unfortunately, so did Johnny. Your brother didn't take kindly to low display, so he ended up with a pit, and I ended up having breakfast with Logan." Ben gazed off with a wistfully. "Cake for breakfast. You would have loved it, I'm sure." The conversation was dreadful, though. "He's done here, Bobby. He wiped away every village within 50,000 blocks." Ben clambered to his feet. "He's taken his army and marching east." "East?" echoed Bobby. "But east of here is the ocean," Bobby finished. "He's going off the edge of the map. He's going to find a whole new continent to plunder. The world was so big," Bobby remembered, "full of mystery and adventure, and it should stay that way. We have to stop him," she said. "Yeah," Ben said. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. The obvious solution is to destroy his army of zombies, but how to do that, I don't know." "Would this help?" Bobby asked, and she out one of her recently acquired blocks of TNT. "Careful with that," said Ben, and he flinched, and then he made a smile across his face. "All the zombies in one place, minecarts that lead right to him, and some TNT?" He nodded. "I can work with that, but you'll have to get Johnny out of there. We'll need time to it all perfectly." "Wait a minute," said Bobby. "So my part of the plan is to walk into a pit full of hundreds of zombies in the moments where the whole place blows up and find one zombie we want safe?" "Yeah, it'll be easy to find," said Ben. "He's the shortest zombie there by far." "That actually makes him harder to spot," Bobby argued. "And I'll stick to the blue out like a blue axolotl. If not, if you're invisible." Bobby grinned. "You'll have potions of invisibility?" "Well," said Ben, "sort of." He held up an arrow. Bobby's smile fell away. "And you get out of alive, we have to brew some normal potions." Chapter 36. Bobby had 5 arrows tipped with invisibility plus. That meant she had exactly 5 minutes of invisibility. 5 minutes to find her favorite zombie in the sea of hundreds. 5 minutes before the explosion started, and Logan's arms was reduced to ashes and rotten flesh. Bobby removed her iron armor, unnecessarily risking an invisibility effect to work, and waited at the top of Logan's platform. From there, she would have perfect view of the moment the sun peaked above the horizon. That would be a signal to begin. In the meantime, Bobby turned to consider Logan's massive obsidian throne. It was an ugly thing, and it captured his despotic spirit almost too well. And had Ben said that obsidian was useful? She pulled out a diamond pickaxe he'd lent her, and she smiled. Logan's throne would make a fine souvenir. She stashed the last piece of obsidian in her inventory, and the sun appeared. It was time. Bobby drank a potion. Ben had snuck down to the castle's courtyard and brewed it just for her. And then she activated a redstone torch. The powder dropped out from beneath her, and a potion of slow falling she just guzzled ensured the gentle descent into the pit below. As she drifted lower, the crusher zombie drew near. Bobby couldn't help but thinking of Ben's traumatic story. Just as he'd been stuck in the web, sinking over ever so slowly towards certain death, Bobby found her anxiety growing as she neared the end of the descent. A moment before she touched down, she prickled herself with an arrow, disappearing from view. The monstrous mobs were wandering aimlessly, bouncing off the walls and into each other, waiting for a moment when Logan would send them loose against the unsuspecting world. They didn't know what she was there. A part of her was feared they'd smell her, sense her somehow, but she was safe to move among them, and she moved quickly and carefully, not wanting to touch them, but needing to cover a lot of ground. But she was looking for Johnny. It wasn't long before she found his familiar face. It was Johnny's face. Oh, it wasn't Johnny's face, however. "Cleric Avery?" For a moment, Bobby forgot that she was in mortal danger. A shock of seeing her old neighbor was enough to make her blurt out his name, alerting them momentarily to her presence, but then turning toward her, seeing only empty air. Cleric Avery continued on their way. That was lucky, because Cleric Avery was a zombie. It was all twisted sort of senses of Bobby. The tunnels leading from the pit, the ones that ran beneath villages, including her own. They weren't just to get zombies into the villages, they were to get zombies out, too. That's how Logan was growing his army so much, and a handful of capable zombies. But once the zombies had infected villagers, their numbers grew, and the more villagers they attacked, the larger the force became. She saw Farmer Briar in the crowd, too. The entire village was there. Her neighbors, her friends, her parents, all constricted into Logan's vile service, forced into the bidding of the boy who'd betrayed them. Bobby's invisibility wore off. Just quick as lightning, she pricked herself with a new arrow. 1 minute and was already gone. In 4 more minutes, Ben's explosions would destroy Logan's army, including everyone Bobby had ever known. Chapter 37. Bobby had to act fast if she was going to thwart Ben's plan. There was no way she could reach them in time. The explosions. She could stop the explosions. Probably. Maybe. There's 3 tunnels leading to the pit. 3 directions in which Ben was to be spending minecarts full of TNT. This plan had been started at the south tunnel and worked its way around to the north. So that's where Bobby had to start too. She ran as fast as she could, getting dangerously close to zombies as she went. They startled and growled when she got too close. Suspicious of an intruder was among them, and she remained invisible and on the move with their grasping arms found only empty air. It was reckless, but what choice did she have? She used the 3rd arrow. She had 3 minutes left to save them all. In the othermost tunnel, she paused only a moment before deciding the course of action. Stone wouldn't be enough to block the blast created by an oncoming minecart, but obsidian would be strong enough to do the job. She blocked off the tunnel, then ran toward the next one. Arrow 4 of 5 extended her visibility for a minute. And she saw zombified Shepherd Ellis in the crowd, and it squared her on, pushing her to move faster than ever. The pit was so large, even though she was running at reckless clip, the sheer mass of zombies slowed her down. By the time she plunged a second tunnel of obsidian, her invisibility was already wearing off. She did the math. She couldn't make it to the final tunnel in time. She was 2 out of the 3 good enough. A single explosion wouldn't destroy many of the zombies, but it would destroy some, whichever poor souls happened to be in the vicinity of the northern tunnel. What if her brother was there? Or her parents? The other answer came to her just pulled the 5th and final arrow of visibility from her inventory. Couldn't stop the explosion. She needed to get the zombies away from it. For that, she needed bait. She let the 5th arrow drop to the ground, unused. She quickly donned her iron armor, tapping her helmet for luck. And then she took a deep breath. "Hey, zombies," she shouted. "Come and get me." It worked. Every zombie in the pit was instantly moving toward her direction. It was like the siege at her village all over again, but exponentially worse. The sheer number of zombies was panic-inducing. She kept her back to the wall and focused on her combat training, staying on the defensive, knocking the mobs back whenever they stepped into range. But she was at a disadvantage, and not only because there was outnumbered, she feared hitting any single zombie more than once, worried about doing any permanent damage to anyone she might be curable. And then that she was struck by an arrow. "Ow!" she cried, and she scanned for the pit for a source of attack. There's a skeleton hiding among the zombies. She saw a second arrow in time to duck it. The projectile came out of the horde, but from above. She looked up to see Logan seething at her on the balcony. "How are you still alive?" she said, once through clattering teeth. "How do you think you're doing down there?" He didn't wait for an answer, firing off a 3rd arrow instead. Bobby dodged it, but stepped right into the swiping claws of a near zombie. Her survival had already been unlikely, now it seemed impossible. Her rhythm was off, and she couldn't help but avoid raging melee attacks at the same time. She took another hit, and then another. The armor helped, but not nearly enough. It took only a soak-up of the damage. The cold dread settled into Bobby's heart. She knew she couldn't hold out much longer. Then came the explosion. The north side of the pit erupted in fire and smoke. The zombies turned toward the commotion, distracted, and so did Logan. Bobby tried to slip away. Too slow. The nearest zombies pressed in on her. They grasped her, they bit, they tore. She pushed herself against the wall so they couldn't come at her in every direction, but she was overwhelmed by sheer numbers, and worse, with the knowledge that she had failed in saving zombies and she had only guaranteed to remain in Logan's clutches. So really, she hadn't saved anyone. Through the horde, she could see Logan leering at her from above. He made no effort to help her. There was no reason she would think he would, but somehow Bobby found Callus in action more horrifying than the zombies themselves. The undead mobs were only remaining true to their nature, and that would twist a person and make them so monstrous. Suddenly, Logan lurched backward. An arrow had lodged itself in his shoulder. A look of fury settled into his face. "Traitor!" he cried. "What do you think you're doing?" The zombies closest to Bobby were knocked aside, and all of a sudden Ben was standing before her. "I'm doing the right thing," Ben said, and then the words were disrespected about Logan. His eyes were on Bobby. "What happened?" he asked her, and he quickly faced fences around, giving them enough breathing room. "That wasn't the plan. Be careful with that story," he warned him. "Some of these zombies are my friends." He let a brief laugh. "I knew you were a zombie lover." Another explosion rang out, and the entire fortress seemed to tremble. "What was that?" cried Logan. "That was your bedroom," Ben called up to him. "If you hurry, you might be able to salvage some of your loot. The stuff I didn't steal, I mean." Ben grimaced. "This isn't over," he said. "You'll both be sorry." He glared at them from above. "You know I always get even." He turned and then ran off. Bobby frowned. "I think you brought that us some time," she said. But you think you didn't exactly break the style of plundering? I know, messing with this stuff wasn't part of the plan, Ben shrugged. I had some extra TNT and a grudge, and it didn't make me a bad guy, does it? Before Bobby could answer, a pint-sized zombie leaped into the throng, landing on Ben's back, tearing out his hair. Johnny, said Bobby. Ouch, cried Ben. This is flesh-crazed toddler off me. Okay, Johnny, it's okay, said Bobby. She pulled her brother off, continual kicking and punching at the air. Then Ben's general direction. He's our friend. He didn't actually hurt me much. Ditto, Ben said, rubbing his head. Now can you please let me out of here? The zombies pressed against the fence, gnashing their teeth and slamming their fists against the frail wood. And otherwise, I'm going to end up with your zombie friend's terrible case of indigestion. And I don't know if I wouldn't like that. They cut their way through stone, looping around in one of the tunnels they would block off the obsidian. The TNT had done massive damage, but Ben was able to repair the redstone mechanism with Bobby crafted a couple minecarts, which he placed on the rails beyond the blast zone. Ben, I have a confession to make, said Bobby, and she lowered her brother into one of the carts. The fee I promised you. I can't pay. I left the emeralds in the chest back where in the mining gold. Yeah, I know, said Ben. Bobby was shocked. You knew? How? Ben shrugged. I was keeping an eye on you. I saw you stash them there. And you stayed anyway? Bobby smiled. You could have left us, but you didn't, even knowing I couldn't pay you. She threw her arms around him. Oh, I knew you were a good person. Yeah, well, said Ben. I guess I have a confession to make, too. He held up an emerald. Once I saw you stash the emeralds, I sort of held myself to them. Bobby's jaw dropped. You jerk. Hey, Ben said. Hold on, your original point still stands. I could have left you two at any point. I already gotten paid. I guess that's true, said Bobby grudgingly. Ben held off his arms with another hug. So it's all forgiven? Sure, said Bobby, and she shoved him hard against the knocked him into an empty minecart next to Johnny's. Ben laughed, and he saw Bobby put her hand on a redstone torch. Bobby, he said carefully, what are you doing? You're the only one I could trust to keep him safe, he answered. We'll keep him safe together, Ben insisted. Bobby shook her head. Beard glistened in her eyes. Logan's not going to stop, Ben. He's going to take everyone I care about away, across an ocean, and use them to hurt other people. I have to find a way to stop him, to save everyone. She wiped away a single tear. But I can't keep putting Johnny in danger. He needs to stay far, far away from Logan. You both do, Ben argued. You don't know him like I do. He's dangerous. That's why I have to do this, Ben, she said. And then she activated the switch. Bobby, stop, cried Ben, and the minecarts pulled away. Johnny growled mournfully. I'll take care of each other, she called back. Don't stop looking for a cure. I'll see you both again one day. She let herself watch, just for a moment, as Ben and Johnny sped away into the darkness. And then she turned her attention back to the task at hand. Her villager had been destroyed. There was still a chance to save her people who had lived there. And in the end, wasn't able to make it home. Not a place, but the people. Home wasn't lost to her. She wasn't in her past. It was ahead of her. And she would do anything to save it.